Chapter 121. Chapter 121. First and foremost, as a Dark-type Pokémon, Sneasel had a critical advantage in battle as it was immune to Psychic-type moves, making it a formidable opponent when facing Psychic-type Pokémon. Moreover, it had resistance against Ghost-type, Ice-type, and other Dark-type Pokémon. However, it was important to note that Sneasel was not well suited to lead the team as an attacker. Its low defense and HP meant that it was more vulnerable to attacks from its opponents. But, when it came to breaking down the defenses of the enemy, Sneasel was a valuable addition to the team. For example, when facing Psychic-type or Dragon-type Pokémon, Sneasel was especially effective at taking them down. With its agility and quick movements, it could easily dodge their attacks and deliver swift blows to knock them out. Sneasel was a natural-born assassin and hunter, with a personality that was both cunning and fierce. It was the epitome of an assassin-type Pokémon, with high attack and speed, but low defense and HP. This made it a powerful attacker when used strategically. Even after evolving into Weevil, its innate skill set was not reduced but only amplified, making it an even more formidable force to be reckoned with. From the moment it was born, Sneasel's growth path was predetermined, with its strengths and weaknesses already clearly defined. This particular Sneasel had a habit of pilfering the eggs of wild Pokémon, often creating a small opening in the egg with his claws to savor the contents. Recently, he had developed a particular fondness for Miltank's milk, drawn in by the aroma and slightly milky scent that reminded him of his favorite food. No, the taste was even better. For the past couple of days, Sneasel had kept his eyes firmly fixed on Cain and his Pokémon, carefully watching them from the shadows, biding his time and waiting for the right moment to make his move. His cautious nature had been honed from years of surviving in the wild, and he knew that it was always best to remain hidden and observe from a distance. Thanks to his innate stealth and deviousness, coupled with his dark attribute, Sneasel remained undetected by slowpoke psychic probes. As Cain and the others finally made their appearance, Sneasel's ears pricked up, and he turned to face them, the milk bottle now hidden safely behind his back. His fierce gaze made it clear that he wasn't going to give up his newfound treasure without a fight. Cain couldn't help but chuckle at Sneasel's protective behavior, but he knew better than to underestimate the Pokémon. Pokémon. Sneasel. Light blue. Gender. Male. Level. 25. Type. Dark plus ice. Ability. Keen eye. Held items. None. Egg moves. Bite. Ice punch. Ice shard. Icicle crash. Basic moves, scratch, leer, taunt, quick attack, feint attack, icy wind, fury swipes, agility, metal claw, hone claws. Taunt moves. Knock off, snatch, low kick. Technical machines. TMs none. Cain's eyes widened with excitement as he examined Sneasel's impressive stats. In fact, what truly captured Cain's interest were the 3 inherited ice-type moves that Sneasel possessed. As a seasoned Pokémon trainer, Cain knew that this was a sign of exceptional talent, indicating that Sneasel's parent or parents were likely highly skilled in the ice attribute. With a mischievous grin on his face, Cain called out to Sneasel, his voice brimming with excitement. Come and fight, Sneasel. If you lose, you become my Pokémon. Though his words may have sounded childish, Cain knew that this was a serious battle. As a natural-born assassin and expert hunter, Sneasel was the perfect candidate for Cain's Pokémon hunter identity. He knew that with Sneasel by his side, he would have a much easier time catching any Pokémon he set his sights on. Unlike in the game, where ice-type moves had no lasting effect, in reality, their impact could be significant. The energy of ice-type moves could reduce an opponent's speed and reaction time, making them easier to catch, and thus, increasing the trainer's chance of success. Sneasel was particularly skilled at reducing an opponent's speed while simultaneously boosting his own, making it nearly impossible for them to escape his grasp. In response to Cain's words, Sneasel emitted a fierce cry, readying himself to attack. Cain remained fully focused, closely observing Sneasel's actions, primed to act at a moment's notice. The instant Sneasel tried to flee, Cain commanded Miltank to use block, sealing off his escape route with her massive frame. Sneasel swiftly retreated, finding himself backed against the unyielding wall of the cave. In an instinctual move, he positioned himself to protect the milk bottle, his sole source of security. The wilderness was a harsh place, a constant struggle for survival, and Sneasel knew that all too well. Food was always on his mind, a nagging hunger that never quite went away. Miltank, watching Sneasel's desperate attempts to protect his meager meal, couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. It was a feeling she knew all too well, having been in similar situations herself. Cain, watching from afar, could sense the tension in the air. He knew he had to tread carefully if he didn't want to leave a bad impression on Sneasel. With a sly grin, Cain took out 2 bottles filled with milk from his ring and shook them in front of Sneasel, whose eyes locked onto the 2 bottles like a predator honing in on its prey. Sneasel, let's make a deal, Cain said, his voice smooth as silk. We'll fight. If you win, I'll give you these 2 bottles of milk. What do you think? As Sneasel stared at the bottles of milk, he couldn't help but feel conflicted. The scent of the sweet liquid wafted towards him, teasing his senses and tempting him to give in to Cain's proposal. But at the same time, he knew that accepting Cain's offer could mean giving up his freedom and becoming subservient to humans. Cain's words lingered in the air, making Sneasel fall into deep thought. He had once ventured into the human world, driven by his insatiable hunger, and had witnessed the plight of the Pokémon who were subdued and controlled by humans. He knew all too well the loss of freedom and independence that came with it. Despite the struggles of living in the wild, Sneasel knew that he couldn't adapt to a life of captivity. He cherished his freedom above all else, even if it meant facing constant hunger and uncertainty. But the 2 bottles of milk that Cain held in his hand were tempting, more tantalizing than anything he had tasted in a long time. Moreover, there was something peculiar about the energy infused within the milk that seemed to revitalize his body. Sneasel's inner conflict was palpable, his emotions and thoughts conveyed through the tense silence that hung between him and Cain. If someone had been watching from the sidelines, they would have seen a fierce struggle within the small Pokémon, torn between his primal instincts and his desire for something more. Chapter 122. Chapter 122. Cain's mind raced as he tried to strategize against the tricky Sneasel, since his current lineup of Pokémon seemed ill-equipped to handle it. As he pondered his options, his thoughts darted through the limited moves his team possessed. Only a few could inflict proper damage, including Murkrow's flying-type moves, Slowpoke's water-type moves, and Ghastly's poison-type moves. Miltank was the only one who remained unencumbered by Sneasel's attributes. Suddenly, he remembered Miracle Eye, a move that resets the opponent's evasiveness and removes the immunity of Dark-type Pokémon to Psychic-type moves. Cain had heard rumors of a quasi-elite trainer who could teach this move to all of their Psychic Pokémon. In his previous life, Cain had paid a hefty sum to learn this technique, hoping to train a powerful team of Psychic types. Unfortunately, before that could happen, he was killed and his plans disrupted. Luckily, his memories of his past life were still intact. Cain knew that if Slowpoke wanted to become a truly powerful Pokémon, it needed to learn Miracle Eye. This move would give it a fighting chance against Dark-type Pokémon, allowing it to be more assertive in battle instead of just relying on its Water-type moves for support. This battle against Sneasel served as a prime example of the dangers that can arise when a Pokémon lacks a well-rounded set of moves. Even with its multitude of weaknesses, Sneasel still posed a significant threat to any unprepared Pokémon. Sneasel! Sneasel eyed Cain's 2 bottles of milk with a mix of longing and apprehension. It knew better than to give in to temptation, but what other choice did it have? Miltank had already blocked its escape route, leaving Sneasel with few options. Cain watched as Sneasel carefully placed the half-drunk milk bottle on the ground and screwed the cap back on. Its actions spoke volumes about its resourcefulness and instinct for survival. Cain couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for the Pokémon. He saw a reflection of his own past struggles in Sneasel's eyes. As an orphan in a new world, Cain had faced similar challenges. The unfamiliarity of his surroundings and the constant sense of difference had almost overwhelmed him. He knew what it was like to fight for survival in a world that didn't always make sense. "Don't worry, little guy," Cain said softly. "I won't take your milk. I know what it's like to be on your own out here." Cain's past was not one he liked to dwell on. Before he was taken by Team Rocket for their trial, he had been forced to scavenge through garbage dumps just to find food. Surviving was his only goal. Becoming a trainer was a distant dream. But even in those harsh times, there were those who would steal from him. He learned to guard his food fiercely, just as Sneasel was doing now. Cain had seen the darker side of this world, the side that most people chose to ignore. He knew that the so-called beauty of the Pokémon world was just a facade, hiding the true essence of the world, a darkness that few could comprehend. But Cain refused to be deterred by his past. He was determined to control his own destiny, to become stronger and rise above the challenges that life had thrown his way. And that also meant subduing Sneasel, no matter the cost. Cain was willing to do whatever it took to win this battle. If Slowpoke couldn't do the job, he would bring in Murkrow and Miltank to tip the scales in his favor. But as he spoke, he could sense Sneasel's skepticism. It was understandable. Why would it believe someone who had just waltzed into its home and declared that he wanted to fight? "Milu," Miltank called out, trying to explain something to Sneasel. "Sneasel!" Sneasel waved its hand, interrupting Miltank. Although it had no ill will towards Miltank, and even felt a sense of closeness to her due to her distinctive odor, it was clear that Miltank was on their side. Sneasel didn't want to hear her out any longer. If they were going to fight, then let's fight. "Sneasel, Sneasel!" After deciding to fight, Sneasel approached Cain slowly, placing its 2 front paws in front of its chest. Its eyes were fixed on Cain's, cold and emotionless, like those of a predator ready to strike. Murkrow, Slowpoke, attack together, Cain commanded with a serious tone. However, before the 2 Pokémon could make a move, Sneasel charged forward with blinding speed, emitting a ZZ sound. Its front paws were glowing with a bright white light as the metallic sound of its claws scraping against each other echoed in the air. Sneasel had used Hone Claws, a move that increases the user's attack power and accuracy. Murkrow use Snatch, Cain commanded. If Sneasel's attack power was amplified, the battle would become even more challenging. Fortunately, Murkrow's prankster ability increased the priority of status moves. Combined with Snatch, Murkrow could steal the effects from Hone Claws even if Sneasel used it first. Traces of black light appeared around Sneasel's body. Then suddenly, the effects of Hone Claws vanished. Murkrow, follow up with Tailwind. Slowpoke, use Water Gun. Cain shouted. Murkrow flapped its wings, summoning a burst of wind energy. This time, it didn't suppress the effect of Tailwind around itself. Instead, it allowed Slowpoke to benefit from the speed boost as well. Unfortunately, Slowpoke wasn't a particularly fast Pokémon, and even with the speed boost, there wasn't much of a noticeable effect. Following Cain's orders, Slowpoke shot a jet of water from its mouth aimed directly at Sneasel. However, Sneasel was already prepared and deftly dodged the incoming attack before quickly closing the gap between them. Chapter 123. Chapter 123. Slowpoke, use Confusion to control Water Gun. Murkrow, go for a wing attack. Yadong. Slowpoke's eyes glowed a bright blue as it skillfully aimed and controlled the water gun. While psychic moves may not be effective against Sneasel, they certainly had their uses. Sneasel was caught off guard as the water gun was redirected back towards it, hitting its sturdy body with a powerful blast. Despite the attack being dampened by confusion, Sneasel still stumbled backward from the force of the hit. Murkrow took advantage of this and rushed forward, its wings enveloped in a burst of flying energy. Normally, a Pokémon that had lost its balance would not be able to dodge an attack from Murkrow, but Sneasel was no ordinary opponent. Its body flickered with black light as it moved with incredible agility, narrowly avoiding Murkrow's wing attack by using Quick Attack. Sneasel shifted its attention to Slowpoke, sensing an energy within that Pokémon that it did not like. Its instincts told it that as long as it managed to land a direct hit, it could cause significant damage to Slowpoke. Without hesitation, Sneasel charged toward Slowpoke, its eyes locked onto its target. Cain's expression grew serious as he watched Sneasel's lightning-fast movements. Murkrow, despite being a specialist in speed, couldn't keep up. Even with Tailwind, it seemed impossible to match Sneasel's agility. Murkrow, use Hidden Power. Slowpoke, go for a headbutt. Cain commanded, his voice firm. Murkrow was momentarily confused. If it used Hidden Power, wouldn't it also hit Slowpoke? However, it trusted Cain without question and quickly obeyed. A small, yellow energy ball infused with blue electricity materialized in front of Murkrow. Meanwhile, Sneasel had already lunged toward Slowpoke, its sharp fangs glowing with a black hue. It used a Dark-type move, Bite, which would typically inflict heavy damage on a psychic Pokémon like Slowpoke. But Slowpoke didn't flinch. Cain had instructed it to counterattack with a headbutt, and as his Pokémon, it trusted him completely. A strange energy emanated from Slowpoke's smooth, pink head, and it collided head-on with Sneasel's bite attack. Boom! The impact of the collision reverberated throughout the area, causing both Slowpoke and Sneasel to stumble back a few steps. Yadong! Slowpoke cried out, feeling the force of the blow. Out of the two Pokémon, Slowpoke had clearly taken more damage. Cain's face remained cold and expressionless. The damage sustained by Slowpoke was part of his plan. He had a bigger strategy in mind. Sneasel, having recovered from the initial blow, lunged forward to attack again. Despite the damage it had sustained, Sneasel knew that it had inflicted more damage on Slowpoke. Meanwhile, Murkrow had finished condensing Hidden Power in the air, and a bright yellow energy ball illuminated the entire cave. Sneasel was about to use Bite again when Cain spoke calmly. Slowpoke, use Protect. Murkrow, release Hidden Power. In unison, Sneasel used Bite, Slowpoke activated Protect, and Murkrow unleashed Hidden Power. Sneasel's Bite struck the green shield that represented Slowpoke's Protect, unable to break through its defense immediately. At the same time, Murkrow's electrically charged Hidden Power energy ball hit both Sneasel and Slowpoke at the same time. The attack exploded with a resounding boom, releasing a large amount of yellow and blue electrical energy. Thanks to Protect, Slowpoke was able to defend against both attacks without sustaining any damage. If it hadn't been for this defensive move, Hidden Power would have caused it significant harm, comparable to the damage inflicted by Sneasel's Bite. Sneasel, on the other hand, was not so fortunate. The center of the Hidden Power attack had struck it directly, sending it flying 3 meters away in the resulting explosion. Adding to its woes, its body was still wet from the previous water gun attack, magnifying the effects of the electric shock. Nevertheless, Sneasel quickly recovered from the impact and didn't waste a second. He channeled a light blue energy into his claws, manifesting ice shards in his hands. He flung them one by one towards Slowpoke, who was his primary target. Although the effects of an ice move were halved against a water-type Pokémon like Slowpoke, it was doubly effective against flying types like Murkrow. But with its incredible speed and agility, Murkrow would easily dodge the attack. Therefore, Sneasel aimed its attack at Slowpoke, hoping to eliminate one of Cain's Pokémon as soon as possible. However, there was one thing Sneasel didn't expect. Slowpoke, use hidden power. Murkrow, use feint attack and engage in close combat with Sneasel. Cain commanded. Surprisingly, as a water-type Pokémon, Slowpoke's hidden power was actually of the fire attribute. Before the ice shards could reach Slowpoke, they were quickly melted by the fire energy ball that condensed in front of Slowpoke. The shards melted into puddles of water, rendering the ice-type move useless. Meanwhile, Murkrow used feint attack to approach Sneasel. The latter looked at the energy ball in front of Slowpoke with fear, knowing that it was coming for him. Before he could react, he found himself entangled in Murkrow's grasp. With no time to use any moves, Sneasel and Murkrow engaged in a physical fight, trading blows and punches. Sneasel's attack power was stronger, but Murkrow's claws were sharper from the effects of Hone Claws. And just in time, Slowpoke's hidden power was ready to be unleashed. Without hesitation, Slowpoke launched the attack towards the entangled pair. "Sneasel!" cried Sneasel, sensing the approaching fire energy ball. He could feel the intense heat emanating from it, causing him to panic. However, Murkrow had him pinned down, leaving him with no means of escape. Sneasel couldn't make sense of what was happening. Was the human trainer sacrificing his Pokémon? Would they both perish together? However, Cain had an entirely different thought in mind. Protect sure is useful. Chapter 124. Chapter 124. Murkrow used Protect. Cain commanded as Slowpoke unleashed hidden power. Murkrow and Sneasel clashed, their bodies entangled as an energy ball hurtled towards them. Murkrow felt the scorching heat in the air and cried out, using its defensive move to shield itself. As an ice-type Pokémon, Sneasel was more sensitive to temperature changes than Murkrow. It felt the heat rising, and was already having difficulty withstanding its effects. In an instant, the energy ball exploded at the center of the battle, creating a violent blast. The cave's temperature rose, melting the surrounding ice, and the water in the center evaporated into vapor. The explosion also created a mist that filled the cave. Murkrow emerged unscathed and flapped its wings to disperse the smoke and steam. Sneasel's fur was slightly burnt, and it lay limply on the ground, seemingly unable to move. Cain looked at Sneasel and chuckled. "Don't pretend to be defeated. I know you still have some fight left. Get up." An ordinary trainer might think that Sneasel was out of the game, but Cain had been monitoring its condition through the AI system. He knew that despite reaching its limit, Sneasel could still launch another attack. Sneasel! Knowing that Cain had seen through its act, Sneasel stopped pretending and used its hands to support itself before standing up shakily. Cain looked at Sneasel's unsteady state and grinned happily. He was thrilled to have the opportunity to catch such a strong-willed Pokémon. Sneasel's strength impressed Cain, but what pleased him more was its intelligence. As a wild Pokémon, using its brain was crucial for survival, and Sneasel had mastered this skill. Rest up, Sneasel. Slowpoke, use Yawn. Cain didn't want Sneasel to overexert itself in battle, as the impact of this fight could affect Sneasel's future growth. An oval-shaped bubble formed on Slowpoke's nose, slowly floating towards Sneasel. The bubble popped with a crisp sound, and Sneasel, whose body could no longer withstand the pressure, felt a wave of drowsiness wash over it. Its eyes felt as heavy as a mountain. Sneasel's body fell once more, and in its descent, it caught a glimpse of the half-drunk bottle of milk lying in the corner. A sense of disappointment washed over Sneasel, and it muttered, "My milk!" With a loud thud, Sneasel hit the ground, unable to fight any longer. Slowpoke's yawn was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Cain swiftly threw a great ball towards the fallen Sneasel, hitting it directly and enveloping the creature in a bright, flashing light. The Pokeball's energy beam drew Sneasel inside the ball, and the outer shell of the great ball snapped shut with a satisfying click. As the ball shook a few times, the middle button flashed with a red light before eventually stopping, indicating that Sneasel had been successfully caught. Cain made his way over to the dry, cracked ground, which bore some damage from the earlier explosion, and picked up the great ball containing Sneasel. This battle was a result of the perfect coordination between Murkrow, Slowpoke, and Cain's precise commands. Without Cain's leadership, even if Murkrow and Slowpoke were more potent, they might not have been able to defeat Sneasel, who had an attribute advantage over them. Despite their victory, Murkrow and Slowpoke were injured. Miltank provided fresh milk to replenish their strength, and Cain applied various types of medicine to heal their wounds and relieve their pain. He also gave them Pokeblocks to restore their energy. Thanks to the combination of these items, Murkrow and Slowpoke quickly recovered from their injuries. After attending to Murkrow and Slowpoke, Cain released Sneasel from the Great Ball. Sneasel had awoken, but its injuries prevented it from moving. Looking at Cain and his Pokémon surrounding it, Sneasel's eyes flickered with fear and hostility. Cain squatted down and didn't say a word. He took out his best medicine spray to treat the various burns, paralysis, and blood clots on Sneasel's body. Sneasel! The sight of Cain pulling out the medicine spray made Sneasel instinctively want to resist. However, the pain from moving caused it to fall back down. Don't move! Lie still! Cain said sternly and began treating the Pokémon's injuries. Sneasel's wounds were more severe than Cain had anticipated. He sprayed the medicine and used his expertise to help Sneasel recover quickly. At first, Sneasel was terrified, thinking that Cain was going to harm it. But soon, a cool feeling enveloped its wounds, and some of the formerly numb muscles regained their sense of pain. The cool sensation and the return of pain intertwined, making Sneasel understand the meaning of bittersweetness. Miltank approached Sneasel with a bottle of milk in hand and a straw sticking out. She placed the straw in Sneasel's mouth and gestured for it to drink. Sneasel recognized the familiar scent of milk and looked at Miltank, who smiled shyly. Its eyes wandered, and no one knew what it was thinking. After a moment's hesitation, the temptation of the milk proved too strong. Sneasel bit the straw and drank quickly. In that moment, Miltank seemed to glow with a divine radiance in Sneasel's eyes. What was that saying again? Ah, yes, the milk of the goddess of twilight. Chapter 125. Chapter 125. Sneasel was basking in comfort, his wounds tended to and his hunger satiated. Cain, on the other hand, was feeling drained from the long day. The skills of Pokémon trainers weren't to be underestimated. With their expertise in medical techniques, they could heal and bond with their Pokémon faster than any layperson. Cain had used these methods to treat Sneasel's injuries, and as a result, the scarring had minimized, and the pain subsided. Sneasel was now recovering at a rapid pace, and his small wounds had already vanished. After sipping on a bottle of milk from a generous Miltank, Sneasel regained his strength and was able to move more freely. It was then that Sneasel looked up and noticed the human who had been tending to him. In the previous battle, he had observed how the human's commands had allowed Murkrow and Slowpoke to overpower him. He gazed at Cain with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Sneasel, you are now my Pokémon. You can either accept that fact or not. But there are only two choices before you. First, join my Pokémon team, and I will guide you in battle and nurture you to be stronger. You'll have access to all the food and items you could ever want, including milk. Sneasel remained expressionless as he listened to Cain, but his eyes gleamed at the mention of milk. Cain smiled inwardly, knowing he had hit a sweet spot. With the promise of his favorite beverage, Sneasel was already halfway to being fully committed. However, Cain's tone grew serious as he delivered the second choice. Or you can choose not to fight for me. I will provide you with food, but you'll never leave the confines of your Pokeball until the end of your days. The two choices presented were vastly different, with one offering freedom and growth, while the other was akin to a prison sentence. Sneasel's anger surged when he heard Cain's second choice. As a wild Pokémon, freedom was the essence of his being. The thought of being locked up indefinitely made him feel like he was staring into the abyss of despair. With a fierce cry, Sneasel assumed an attacking posture. Murkrow and Slowpoke also stood ready, their eyes fixed on Sneasel, anticipating his next move. Cain met Sneasel's glare without flinching. As a trainer, he had a strong desire for control and could not compromise on such matters. He knew that Sneasel had great potential, but if he couldn't be a valuable member of his team, then it was better to keep him locked up to prevent him from being captured by others or becoming his enemy. Despite his strong stance, Cain had no intention of mistreating Sneasel. If Sneasel chose to become his Pokémon and fight by his side, he would receive the same care and attention as Murkrow and Slowpoke. Just as the tension between the two sides reached a boiling point, it was Miltank who broke the impasse, rushing to the middle and gesturing wildly to Sneasel. She seemed to be indicating that Cain was not the person he believed him to be. Miltank then grabbed the half-empty bottle of milk that Sneasel had left on the ground and stuffed it back into his hands. She chattered on incessantly, and Sneasel listened intently, his expression blank. As Miltank continued to speak, she became more and more animated, even pulling Slowpoke into the conversation and patting him on the back. Murkrow watched the scene unfold, relieved that he wasn't the one being patted. Slowpoke endured the patting, but it was clear that he was in pain. He tried to pretend to be happy and encourage Miltank by calling out to her. Sneasel watched as Miltank excitedly told her story and saw the pained expression on Slowpoke's face. Part of him was glad to see one of the Pokémon who had teamed up against him having to go through this ordeal. Unaware of the situation, Miltank continued to pat Slowpoke harder and harder, until he couldn't take it any longer. He quickly backed away, fearing for his safety. With a loud bam, Miltank's hand hit the ground, creating a deep groove and cracks in the earth. The room fell silent, and Miltank looked around, realizing what had happened and lowering her head with a shy expression. Slowpoke let out a sigh of relief, grateful to have avoided a catastrophe. Cain was also surprised by Miltank's display of power. He had assumed her impressive strength in her battle against Arbok was due to bide, but now it seemed that there was more to her than he had realized. Nevertheless, Miltank's long speech had an effect on Sneasel, and his hostility towards Cain had diminished. Miltank certainly had a way of regulating the team and keeping everyone in line. After a moment of silence, Miltank approached Sneasel and led him in front of Cain. Though Cain didn't understand what Miltank had said to Sneasel, he was pleased that Sneasel was now standing obediently in front of him. Cain reached out to touch Sneasel's head, hoping to ease the tension between them. But Sneasel turned his head away, avoiding Cain's hand. Cain was left with his hand hanging awkwardly in the air. To break the tension, Cain took out 2 bottles of milk from his ring and stuffed them into Sneasel's arms. Sneasel's expression was reluctant and complicated, and Cain wasn't one to give up. He again reached out and placed his hand on Sneasel's head, smiling as he rubbed it affectionately. Chapter 126. Chapter 126. At this point, Sneasel had been subdued by Cain. Although he remained slightly disobedient, Cain hoped that over time, Sneasel would integrate into the team and develop a good rapport with the other Pokémon. Of all of Cain's Pokémon, Miltank had the strongest bond with Sneasel. It was unclear whether it was due to Miltank's gentle demeanor or the fact that she provided Sneasel with milk. Sneasel remained wary of Cain despite obeying his commands. He couldn't help but feel a sense of defiance towards his trainer. However, Murkrow and Slowpoke welcomed Sneasel with open arms. Initially, Sneasel didn't take kindly to Murkrow and Slowpoke's friendly gestures. But as they persistently stuck by his side, Sneasel began to warm up to them. Cain paid little attention to Sneasel's resistance. The fact that Sneasel was slowly accepting him was already a promising sign. Cain didn't believe he was the type of trainer who could easily command the obedience of every Pokémon he encountered. He knew it would take time and effort to establish trust and respect. After a grueling day of chasing Sneasel, Cain checked his watch and realized it was already 7 p.m. None of the Pokémon had eaten anything since morning. In the frigid cave, Cain set about building a fire pit out of stones to cook their meal. He sliced up various meats and added homemade seasonings to a large pot, creating a mouth-watering hot pot. As the rich aroma wafted through the cave, the Pokémon gathered around, enticed by the smell. Sneasel, initially hesitant, was eventually convinced by Miltank to join the others by the fire. Eating hot pot in the cold cave proved to be a smart decision as it helped bring the Pokémon closer together. Sneasel, who had previously been reluctant to interact with the others, began to communicate more and more as he enjoyed the delicious meal. Cain waited patiently until the others had their fill before joining in on the feast. The once cold cave was now alive with chatter and laughter as the Pokémon enjoyed their meal. Afterwards, each Pokémon received a bottle of milk, and they sat against the cave wall, chatting amicably. Cain even woke up Skorupi to join in on the fun, and the curious Pokémon crawled up to Sneasel to greet him. As time wore on, they pitched their tents in the cave and settled down for the night. Sneasel, you've lived in this cave for a long time. Have you seen a Swinub around here? Cain asked Sneasel, who was pretending to be cold and aloof. After a night of rest in Sneasel's cave, they set out early the next morning to search for a Swinub to complete the mission for the Hunters Guild. Cain knew that finding a Swinub with the right level and aptitude would not be easy, but he was determined to complete the mission. Sneasel nodded in response to Cain's question, recalling his experiences living in the area. He couldn't remember exactly how long he had been there, but he knew where to find food. Sneasel had a keen sense of smell and was familiar with the habits of the lazy Swinubs in the area. They would collect food and pile it up in one place, allowing them to eat for extended periods without having to move around. Swinubs were not social Pokémon and were fiercely protective of their food. Sneasel had learned this the hard way, having faced their wrath when he attempted to steal from them. Anyway, Sneasel knew where to find Swinubs and could guide Cain to them, saving them valuable time in their search. Under Sneasel's guidance, they searched the ice caves for Swinubs. While there were plenty of Swinubs in the area, they were difficult to locate due to the complex cave system. Even when they did find a few, Cain didn't attack them as their level and aptitude were not up to par. Despite the challenges of navigating the labyrinthine cave system, Cain trusted in Sneasel's expertise and knowledge of the area. After several hours of searching, they finally stumbled upon a Swinub with the aptitude and level they were looking for. Pokémon. Swinub. Dark yellow. Gender. Female. Level. 22. Type. Ice plus ground. Ability. Oblivious. Held items. None. Egg moves. Icicle spear, mud shot. Basic moves. Odor sleuth, tackle, mud sport, powder snow, Mud Slap, Endure, Mud Bomb, Icy Wind. Taunt moves, Stealth Rock. Technical machines, TMs none. Cain knew that capturing this Swinub would complete his hunter mission, so he wasted no time in taking action. Slowpoke, use water gun, Cain commanded. Slowpoke obeyed, shooting a powerful stream of water towards the Swinub's nest. The lazy Swinub was caught off guard by the sudden attack, and its home was flooded in an instant. Ah! Enraged by the intrusion, the Swinub roared angrily and charged out of its flooded nest. Despite its normally lazy and slow demeanor, it was not to be underestimated. Now, with bloodshot eyes, the Swinub glared at the culprit responsible for destroying its home, Slowpoke. Chapter 127. Chapter 127. Slowpoke, keep using water gun. Combine it with your confusion, Cain commanded. Another jet of water erupted from Slowpoke's mouth. This time, it was cloaked in a shimmering psychic aura. The water's speed and power were significantly amplified. The enhanced water gun could now adjust its trajectory. Although it couldn't make sharp turns, the force of the attack wouldn't diminish after changing direction. Swinub stared at the incoming jet of water, sensing the potent water energy and instinctively resisting. As an ice and ground type, it wasn't fond of water energy. Swinub's small tail quivered, and its fur bristled. A chilling gust carrying fine snow erupted from its mouth. Icy Wind. As the water gun approached, Icy Wind collided with it. The ice cave's frigid temperatures already amplified the power of ice-type moves by at least 30%. Slowpoke's water gun froze at the front. Swinub believed the attack's power would be significantly reduced when it reached him, or at least that the water energy's effect would be lessened. However, things didn't go as planned. Slowpoke's eyes glowed blue, and the psychic aura enveloping the water gun solidified further, accelerating the jet once more. Swinub was stunned. The water gun struck it squarely, the frozen tip resembling a sharp arrow that dug into its flesh painfully. It had been hoisted by its own petard. Ah! Swinub cried out in anguish. Seizing the opportunity, Slowpoke, without needing Cain's reminder, used confusion to launch several more water jets. Swinub, already slow and with average defenses, was unable to mount an effective counterattack under the barrage of water guns, losing its ability to fight. Slowpoke's water moves were doubly effective against Swinub's ground typing. With the added psychic boost, Swinub had no chance of fighting back. The battle was one-sided. Swinub wasn't a social Pokémon, so Cain and his team didn't feel the slightest urgency or pressure when facing one of such aptitude and level. Cain subdued it with a standard Pokeball, then applied medicine to ensure the Swinub wouldn't perish from its injuries. Sneasel observed Cain's actions, contrasting his treatment of other Pokémon with how he treated him. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a tinge of happiness. Perhaps comparisons weren't always harmful. After successfully catching the Swinub, Cain decided against venturing deeper into the ice cave. The deeper they went, the more unbearable the cold became. Even wearing a down jacket, Cain couldn't tolerate it. Moreover, aside from Miltank, who was insulated by fat, and Sneasel, who was accustomed to such environments, the other Pokémon couldn't withstand the biting cold. Murkrow, in particular, felt as if it couldn't even flap its wings. Cain saw this as an opportunity for a unique training method. Although the ice cave's cold sapped energy quickly, the training proved effective, bolstering Murkrow's resistance to ice-type moves. As they retreated from the cave's depths, Cain asked Sneasel if he knew Onix's whereabouts, but this time, he wasn't certain. Sneasel knew the ice cave well, but beyond the forest near his home, he had limited knowledge of the surroundings. The area was vast, and he couldn't waste his time exploring it all day. Since Sneasel couldn't pinpoint Onix's location, Cain abandoned the search in the ice cave. He believed that the Onix wouldn't be found in such a frigid place. Emerging from the ice cave, Cain savored the comparatively warmer air outside and allowed his hands and feet to regain feeling. He then returned Miltank to its Pokeball and prepared to search for possible Onix activity in the mountainous region. The rocky terrain near the mountainside seemed like a likely habitat for an Onix. Cain planned to spend the afternoon and the following morning searching for Onix. If he couldn't find it, he'd have to temporarily give up. Umbra's mission had been delayed long enough, and Cain was growing concerned about the Pokémon Association's imminent attack on Team Rocket's base. He didn't know the exact time, but he sensed it would happen soon. He couldn't afford to waste more time. Navigating the mountain path, they traversed the rugged rocks, each step requiring caution. One misstep could lead to a dangerous fall. Murkrow and Slowpoke had little to worry about. One could fly, while the other utilized confusion to glide over the uneven terrain. Sneasel, familiar with such environments and possessing a strong physique, was the fastest among the Pokémon. Along the way, they encountered many Geodudes and Golems. They were docile, merely observing Cain and his team before returning to their meals of rock. Besides Geodudes and Golems, They also met Diglets and Sandshrews. While the Diglets didn't bother Cain and his Pokémon, the Sandshrews were more mischievous. They launched group attacks on the team, only to be fended off by Slowpoke's water gun. Those who couldn't escape swiftly met their demise. The mountain was vast, but Onix's trail remained elusive. Cain sent Murkrow to scout from the sky, but even after several rounds, they found nothing. Logically, Onix, being a massive Pokémon, should have been easy to spot among the rocks. But their search yielded no results. Cain was helpless and could only hope to find Onix in areas where Murkrow couldn't see. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final ray of light, darkness enveloped the sky. Cain led his Pokémon to a relatively clean rock cave. After a quick tidying, it became their makeshift camp for the night. Chapter 128. Chapter 128. As dawn broke in the east, casting a soft glow on the horizon, Cain stirred from his slumber. With the morning dew still clinging to the grass, he prepared a hearty breakfast for his Pokémon companions. Sneasel, unaccustomed to this routine, had been wide awake since Cain stirred, but the rest of the team remained in peaceful slumber. Not wanting to disturb them, Sneasel stayed put. Cain's call for breakfast broke the silence, and Sneasel realized that, despite his reservations about Cain, he was growing accustomed to the routine. A voice inside him whispered that he shouldn't trust Cain, but his body betrayed him. The sight of the mouth-watering meal laid out before them, and the tantalizing aroma wafting from the dishes, drew Sneasel to the table, where his fellow Pokémon waited for him to join them. Sneasel eyed his meal up close, barely containing his hunger. But none of the Pokémon had begun eating yet, so he held back. "Let's all eat," Cain said with a warm smile, casting a sidelong glance at Sneasel. At Cain's words, the Pokémon dug into their feast, and Sneasel followed suit. He ate with increasing speed, savoring every delectable bite. Even when Cain affectionately ruffled his fur, Sneasel chose to ignore it, focused solely on the delicious food before him. After breakfast, their adventure continued. They set out in search of the elusive Onix once more, with Cain vowing that if they didn't find it before lunch, they'd abandon the quest. Foregoing a mountain ascent, the group scoured the landscape horizontally, ensuring they had ample time to return. Wild Pokémon, eager to challenge Cain and his team, crossed their path, but Slowpoke effortlessly dispatched each challenger, allowing the group to press onward. The mountain teemed with rock and ground-type Pokémon, making it the perfect environment for Slowpoke. Though rock-type Pokémon boasted high defenses, they were weak against water-type moves. Fending off numerous challengers, Slowpoke leveled up to 25, matching Sneasel as the highest-level Pokémon on Cain's team. Even if they failed to find Onix, Cain was pleased with Slowpoke's progress, as such ideal leveling spots were rare. After nearly 2 hours of fruitless searching, Onix remained elusive. Just as Cain was about to abandon the quest, Murkrow reported a large cave ahead, suggesting that Onix might be inside. Cain followed Murkrow to the cave entrance, towering as high as 2 people, and noticed signs of crushing, as if an Onix had squeezed through. Slowpoke, use water gun on the cave to see if there's an Onix inside. While the crushed entrance hinted at Onix's presence, it wasn't conclusive. The lack of other signs puzzled Cain. Slowpoke unleashed a torrent of water into the cave's depths, the sound of droplets echoing back to the entrance. The group stood in tense silence, straining to hear any reaction from within. Gradually, they detected faint noises approaching the entrance. But Cain's brow furrowed, sensing something amiss. Something's not right. If it's an Onix, it wouldn't be this quiet. And this doesn't sound like a Pokémon dragging itself. It's more like the sound of a tire rubbing against the ground. Cain mused aloud, perplexed by the noise. The wait was short-lived. A blue-grayish cylindrical shape, akin to a tire, rolled out at breakneck speed, its friction against the ground creating the tire-like sound they had heard earlier. Cain's eyes widened in recognition, and he hastily shouted, "Get out of the way!" He sprinted to the wall outside the cave, narrowly avoiding the fast-approaching tire. His Pokémon followed suit, dodging the impact. The blue-grayish tire screeched to a halt, grinding against the ground outside the cave. It was then that Cain realized the source of the crushed traces at the entrance. WTF! The tire unfurled, revealing an elephant-shaped Pokémon standing over a meter tall. A pair of thick, white tusks protruded from its armored snout. Dark blue armor encased its body, from tail to nose, with 2 small eyes peering from beneath. The creature that had emerged was a Donphan, native to the Johto region. Cain had mistakenly believed an Onix might be inside the cave, but it was home to a Donphan instead. The evolved form of Phanpy, this ground-type Pokémon had taken them by surprise. Pokémon: Donphan. Light green. Gender: male. Level: 25. Type: ground. Ability: sturdy. Held items: none. Egg moves: Mud Slap, Focus Energy, Body Slam. Basic moves: Fire Fong, Thunder Fong, Fury Attack, Horn Attack, Bulldoze, Growl, Defense Curl, Rapid Spin, Rollout, Assurance, Knock Off, Slam. Taught moves: Iron Defense, Stealth Rock, Block. Technical machines. TMs none. Encountering a light green aptitude, level 25 Donphan was beyond Cain's expectations. Yellow aptitude Pokémon were the most common in their journey thus far, so a green aptitude Pokémon was a pleasant surprise. It had clearly just reached level 25 and evolved. Cain counted his blessings that they hadn't stumbled upon a level 30 Donphan, which could learn Magnitude, a luck-dependent area of effect move. And if they were unlucky enough to face a Magnitude 10, Cain and his Pokémon, even if they evaded the attack, would likely be buried beneath a cascade of jagged rocks. Since it hadn't learned Magnitude yet, this Donphan was an invaluable find for Cain before returning to the Hunters Guild. Given the right mission, he could exchange it for a wealth of points. Unaware of Cain's intentions, the Donphan had no idea it was seen as a pile of money. Slowpoke, Water Gun. Murkrow, Buff with Tailwind. Sneasel, Icy Wind. Cain barked out his orders. This marked Sneasel's first battle under Cain's command. Although its movements were slightly sluggish, its response was swift, and its keen intellect quickly grasped Cain's intentions. Chapter 129. Chapter 129. The prankster ability of Murkrow enabled status-type moves to take precedence. This was a game setting, but it manifested similarly in reality. Tailwind, a team-boosting move, hastened speed, so after Murkrow executed it, the entire squad felt incredibly light on their feet. Slowpoke unleashed its water gun with precision. Though Sneasel was a bit sluggish, it grasped Cain's strategy. Its Icy Wind didn't directly target Donphan. Instead, it merged with Slowpoke's water gun. Neither fully freezing the water gun nor letting Icy Wind lose potency, the ingenious combination spawned small ice shards within the jet of water, fusing icy and water energies. While the fusion wasn't flawless, it was their first attempt, and the results already exceeded Cain's expectations. Water gun, now imbued with tiny ice shards, pelted Donphan's body. The ground-type Donphan, doubly vulnerable to water and ice moves, suffered even greater damage from the merged attributes. Crying out in agony, its eyes flashed crimson. Donphan had been slumbering soundly in the cave, only to be roused by a blast of water. Initially believing a rival Pokémon had invaded its lair, it searched in vain for the intruder. Already irate from its rude awakening, it stormed out of the cave to vent its frustration. Yet just as it halted its rollout, an even colder, ice-laden water jet struck its face. Instantly, Donphan's fury reached a boiling point. Exhaling 2 labored breaths through its lengthy snout, its front hooves stomped the ground, kicking up clouds of dust. Without uttering a sound, it curled into a wheel. Its thick armor resembled tire treads, gathering small stones as it rolled. The formidable tusks protruding from either side were akin to lengthy spears, daring anyone to approach. Rollout commenced. At first, the power of rollout wasn't overwhelming. But as it continued, its strength multiplied, eventually reaching a staggering 480 points. If any of Cain's Pokémon took a direct hit, they would be instantly incapacitated. Moreover, if rollout was activated after using Defense Curl, the attack's power doubled, maxing out at an alarming 960 points. Cain was familiar with Whitney from Goldenrod City, whose family's livelihood relied not only on their mill tanks but also on their in-depth knowledge of rollout. Typically, rollout couldn't be initiated or halted at will, but they had mastered techniques to control it. As Donphan commenced its rollout rampage, Cain disapproved of its reckless approach, relying on brute force rather than strategy. Cain wasn't alone in his disdain. His Pokémon shared his sentiment. Combating such a Pokémon felt like picking on a lumbering, dim-witted creature. Hardly a gratifying experience. Slowpoke, use confusion to envelop your water gun and drench him. Sneasel, keep using Icy Wind to impede his progress. Murkrow, unleash Dark Pulse to disrupt him. Cain directed coolly. Donphan's rollout had only just begun, so its power remained relatively low. As its speed increased, controlling its direction would become increasingly challenging. Sneasel exhaled another Icy Wind. Before, in order to synergize with Slowpoke's water gun, it hadn't maximized Icy Wind's potency. Now, to hinder Donphan, Sneasel unleashed the full extent of its ice energy. Already slow-moving, Donphan's pace diminished further under Sneasel's relentless attack. A thin layer of frost enveloped its body, significantly hampering its speed. Murkrow's Dark Pulse wasn't aimed primarily at Donphan but rather its surroundings, creating an uneven terrain that curbed the rampaging Pokémon's momentum. Slowpoke took on the role of the primary attacker. Following its water gun, it harnessed confusion to manipulate the water flow. Instead of striking Donphan directly, it waited for its teammates to slow the rollout. Then, Deftly wielding confusion, Slowpoke encased Donphan within a watery orb. In a flash, Donphan's rollout halted, leaving it trapped and gasping within the watery sphere. Its usually small eyes widened in distress, its face flushed and contorted in pain from the inability to breathe. Sneasel. Use icy wind again. Let's turn him into an ice cube, Cain chuckled, amused by Donphan's predicament. Sneasel. Nodding, Sneasel unleashed its ice energy once more. Alongside Slowpoke, they transformed the water ball encasing Donphan into a massive ice ball. Immobile and frozen within, Donphan could only shift its tiny panicked eyes. Cain marveled at the creature's resilience. Despite its vulnerability to water and ice moves, Donphan's physical fortitude was impressive, as it still managed some movement in such a suffocating state. After a while, Cain instructed his Pokémon to shatter the ice. Donphan lay immobilized on the ground, barely breathing. If not for its faint respiration, Cain might have assumed it dead. He subdued Donphan with a Pokeball, allowing it to bask in the sun and recover its mobility. Once revived, he stowed it away and secured the Pokeball. With Donphan captured, a satisfied Cain resumed his search for Onix. His priorities had shifted though. A rare, green aptitude Donphan held far greater value than the average Onix. He could accept not finding the elusive Onix now. Indeed, after 2 more hours of fruitless searching, Cain abandoned the quest and decided to try his luck elsewhere. As he and his Pokémon descended the mountain, Cain came to a realization. Climbing up had been the easy part. Navigating the gravel-strewn slopes required cautious, deliberate steps while ascending. But descending proved even more treacherous. Frustrated by the slow pace, Cain eventually had Slowpoke use confusion to create a flat path, allowing them to pick up speed. Cain had initially refrained from using it for assistance, intending to train alongside his Pokémon. Their rapid growth had outpaced his own physical fitness, and he needed to improve lest he become a liability in the wild. Midway down the mountain, Cain suddenly detected the sounds of a skirmish nearby. He could discern not only the noise of Pokémon but also the faint voice of a human issuing commands. Are there still trainers in this area? It sounds like a girl. Cain mused. Chapter 130. Chapter 130. Cain and his Pokémon moved stealthily, muffling their footsteps to remain undetected as they tracked the source of the commotion. With each step, the sounds of battle intensified, echoing through the air like a symphony of destruction. Explosions reverberated, accompanied by the cacophony of sand and gravel clashing against the rocky terrain. Then, a crystalline voice cut through the chaos. Rosalia, use Stun Spore. As the scene of the skirmish unfolded before Cain's eyes, he spotted the elusive Onix he had been searching for, 2 of them in fact. Their 9-meter-long bodies twisted and coiled together, they effortlessly traversed the treacherous terrain, flattening the rocky surface beneath them. Yet it wasn't the Onix pair that captivated Cain. It was the girl with a vibrant red headscarf standing defiantly before them. By her side stood a peculiar green Pokémon, Rosalia, a grass and poison type. Rosalia's petite frame boasted 3 thorns crowning her head, with her light green body adorned in leafy garments. A yellow leaf accentuated her chest, while a blue rose graced her left hand and a red one her right. Upon hearing the red headscarf girl's command, Rosalia chimed a melodious response. She raised her floral hands high, releasing a fine light purple dust from the blossoms. The spores swirled around the colossal Onix duo. Their immense size rendered the stun spore's effect minimal, only marginally slowing their movements. Unfazed by this outcome, the girl maintained her composure as the Onix pair charged towards her, determination etched on her face. The girl's agility was a sight to behold, as she nimbly navigated the rocky terrain that Cain found treacherous. Rosalia. Magical Leaf. Misdreavus, Confuse Ray. She commanded with poise as she sprinted. From the shadows emerged a Misdreavus, lobbing a small luminescent ball that emitted a confuse ray at one of the Onix. In sync with her trainer's movements, Rosalia turned her head and brandished her roses. A flurry of leaves materialized, enveloped in a soft purple aura, and assailed the nearest Onix. The grass-type move was 4 times more effective against the Onix, halting its advance in a pained stupor. With one Onix disoriented, Misdreavus and Rosalia teamed up under the girl's expert guidance to subdue the other. In its confused state, the rampaging Onix inadvertently stumbled into Cain's path. The girl's abilities were impressive, but not enough to deter Cain from seizing the opportunity before him. The Onix was an essential component of his mission, and he refused to let it slip away. Resolute, Cain sprang into action. The Onix he had sought for so long had finally appeared before him, and he wouldn't squander this chance. Despite having only a yellow aptitude, the level 23 Onix met the requirements of his hunter mission. Slowpoke, Water Gun. Ghastly, Hidden Power. As a ground and rock type, the Onix was particularly vulnerable to water and grass moves. 4 times more so, in fact. Hence, Slowpoke's water gun and Ghastly's grass-type hidden power proved exceptionally potent against the Onix. The girl caught sight of Cain and his Pokémon, who were now attacking the other Onix. Her expression turned icy as she yelled, "Stop! That's my prey!" But entangled with the furious Onix, she was unable to intervene. Powerless, she watched Cain seize his target, her face contorted in rage. Cain merely scoffed at her protest, urging Slowpoke and Ghastly to intensify their onslaught. Murkrow soared above, vigilantly surveying the situation. Despite the girl only having 2 Pokémon, there was no telling if she had any hidden tricks up her sleeve, much like the mischievous that had lurked in the shadows earlier. In no time, both parties subdued their respective adversaries. Cain collected the Pokeball containing the Onix. The girl was marginally quicker, skillfully securing her Onix within its Pokeball. Approaching Cain, her anger flared as she saw him nonchalantly pocket the Pokeball. "Hey, rude guy! I said that's my prey. Didn't you hear me?" As she spoke, Rosalia and Misdreavus materialized before her, wearing a mix of adorable and fierce expressions as they glared at Cain and his Pokémon. Cain seemed unfazed. After leisurely stowing the Pokeball, he finally scrutinized the girl before him. Up until now, he had only seen her from behind. She wore a red headscarf, a blue denim jacket, and skinny jeans. Upon closer inspection, Cain realized she was much younger than he had initially thought, likely around his own age. Cain ignored the girl's accusation and, furrowing his brow, inquired, "Hunter?" His question caught the girl off guard. Although unsure how Cain had deduced her occupation as a Pokémon hunter, she couldn't deny it. "Whose prey are you talking about? Aren't you a bit childish?" Cain scoffed, not waiting for her response. Mockery danced in his eyes. The girl's face flushed with indignation. Struggling for a retort, she finally exploded in a humiliated fury. "Humph! You stole my prey and you're still twisting words." Rosalia, stun spore. Misdreavus, confuse ray. Cain sneered. In the wilderness, he wouldn't show mercy just because his opponent was a girl. In his past, he had bested more than a few formidable female trainers. Murkrow, use Gust to blow the stun spore away. Slowpoke, destroy confuse ray with confusion. Sneasel, quick attack, follow up with feint attack. Since he had resolved to act, he would follow through with determination. Rosalia's stun spore was dispersed by Murkrow's efforts, while Misdreavus's confuse ray was rendered ineffective by Slowpoke. Meanwhile, Sneasel closed in on the enemy with lightning speed. The girl's vigilance had kept her Pokémon at a safe distance, preventing Cain's AI system from gathering data on them. However, from the previous skirmish, it was evident that her Pokémon were far from weak. Their strength would probably be on par with Cain's. Sneasel's feint attack was bound to catch the girl off guard as she didn't seem to have any Pokémon capable of restraining it. Chapter 131. Chapter 131. The girl's icy gaze locked onto the Sneasel charging towards her. She knew with chilling certainty that it intended to kill her. Swiftly, she plucked a Pokeball from her waist and hurled it into the fray. Sneasel! Another Sneasel materialized on the battlefield. Cain hadn't anticipated that the girl would possess a Sneasel as well. His own Sneasel faltered, momentarily ceasing its attack. It was clear that it sensed a formidable presence emanating from this newly arrived Sneasel. Cain frowned as he observed the unexpected appearance of the rival Sneasel, but he didn't reproach his own for halting its assault. Having only recently been tamed, his Sneasel's judgment was crucial for building trust between them. It was a matter of adaptation and mutual understanding. Yet, the girl's Sneasel had caught Cain off guard. Unlike common Pokémon such as Beedrill, Sneasel was a relatively rare find. From his Sneasel's reaction, it was apparent that the opposing Sneasel was no pushover, having provoked a palpable sense of threat. "Return, Sneasel," Cain commanded, his expression grave. The girl was unmistakably a fellow hunter, and judging by her ability to navigate this treacherous terrain, she was far from weak. The way she directed her Pokémon in combat further confirmed that she was no rookie. "Hey, you're a hunter too?" the girl inquired, her voice like a silver bell, her cheeks flushed with anger. Cain hesitated briefly before nodding. There was no point in concealing the truth now. Besides, even if he denied it, would she believe him? The girl's gaze swept across Cain's team, her own Sneasel's equal, the pale pink shiny Slowpoke, the well-trained Murkrow, and the elusive Ghastly. Each of them exuded strength. Her heart sank at the thought of not reclaiming her other target, the mighty Onix. Though she wasn't intimidated by Cain, she knew his true prowess would only be revealed in battle. Still, his determined demeanor indicated he was no pushover. It was impossible to predict who would ultimately emerge victorious, or who would fall in defeat. It wasn't just the girl who felt apprehensive. Cain too hesitated upon seeing her Sneasel. The girl was clearly not a mere grunt like those from Team Rocket. Her survival skills in the wild were formidable, and her Pokémon hunting ability was nothing to scoff at. But after a moment's contemplation, Cain resolved to attack. Even if it meant paying a small price, he had to keep her here. She was strong now, and there was no telling how powerful she'd become in the future. Even a minor disagreement could ignite the spark of a full-blown confrontation down the line. Cain was 80% certain that, if he gave it his all, he could hold the girl back. Slowpoke, Calm Mind. Murkrow. Tailwind. Sneasel, Agility. If a battle was imminent, his Pokémon needed to be in peak condition. The girl watched as Cain issued orders to his Pokémon, seemingly prepared to fight to the death. She couldn't fathom where he'd found the confidence to keep her at bay. Hey, rude guy. It's just an Onix. Is there really a need for a fight to the death? Are you sure you can take me down? She bristled, her anger flaring. It seemed as though she had suffered the loss, and he was the one recklessly risking everything. Yet Cain paid no heed to her words, coldly instructing his Pokémon to prepare for battle. As for Ghastly, he kept it close, guarding against any sudden threats. The girl's frustration mounted when she saw that Cain was completely ignoring her, as if he were a block of wood. But she had to ask herself, would she, like the stubborn man before her, risk her life for an Onix that held little value? That wasn't a choice any rational person would make, right? With nowhere to direct her fury, she could only stomp her feet, as if crushing the unresponsive man standing opposite her beneath the stone. After venting for a bit, she deflated, muttering, "Really, why am I even competing with a lunatic? Just my luck." Humph. She then grabbed another Pokeball from her belt and tossed it into the air. Cain watched as she released another Pokémon, his eyes narrowing. Indeed, she had more up her sleeve. As he braced himself for an attack, a bird Pokémon encased in silver-white armor materialized from the Pokeball. Its wings bore red undersides, and its mouth bristled with sharp teeth. Recognizing the Pokémon, its name surfaced in Cain's mind. Skarmory. A dual steel and flying-type Pokémon. Skarmory boasted impressive resistance. Apart from fire and electric moves, which dealt double damage, it took only half damage from normal, flying, steel, psychic, dragon, and fairy-type moves. Bug and grass-type moves dealt a mere quarter damage, and ground and poison-type moves were entirely ineffective. Out of the 18 known types, Skarmory was immune or resistant to 10. Its defenses were undoubtedly exceptional. Cain lacked fire and electric-type Pokémon. If they were to clash, he'd find himself at a significant disadvantage. However, to his surprise, the girl opposite him puffed up her cheeks and glared furiously at Cain. With a huff, she leaped onto Skarmory's back. She then recalled her other 3 Pokémon, all the while repeating, "Don't lower yourself to the lunatic's level. Don't lower yourself to the lunatic's level." She didn't even glance at Cain. Instead, she patted Skarmory's armored neck and signaled for it to take off quickly. But as she was leaving, her anger surged once more. From high above she yelled, "Humph! You lunatic, I won't lower myself to your level. My name is Rogue. The next time you hear that name, you better steer clear, or else, I'll definitely bite you to death." Having vented her frustration, she and her Skarmory soared away without looking back. Slowpoke and the others watched the girl make her escape, then glanced at Cain, their expressions blank. Unsure of what they should do, they awaited Cain's command. But Cain did nothing. He simply gazed at the receding figure in the sky. After a moment, he murmured, "TSK, maybe I should get a flying mode of transportation too? It's so convenient." His comment seemed out of place. Regardless, the distance between them was too great. Even if he tried, he wouldn't be able to stop her in such a short time. The appearance of Skarmory had caught him off guard, leaving him ill-equipped to counter the Pokémon. If before Skarmory emerged Cain had been 80% confident of keeping her at bay, that number plummeted to 50% or even lower after Skarmory's arrival. If it was deemed impossible, there was really no point in trying in vain. At least he'd acquired an Onix. In the end, he'd come out ahead. Chapter 132. Chapter 132. As the huntress vanished into the frost-kissed air, Cain wasted no time. With the mighty Onix now captured, his primary goal was complete. His focus shifted to returning to the Team Rocket base and securing the elusive quest item. Cain released the newly tamed Onix, its gargantuan form dwarfing him. Under the watchful gaze of the ever-present Slowpoke, the creature begrudgingly acquiesced. Though destined for the Hunters Guild as a mission exchange, the Onix would first serve as Cain's formidable steed, ideal for navigating the treacherous mountain path. Vaulting onto the Onix's rocky spine, Cain urged the colossal Pokémon forward, plummeting down the mountain at breakneck speed. The uneven terrain was no match for the Onix, as it transformed even the roughest ground into a smooth ride. Upon reaching level terrain, Cain chose not to stow away the Onix. Its swiftness vastly outpaced his own, and although it attracted the ire of other Pokémon, he was unfazed. He embraced the challenges, treating them as valuable training opportunities. The encounter with the girl still resonated with him. He couldn't afford complacency, not when so many formidable young trainers roamed the world. The onyx blazed a trail, plowing through smaller trees and only slightly altering its course for the more robust trunks. Its passage incited the territorial instincts of the region's powerful Pokémon, each roar and growl a testament to the disruption it caused. In truth, the onyx longed to cry out. Ordinarily, it would never have dared such brazen behavior, but the omnipresent threat from its new master left it little choice. It yearned to communicate its plight to the furious wild Pokémon, to explain that it was forced into this rampage. Yet, the onyx's fears proved unfounded. Though some adversaries exceeded Cain and his team's abilities, they could hold their own just long enough to escape the creature's domains. Once beyond the borders of their territories, most Pokémon ceased their pursuit, allowing Cain and his team to press onward. Some adversaries, however, doggedly pursued them. Sneasel's ice-type moves slowed these tenacious creatures, allowing Cain and his team to shake them off eventually. Thus, the onslaught the onyx had dreaded never materialized, and their journey continued without hindrance. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Cain guided the onyx to the forest's edge. Their pace had more than doubled since entering this wild terrain. If not for the growing throngs of people, Cain would have ridden the onyx straight to Mahogany Town. Cain even contemplated keeping the onyx as his personal mount, its convenience far surpassing any solo endeavor. Cain donned his nondescript clothing and a cap to blend in with the crowd. Head down, he navigated through the bustling streets and entered Mahogany Town. He could feel the city's atmosphere had grown tense. An almost palpable aura of danger hung in the air. The conflict between the Association and Team Rocket is escalating. I must complete the mission quickly, Cain thought to himself. Upon entering the now somber Pokémon Center of Mahogany Town, Cain found it eerily deserted. There was no queue when he approached the counter to seek treatment. Handing the Pokeball containing Sneasel to the medical staff, he paid the fee and requested a thorough examination of Sneasel's physical condition. Sneasel appeared healthy, however. Cain couldn't be sure if it harbored any hidden injuries. In the wilderness, it would have nursed its wounds in solitude, away in its cave. After a 10-minute wait, Cain reclaimed the Pokeball. Despite Sneasel's slight malnourishment, its overall health and development were deemed satisfactory. The medical staff recommended feeding Sneasel more nutritious fare, such as Pokeblocks, if Cain could spare the resources. Cain smiled and nodded in agreement, grateful for their assistance. Opting for safety, he booked a room at the Pokémon Center, not wanting to risk staying at an external hotel given Mahogany Town's current climate. That night, Cain ventured into the city's black market. With Mahogany Town housing the largest Team Rocket base in the Johto region, it was no surprise that most of its patrons were Team Rocket members. In his previous life, Cain had been well acquainted with this particular black market. Upon submitting his quest to the Hunters Guild, he received a generous bounty of points and cash. For the time being, Cain retained the Onyx. With a month to complete the mission, he saw no reason to rush, and the Onyx still held potential value. The Swinub netted Cain a total of 150,000 points, while the light green aptitude Donphan fetched 500,000 points. In addition to the Pokeblocks he'd crafted for Whitney, he'd earned a total of 2.4 million Pokedollars. Now with 3.25 million Pokedollars at his disposal, Cain embarked on a shopping spree at the local black market grocery store. He purchased ingredients to concoct high-grade Pokeblocks tailored for Sneasel, along with a variety of other items, spending a total of 250,000 Pokedollars. Upon leaving the black market, Cain's funds had dwindled to 3 million Pokedollars. While this sum might seem extravagant to the average person, it was barely a dent in the resources required to nurture 6 or more Pokémon in Cain's care. Cain knew all too well that the money he'd spent on materials would be a mere fraction of the cost if he were to buy rare items or TMs. His wallet would be drained in no time. Deciding to reserve his funds for emergencies, Cain held off on purchasing TMs for his Pokémon. Unless absolutely necessary, he preferred to acquire the TMs he desired through Team Rocket's exchange list. Stepping out of the black market, Cain sighed with relief. He noticed that the atmosphere had grown tense, with the usually boisterous street vendors subdued. Many seemed eager to sell their wares and buy items or materials to bolster their strength swiftly. The city's denizens weren't oblivious to the mounting tension. The increased presence of association trainers, along with numerous unfamiliar faces, inevitably led some to speculate on the situation. As Cain walked through the streets, he observed that most people were tight-lipped and hurried, exchanging only a few words before continuing on their way. Not wanting to linger outside, Cain returned to the safety of the Pokémon Center. His identity as an association trainer provided some protection. I'll collect Umbra's mission item tomorrow and leave. The situation is getting out of hand. Resolving to depart, Cain lay on the bed and prepared for sleep. Chapter 133. Chapter 133. Dawn's first light kissed the skyline as Cain, cloaked in a cunning disguise, ventured northward from the Pokémon Center of Mahogany Town. The fabled Lake of Rage lay in wait, its once thriving community of residents now reduced to a memory. Team Rocket's malevolent grasp had choked the life from its shores, forcing its inhabitants to seek refuge within the city. Now, the lake was a stronghold for the notorious Team Rocket, teeming with their devious members. Cain's attire was unassuming, and he traveled without Pokémon companions along the northern path. The association, in a bid to accommodate residents and visitors, had constructed a convenient road to the Lake of Rage. Ironically, their well-intended efforts now served as an artery for Team Rocket's sinister operations. Sparse figures dotted the road ahead, their subtle mannerisms betraying their allegiance to the criminal syndicate. Though they appeared ordinary, Cain's keen perception detected the telltale signs of Team Rocket's influence. Unwavering, Cain pressed on. After 2 hours of steady progress, his path met a towering steel barricade. An isolated fence at the crossroad, flanked by a handful of guards, marked the entrance to forbidden territory. Cain straightened his clothing and approached with feigned nonchalance, meeting the steely gazes of the watchman. A guard, face in a motionless mask, stepped forward to intercept Cain. "This is a private area. Entry is prohibited without authorization." Wordlessly, Cain lifted the hem of his shirt, revealing a belt adorned with Team Rocket's emblem. He deftly extracted an identity card from the belt, extending it to the guard as evidence of his affiliation. The guard's stoic expression remained unbroken, but a hint of relaxation emerged as he scrutinized Cain's credentials. "Wait a moment," he intoned, seizing the card and retreating into the shelter of the guard post to verify its authenticity. The remaining sentinels kept a watchful eye on Cain, their suspicion undiminished. Cain couldn't help but admire the efficiency of Team Rocket's management system in Mahogany Town. The capable guards and strict protocols spoke volumes about the organization's stronghold in such a crucial location. It was clear that they were prepared for any confrontation with the association. The verification process was brief. Once Cain's identity card had been inspected, the guard returned it and gestured for his comrade to open the fence. They granted Cain passage, though he knew that the real challenge lay ahead. The Lake of Rage research base was still an hour's journey from the entrance, but Cain could already sense a change in the atmosphere. Team Rocket members no longer bothered to conceal their allegiance. Some donned the organization's signature uniforms, while others displayed the iconic emblem on their chests. To blend in, Cain retrieved a Team Rocket medal from his belt and fastened it to his shirt. He then tucked his shirt into his pants, leaving the Team Rocket belt in full view. The conspicuous display reduced the curious glances in his direction. With a flick of his wrist, Cain released Murkrow from its Pokeball. The sudden appearance of the dark/flying-type Pokémon caused the lingering stares to vanish altogether. At times, it was essential to reveal one's prowess to deter potential adversaries. Cain had successfully demonstrated his strength, and those with ulterior motives now thought twice before crossing him. With Murkrow by his side, Cain strode confidently toward the Lake of Rage research base. As they advanced, more and more Team Rocket members and their Pokémon appeared, paying no heed to Cain's presence. He had seamlessly assimilated into his surroundings, becoming just another cog in the machine of Team Rocket's operation. An hour later, Cain arrived at the entrance of a clandestine underground passage. A group of 10 uniformed Team Rocket members stood guard, their vigilant eyes scanning the surroundings as they encircled the entrance. The atmosphere here was palpably tense, a stark contrast to the more relaxed checkpoints Cain had encountered earlier. His approach drew their attention, but they appeared less rigid than before. They likely assumed that anyone in this area had already passed multiple layers of security, their identity as a Team Rocket member well established. However, this particular junction was off-limits to all but the higher-ups. As Cain drew closer, 2 formidable guards moved to block his path. "You can't come any closer, kid," one of the guards, a particularly menacing figure, said with a sinister grin. His fearsome visage was enough to strike terror into the hearts of even the bravest children. "I need to speak with your officer." "It's important," Cain replied, his gaze unwavering. The towering guard loomed over Cain, his muscular frame dwarfing him in comparison. He stood at least 2 meters tall, casting an imposing shadow over the young infiltrator. The 2 guards exchanged glances, sizing up Cain and the Murkrow perched on his shoulder. Despite their intimidating presence, Cain held his ground, betraying no fear or inexperience. It was evident that he was no ordinary recruit. "Fine, come with us. But keep your eyes straight ahead," the hulking guard commanded. Cain's display of courage and the prowess of his Pokémon had earned their grudging respect. After all, they reasoned, if they allowed just anyone to waltz in and demand an audience with their officer, that person would likely end up on the wrong side of a one-way ticket to the afterlife. As they approached the entrance to the underground passage, the fearsome guard led Cain to a seemingly unremarkable young man with an average build. "Officer, this kid wants to see you," the burly guard said, his voice noticeably subdued. The officer, who appeared quite ordinary, was undoubtedly formidable. His position guarding this crucial entrance was a testament to his strength. Absent-mindedly picking at his nails with a dagger, he glanced up at Cain and inquired, "What do you want?" "If there's nothing else, officer, I'll head back to my post," the hulking guard stammered, quickly retreating like a timid mouse before a cat. Cain deftly retrieved a black medal from his belt and flashed it briefly before the young officer, then tucked it away. The medal, a gift from Umbra, signified his status as a reserve member of Team Rocket's Shadow Unit. Despite the fleeting glimpse, the officer discerned the nature of Cain's medal. His expression shifted, and after scrutinizing Cain for a few seconds, he declared, "I've been waiting for you for quite some time." Cain's surprise was palpable. What did the officer mean? Had Umbra arranged for this man to meet him here? The young officer stood addressing Cain. "Let's go. I'll escort you inside." Turning to the other guards, he added, "I'm taking him in. If any of you dare to slack off, you'll regret it." At the sound of his warning, the burly guards shuddered, nodding vigorously to demonstrate their understanding. Satisfied with their response, the young officer unlocked the door to the underground entrance and gestured for Cain to follow him into the shadows beyond. Chapter 134. Chapter 134. Team Rocket's Lake of Rage research base was a place Cain had visited countless times in his past life, and he was intimately familiar with its terrain. However, the layout had changed drastically since then. The base's facilities were now well maintained, having not experienced any surprise attacks from the association, giving the place a brand new appearance. When Cain had visited in his previous life, the base had been in a state of disrepair, its facilities severely damaged, with traces of battle visible on the walls, floor, and in every corner. Back then, he had been assigned to clean up the debris so that Team Rocket could re-establish its research base. As a result, Cain had committed the base's layout to memory. He closely followed the young man, bypassing various checkpoints and venturing deeper into the base. Cain clearly remembered that there were 5 levels underground, with each level requiring higher clearance to access. The young man had already reached the 3rd level, which required at least a captain's level of clearance. Upon reaching the entrance to the 4th level, the young man finally stopped and entered a series of numbers on a keypad. Moments later, a screen above the keypad displayed an image of a middle-aged man with a mustache. "Sir, that person has arrived," the young man respectfully informed the man on the screen. "Ah, bring him in," the mustached middle-aged man said, squinting slightly as he caught sight of Cain behind the young man. The door, which required a certain level of clearance to open, swung open, and the young man led Cain further inside. The middle-aged man on the screen was likely a senior officer, possibly the person Umbra had arranged for Cain to meet. Team Rocket senior officers typically had the strength of a quasi-elite trainer, with a few powerful individuals reaching the level of an elite at their peak. In his previous life, Cain's highest achievement was around that level. To climb higher, one needed both strength and significant contributions to the organization. Before long, under the young man's guidance, Cain arrived at an office. A large desk sat in the center, behind which sat a middle-aged man wearing a white lab coat and sporting a small mustache. He was the same person who had granted Cain and the young man access earlier. Upon seeing Cain enter, the middle-aged man's eyes lit up. "So it's this young fellow?" The Team Rocket youth lowered his head respectfully and replied, "Yes, sir. I have seen his badges." Receiving confirmation from the young man, the middle-aged man appraised Cain from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the Murkrow perched on Cain's shoulder. Suddenly, Murkrow felt as if it were being watched by a predator, and its feathers bristled. The middle-aged man chuckled to himself before pressing a yellow button on his desk. Accompanied by a series of clicking sounds, a wall to the side split open, revealing a secret room resembling a training area. The middle-aged man stroked his mustache, his eyes narrowing in amusement. "Milan, test his strength, will you?" "Yes, sir," replied Milan, the Team Rocket youth who had guided Cain. What did he mean? Was testing his strength a part of Umbra's mission? Cain, puzzled, stepped into the secret training room. The room was spacious, filled with various training equipment. In the center, there was a moderately sized battle arena made of sturdy material. "Show me your strength. Pass the test, and you'll get what you want," the middle-aged man said with a teasing smile, as he lounged in his comfortable chair. Test his strength? Against an opponent who was clearly a captain? Cain couldn't help but feel somewhat helpless. How was he supposed to fight someone like that? It wouldn't be much of a challenge if the difference in power is too great. Milan, use just one Pokémon. As for you, kid, you have no limit on the number of Pokémon or battle rules. Just let loose, the middle-aged man said, as if he had read Cain's thoughts. Cain's eyes narrowed. He couldn't show off some of his Pokémon, but if his opponent only had one, there was a chance he could win. Most importantly, there were no battle rules. Furthermore, Cain didn't believe his opponent would risk killing him. Though he wasn't strong yet, he represented one of the 2 deputy leaders of Team Rocket's Shadow Unit, a senior elite-level figure. Even if Umbra wouldn't raise a fuss over someone as insignificant as Cain, the middle-aged man watching from the sidelines probably didn't want to create a bad impression with Umbra over such a trivial matter. Milan took a pokeball with the Team Rocket emblem from his belt and threw it onto the battlefield. A Golbat emerged. A glint appeared in Cain's eyes as he assessed the information about the Golbat. Pokémon. Golbat. Light green. Gender. Male. Level. 32. Type. Poison/flying. Ability. Inner focus. Held items. None. Egg moves. Gust. Faint attack. Basic moves. Absorb. Supersonic. Astonish. Bite. Wing attack. Confuse ray. Air cutter. Swift. Poison fang. Mean look. Taunt moves. Snatch. Defog. Technical machines. TM's hidden power. Water. Shadow ball. Sleep talk. Substitute. A captain's Pokémon typically had levels above 30. The level 32 Golbat in front of Cain was likely Milan's weakest Pokémon. He hadn't used his strongest Pokémon, partly because he felt it was unnecessary, but probably also because he feared Umbra finding out he was bullying a weaker opponent, which could harm his future prospects. Though Umbra wouldn't target a Team Rocket member of his level, even a hint of dissatisfaction from Umbra would encourage countless people to bring Milan's head as a trophy to get Umbra's attention. Since his opponent was holding back, Cain knew he had more room to maneuver. Chapter 135. Chapter 135. Cain could call forth either Slowpoke or Sneasel, as both of them could counter Golbat, a dual poison and flying-type Pokémon. However, revealing Slowpoke right now wasn't an option, so Sneasel became Cain's prime choice. Although the middle-aged man had said Cain could use any number of Pokémon, his level 19 Ghastly stood no chance against the level 32 Golbat. Moreover, his Miltank wasn't fit for this battle either. Cain tossed a Pokeball, and after a flash of red light, Sneasel appeared on the battlefield with crossed arms and a haughty tilt of its head. Seeing Sneasel, Milan and the middle-aged man both showed surprise. Given their experience, they could tell that this Sneasel was no ordinary specimen. "Murkrow, Sneasel, you're up," Cain announced. He was confident in Murkrow, but Sneasel had only recently been caught, and they lacked the rapport needed for battle. Sneasel's performance would be crucial to the outcome. "Golbat, use Confuse Ray on Murkrow," Milan calmly ordered, initiating the attack. As Milan spoke, a strange glowing orb emerged from Golbat's mouth. "Murkrow, use Tailwind for speed. Sneasel, use agility." Cain countered. Even though Golbat was fast, Murkrow and Sneasel would outpace it once their speed increased. Tailwind boosted the entire team's speed, so both Murkrow and Sneasel benefited. With Sneasel's added agility, its already impressive speed now surpassed Golbat's. Cain had also removed Murkrow's weight prior to the battle, so it was now at its peak speed. Golbat's Confuse Ray was fast, but as a Ghost-type move, it had limited effect on the Dark-type Murkrow and Sneasel. Although Murkrow didn't dodge it, the move failed to confuse the Pokémon. Milan remained unperturbed, having only used Confuse Ray as a test. Sneasel, use Taunt. Then follow with Quick Attack. Murkrow, close in and use Wing Attack. Sneasel pointed at Golbat, and a dark aura enveloped the flying Pokémon, turning its eyes red and making it crave battle. The stage was set for an intense showdown between these powerful Pokémon. "Then let's use Wing Attack too." Taunt forced the opponent to use only attacking moves for a short period, disabling the use of any status-altering moves. Golbat collided with Murkrow in midair, their energy-charged wings striking one another fiercely. The difference in power was evident. Murkrow was sent flying, while Golbat only swayed slightly, retreating just a bit. As Murkrow was knocked away, Sneasel rushed forward with a flash, its sharp claws aimed at Golbat. "Sneasel, Ice Punch," Cain commanded. At Cain's order, Sneasel's arm was imbued with an icy energy. The punch connected, and the super-effective Ice-type move inflicted significant damage on Golbat, far more than the earlier collision with Murkrow. "Golbat, use Swift," Milan ordered, unfazed by the damage sustained by Golbat and initiating another attack. Golbat's move pool consisted of many Ghost-type moves, which were not very effective against the 2 Dark-type Pokémon. Consequently, it was somewhat restricted in battle. Sneasel was grazed by the Swift attack and had to abandon its next move to evade further damage. Cain analyzed the flow of the battle, a strange glint flickering in his eyes. The middle-aged man's claim that there were no rules wouldn't make things that simple. If the battle continued like this, Cain couldn't guarantee a win. If Sneasel had spent more time with Cain, the situation might be different. But for now, they were still slightly off sync. Cain had commanded Sneasel to use Ice Punch earlier, and although it responded quickly, something was still amiss. With a truly harmonious partnership, Sneasel would have been prepared to execute the move before Cain's command. So the trainer's signal would coincide with the completion of the move, not the beginning. If that were the case, the damage Golbat suffered would have been much greater. As if he understood something or made a decision, Cain coldly said, Murkrow, use hidden power. Sneasel. Icicle crash. Target the human. Since there were no rules mentioned, attacking the opposing trainer was fair game, right? This would force Golbat to choose between continuing its assault or defending its trainer. Either way, it wouldn't be easy for the opponent since Cain had 2 Pokémon. The middle-aged man, who had been observing the battle with interest, paused while stroking his mustache before breaking into a delighted laugh. Murkrow gathered electrical energy for hidden power in midair, while Sneasel, upon hearing Cain's command, conjured icy currents around its body. Milan, on the other side, heard Cain's order and instead of getting angry, smirked. As a member of Team Rocket, one must do whatever it takes to achieve their goal. If they fought like a Pokémon Association trainer, it would be like playing house. In no time, Murkrow's energy ball and Sneasel's massive icicles formed, bypassing Golbat and aiming straight for Milan. Boom! The attack kicked up a large cloud of dust, but Cain frowned as he watched Murkrow and Sneasel complete their assault. He noticed that Golbat hadn't moved to defend or attack, simply standing dumbfounded on the battlefield. The middle-aged man, who had been sitting like a boss on his chair, laughed and walked to the edge of the arena, clapping enthusiastically. I thought you might have forgotten how to fight after leaving the island for a while, but your reaction was quite good. No wonder you caught Sir Umbra's eye, he said. Cain's eyebrows raised at the man's words. Was he testing whether Cain had the killer instinct? As the smoke cleared, Milan approached with a Weezing by his side. Evidently, he had summoned Weezing to defend against the attacks from Murkrow and Sneasel. Cain's eyes narrowed as he looked at the Weezing. According to the system scan, this Weezing was level 39 and possessed a dark green aptitude, making it much stronger than Golbat. So even with Murkrow and Sneasel's combined power, they were no match for Weezing. Allow me to introduce you to your senior, a previous trial participant of Purgatory Island and currently a Team Rocket captain, Milan. The middle-aged man patted Milan's shoulder as he introduced him. Chapter 136. Chapter 136. Listening to the middle-aged man's explanation, Cain felt a slight stir within him. The previous batch of trial participants? Now having the position of a captain, it seemed that after leaving the trial island, he would likely have been at the level of a squad leader, right? Team Rocket's trial island was of a 3-month period, but trials didn't occur every 3 months. The time between each trial varied, but it wouldn't exceed half a year. Not everyone had the experience of being reborn like Cain, so this person named Milan, who managed to become a captain within about half a year, definitely possessed strong skills. Milan stood to the side without speaking. People who emerged from these trial islands were not like those who came from schools, where seniors took care of their juniors. Generally, those from emerged were extreme egoists, only concerning themselves with matters that benefited them. The middle-aged man didn't provide any further introduction. He had only mentioned Milan because Milan worked under him. He took out a palm-sized black box from his bag and handed it to Cain, saying, "This is what Sir Umbra needs. I've had it prepared for quite some time. Now I'm entrusting it to you, and you must deliver it safely." The middle-aged man's gaze grew sharp as he spoke. He might have seemed harmless with a smile on his face, but anyone who could reach his rank within Team Rocket must have taken countless lives. Cain solemnly accepted the box and placed it in his ring storage space. He wasn't qualified to inquire about its contents. His mission was simply to deliver the item to Umbra. In the Pokémon World, while teleportation methods were well developed, some things couldn't be teleported due to their immense energy or other reasons. For example, a high-quality evolution stone couldn't be teleported because its contained energy was too vast and couldn't be quantized. Thus, the occupation of courier still existed in the Pokémon World. Alright, if there's nothing else, don't linger here. Mahogany Town is currently unstable, the middle-aged man urged Cain after handing over the item. Yes, Cain nodded in acknowledgement. Indeed, Mahogany Town wasn't safe at the moment, with the potential for battles to erupt at any time. Boom! Just as he said this, the entire base suddenly shook, and countless alarms blared throughout the facility. Although the base only shook slightly, cracks began to appear on the walls. Damn it, they're not really attacking now, are they? The middle-aged man's face darkened instantly. He had just mentioned the possibility of danger. Could the association be attacking? What were the guards doing up front? Milan's expression changed too. A large-scale battle between the association and Team Rocket would be dangerous, even for a captain like himself. There was no guarantee he'd make it out alive. The two of them left the office without paying any attention to Cain. If the association was indeed attacking, no one would care about a minor character like him. Cain's expression wavered. If the association attacked now, it was uncertain whether he could escape. He glanced at the office door. The two who left probably wouldn't return anytime soon. Slowpoke, set a coordinate here. Cain gritted his teeth and summoned Slowpoke. Although the Association's attack was a disaster for Team Rocket's base, Cain saw it as an opportunity. The main computer terminal in the research base contained valuable data. If the AI system had a chance to access it, the accumulated data he had painstakingly collected from his previous life might be dwarfed in amount. However, the main computer was situated on the 5th floor, a place where even a Team Rocket captain couldn't access. Only those at the executive rank or key researchers were allowed. Cain had Slowpoke set a psychic coordinate here, hoping he might have a chance to return later. But the risk was unpredictable, so he planned to play it by ear. By the time Slowpoke had set the coordinates and Cain returned it back to its Pokeball, the two men who had left earlier came back with grim faces. Seeing that Cain was still standing here, the middle-aged man's expression became even colder, and he said impatiently, "There's an elevator here that goes directly to the surface. Get on it and don't head south. The Association is attacking from that direction. The people up front should be able to hold out for a while." The middle-aged man signaled to Milan, who pushed Cain into the elevator, closed the door, and turned to leave without another word. Cain stood silently inside, and after a few seconds, he felt the elevator start ascending. Half a minute later, when the elevator doors opened once more, Cain was already outside, bathed in sunlight that carried a hint of warmth. Gazing southward, he noticed faint rumblings and the occasional flicker of flame in the distance. "The Association seems quite determined this time," Cain murmured to himself. In his previous life, after attaining quasi-elite status, Cain had made an effort to understand the reasons behind the Association's attack. Although his knowledge was incomplete, he gleaned some information from the scattered words of others. It appeared that the primary research being carried out within the Lake of Rage facility touched on the Association's core interests, namely studies related to Pokémon evolution. It was unclear how far the research had progressed, but it must have been on the verge of success, otherwise, the Association would not have been compelled to act. Instead of leaving immediately after exiting the elevator, Cain lingered, despite the danger of staying in such a place. He found it difficult to abandon the potential wealth of data and information, even if he could only obtain a small portion of it. That alone could provide him with significant assistance. After all, weren't the various functions of the AI system only possible because of the vast amount of data stored within its database? If he could acquire some more data, perhaps he could decode the hatching method for the Larvitar egg, or even discover a reliable method for quickly enhancing his psychic talent. Although it was risky, the potential rewards made it worth a try. As a last resort, he had Slowpoke's teleport as his trump card, ready to save him in case of an emergency. Chapter 137. Chapter 137. In the heart of the battlefield, the two opposing factions were poised for action. On one side, the Team Rocket contingent was led by a fiery red-haired woman dressed in a white robe. She reached out to caress the Houndoom standing beside her, her face dark and foreboding. Facing her was a spry, white-haired old man from the Pokémon Association. Leaning on his walking stick, he was accompanied by a seemingly harmless Swinub. But no one dared to underestimate the unassuming creature by his side. This elderly man from the Association was none other than Price, the gym leader of Mahogany Town. He was exceptionally skilled in the use of ice-type Pokémon, and he had taken the Swinub species to new heights by breaking the limitations of its kind. The Team Rocket leader in charge of Mahogany Town, Ariana, was one of the 4 Team Rocket executives. Gritting her teeth, she addressed Price. "What did those Association politicians promise you to make you take action, old man?" Her reputation was at stake. If the Association succeeded in breaking through, she would bear the primary responsibility, even if it wasn't her fault. In Giovanni's eyes, it would be a dereliction of duty. "Hey, young lady, don't be so agitated. You know very well what you're doing," Price chuckled, rubbing his walking stick's handle. "I'm only following orders this time. If you continue to stand in my way, don't blame me for overpowering you." Price's words only soured Ariana's expression further. She was self-aware enough to know that, although both she and her opponent were Elite 4 level trainers, there was a vast difference in strength among those at that level. Facing a seasoned Elite 4 powerhouse like Price, she didn't stand a chance. However, she couldn't just let him pass. At the very least, she had to stall until her operatives managed to secure the data they needed, minimizing their losses. Otherwise, she would have a hard time explaining herself to Giovanni. Ariana unclipped several Pokeballs from her belt, a total of 8, to be precise. With a swift motion, she threw them all out, and one by one, imposing Pokémon materialized on the battlefield. Observing Ariana's actions, Price chuckled, shook his head, and then summoned 4 Pokémon of his own. A fierce battle was about to erupt. But the gap between Ariana and Price was painfully obvious. Including the Houndoom she already had by her side, Ariana fielded 9 Pokémon in total, while Price only employed 5, including his Swinub. Yet they fought on equal footing, making it clear who was the stronger trainer. As the two leaders clashed, the remaining members of the Pokémon Association and Team Rocket plunged into battle. It quickly became apparent that the association trainers, unaccustomed to the brutality of real combat, were struggling against their ruthless adversaries. A single determined Team Rocket member could often hold off two association trainers of equal level, and if an association trainer made a misstep, death wasn't off the tables. Price, taking in the scene, furrowed his brow. He summoned 3 more powerful Pokémon, either at the Elite Four or close to that level, and only then did the tide begin to turn in the association's favor. Snow began to fall from the sky as Price demonstrated his true strength. Ariana gritted her teeth, watching helplessly as her side was decimated by the old man's Pokémon. She had to give her all just to hold him off, unable to spare a thought for anyone else. The battle grew increasingly chaotic. From a distance, Cain watched silently, lying low on the ground, not daring to move. He couldn't see the battle between Ariana and Price clearly, but from the snowflakes as large as thumbnails that appeared above his head, despite being almost 2 kilometers away from the battlefield, he could tell that Price was incredibly powerful. His ability to manipulate snowfall and change the environment in a radius of over 2 kilometers was no mere Pokémon move. It was akin to altering the weather in an entire region. The might of a veteran Elite Four member was truly terrifying. Only when Cain saw the association members breach Team Rocket's defenses did he quietly summon Slowpoke. He switched his mask for one he'd never used before and placed his hand on Slowpoke's back, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Ariana's battle with Price was at a stalemate, but it was clear that she was at a disadvantage. Even though she had more Pokémon, quantity didn't equate to quality. Each time she launched a surprise attack aimed directly at Price, his Swinub would block it. Its sole purpose was to control the snowfall and protect Price's safety. In reality, Ariana's battle against Price was 9 against 4, and she was still losing ground. Cain waited until the association's battlefront had completely pushed Team Rocket back to the entrance before he prepared to act. By now, quite a few people had already broken into the underground base, with the first wave of intruders likely having already penetrated deep inside. Slowpoke, use teleport to the coordinates we marked earlier, Cain said, touching Slowpoke's back and connecting with it through telepathy. Slowpoke's eyes lit up, and since the distance wasn't too great, it quickly located the previously marked coordinates. Wrapped in psychic energy, they vanished from their original spot in an instant. As Slowpoke activated teleport, a Pokémon Association psychic trainer furrowed his brow. He approached Price and whispered, "Price, someone just used teleport, and it seems they're headed into the base." Upon hearing this, Price squinted, a glint in his eyes. "No matter," he said. "Keep sensing. When they reappear, try to detect which direction they're teleporting to. If possible, intercept them with a spatial distortion." His tone carried a hint of coldness. He wouldn't let anyone take advantage of their hard-fought efforts. True to his nature, he would make sure to track down the intruder. "Yes, sir," the psychic trainer responded. The association had many psychic trainers within their ranks, and this individual was just one of many. "Quicken our attack. Break through." Price's voice was low, but it carried across the entire battlefield. The previously defensive Price finally began directing his Pokémon to go on the offensive. As he changed the tempo, Ariana's pressure increased significantly. However, she was waiting for her subordinates to transfer all the data. At that moment, Cain, with the help of Slowpoke's teleport, re-entered the middle-aged man's deserted office. Chapter 138. Chapter 138. No one knew how the association had caused such a commotion, but the once sturdy walls of the office now bore subtle cracks. With Slowpoke by his side, Cain crept out of the office. He was familiar with the layout of the 4th and 5th floors, having cleaned them more than once in his previous life. And this was one reason Cain dared to stir the pot now. The hallways were empty. Team Rocket's researchers must have evacuated at the first sign of trouble, while their combatants were engaged in battle with the association above. Unobstructed, Cain bypassed the access-restricted doors as if they were mere illusions. He simply placed his hand on the small pad next to each door, allowing his AI system to hack in and open the door without leaving a trace. In less than 5 minutes, Cain arrived at the entrance to the 5th floor. Meanwhile, the association members who had been fighting their way through had only just reached the 2nd floor. But as Cain stood before the door to the 5th floor, he started to hesitate. He had overheard the middle-aged man talk about sending someone to the 5th floor to copy and destroy the database earlier. So if Cain barged in now, he'd likely run into that person, and with his current strength, his chances of victory were low. Cain lowered his hand from the door's security pad as his thoughts raced. But just as he considered abandoning his plan, the sounds of battle erupted from the 3rd floor. The association members realized that by the time they breached the final defense and reached the 5th floor, Team Rocket's research data would be all but destroyed. So several leaders decided to pick up speed and sent a few scouts ahead. The first two elite association trainers to break through were now trying to force open the door between the second and third floors. It must be said that Team Rocket had put a lot of effort into securing these critical doors, that even two elite trainers couldn't break through quickly. After a moment's hesitation, Cain decided not to enter the fifth floor. Instead, he punched the alarm switch at the entrance, shattering it. Instantly, alarms blared throughout the fourth and fifth floors. Having destroyed the alarm switch, Cain darted into a small room near the fifth floor's entrance. He pressed his hand against Slowpoke's back, ready to have Slowpoke teleport them away at the first sign of someone entering the room. Pressing his ear to the door, Cain slowed his breathing, a skill he had mastered during his previous life as a member of Team Rocket. Many infiltration missions required this skill, so Cain was quite adept at it. Outside, the sound of a mechanical door opening could be heard, followed by hurried footsteps and a string of curses. Damn it! Damn it! As the sounds faded away, Cain took a deep breath but chose not to open the door immediately. Instead, he decided to wait in silence. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, the frantic footsteps returned, but this time they were calmer, stopping in front of the entrance to the fifth floor. Nobody here? Then who destroyed the alarm switch? Hearing the man's muttered question, Cain's heart raced. He employed his meager psychic power to create a thread-like connection between himself and Slowpoke, which would allow Slowpoke to use teleport and cut the channeling time required in half. Boom! A loud crash echoed from above, signaling that the intruders had broken through the second-floor door and were now attacking the third. Damn you, association dogs! With rapid footsteps, the man hurried away once more. Cain let out a long sigh. Finally, the man outside had been lured away. Without any further hesitation, Cain and Slowpoke entered the fifth floor. Inside, they found a ring of computers with numerous keyboards and some empty shelves that once held various items, all now gone. Cain sprinted to the main computer terminal and placed his hand on it. System, analyze the database and gather information, he shouted inwardly. Beep. Task initiated. Database analysis in progress. Due to the large volume of data, the process may take a while. Current progress, 0.1%. Cain knew there would be a lot of data, but he hadn't expected this much. Even with the AI system's analytical speed, the progress bar inched forward at an agonizingly slow 0.1% pace. Although anxious, Cain knew there was nothing he could do but wait. He kept his hand on the computer and scanned the room, looking for anything of value. It was clear that the person Ariana had sent had been thorough in cleaning up the place. Apart from the untouched computers, everything else had been taken, leaving nothing but scattered papers strewn across the floor and tables. With nothing else to do, Cain focused his attention on the system's scanning progress. 10 minutes had passed, and the progress was only at 5%. Still, that 5% wasn't to be underestimated. It was an enormous amount of data. Another 10 minutes went by, and the sounds of battle neared. The voice of the Team Rocket member who had fled earlier could be heard commanding from outside. From the sound of it, he was in quite a predicament, struggling to handle two association trainers of the same level. In the lower ranks, Team Rocket members might be stronger than association trainers. However, as they climb higher in rank, the association trainer's strength tends to grow exponentially, with elite association trainers usually being able to suppress Team Rocket elites in normal battles. That was because, by the time they reached the elite level, association trainers were no longer naive newcomers. At the very least, they had experienced real bloody battles and some even had the lives of underground organization members on their hands. Moments later, the battle gradually reached the entrance of the fifth floor. Cain had no choice but to stop. If he didn't leave now, he probably wouldn't be able to once they entered. Fortunately, the system's task was now 15% complete, which for Cain, represented a vast amount of data. He could only hope that much of it would be useful. Slowpoke. Teleport. Ha. Chapter 139. Chapter 139. Just as Cain prepared to leave, he noticed a broken test tube lying between two computers, containing some type of green fluid. He picked up the test tube, took out a small bottle from his ring, and poured the liquid from the test tube into it. After screwing on the cap, he put the bottle and the broken test tube into the ring. Slowpoke. Teleport. Let's go, Cain said, placing his hand on Slowpoke's back. At his command, Slowpoke focused its psychic energy, closed its eyes, and began to sense the coordinates it had left behind. Suddenly, its eyes snapped open, surging with a blue glow, as it whisked Cain away. Unbeknownst to Cain, the association psychic who had detected Slowpoke's teleport earlier during the battle outside the base, sensed Slowpoke's psychic energy once again. He recalled a battling alakazam and placed his hand on its back, linking their psychic energy. As their energy resonated, a spatial ripple formed around them. As if sensing something, their psychic energy suddenly surged, followed by a violent flash and then an abrupt calm. Wiping the sweat from his brow, the psychic walked over to Price and whispered. Price, the teleporter who entered the base earlier was about to leave, but I intercepted them. They should be somewhere not far from the direction of our assault, and they won't be able to use teleport for at least a day. Price and Ariana had been battling for over an hour now. Though he hadn't defeated Ariana yet, her number of Pokémon had dwindled from 9 to 5. However, Price was also struggling. Of the 5 Pokémon he had used in battle, 2 had already been rendered incapable of fighting. Had he not been concerned about her potentially fighting back fiercely in her final moments, he might have gone all out from the start. At the same time, Ariana was anxiously waiting for her underlings, who she had sent to the 5th floor. Once they reported back confirming the data was secured, she would retreat without hesitation. Price vaguely remembered the psychic trainer who had mentioned someone using teleportation to escape, but he was preoccupied with his battle against Ariana and had no time to concern himself with such a trivial character. Send a couple of people to look for them. Anyone who can have their teleportation interrupted must not be very strong. Understood. The other person also agreed that the main focus should be here, and the individual who had tried to teleport away was just a minor character. Thus, 2 skilled trainers from the association were casually assigned to find the culprit. At that moment, Cain and Slowpoke surfaced from the depths of Lake of Rage. Slowpoke was in a bewildered state, unable to understand why the teleportation that had always worked before had failed this time. It felt as if someone had pushed them out. Cain looked at the confused Slowpoke and helplessly wiped the water from his face. Whenever he teleported with Slowpoke, he would close his eyes and arrive at the destination in the blink of an eye. However, this time before he could even open his eyes, he found himself suffocating. If Slowpoke hadn't helped him swim to the surface, he might have drowned given his slow swimming speed. Slowpoke, what happened? Finally catching his breath, Cain couldn't help but ask. Yadong, Slowpoke responded, conveying the situation they had just encountered through telepathy. Were we targeted? Or were we discovered? Cain wondered after hearing Slowpoke's explanation. Had his data theft been discovered by someone? The Association or Team Rocket? Did someone know his true identity? Realizing this, Cain knew he couldn't linger. Association or Team Rocket search teams might show up soon. Slowpoke, can you teleport again? Cain asked once more. Slowpoke closed its eyes and tried to sense the spatial coordinates it had left earlier, only to find chaos and an inability to detect anything. With a helpless shake of its head, it conveyed its inability to teleport. Seeing Slowpoke shake its head, Cain was even more certain that someone had tampered with their teleportation. Slowpoke, let's get out of here quickly. Cain determined their direction based on the position of the sun and the surrounding mountains, placing his hand on Slowpoke's shoulder. Their priority was to leave this place as soon as possible. There was no telling whether the person who interrupted them could track them like Sabrina could. Facing someone of that level, Cain would be helpless. However, Cain's concerns were unnecessary. No one would care about such a minor character like him. Not everyone was as bored as Sabrina, nor could everyone sense Slowpoke's uniqueness. Utilizing Slowpoke's water-type moves, they quickly navigated through the lake. Although there were numerous Pokémon in the lake, mostly Magikarp, as long as they didn't encounter a Gyarados, Slowpoke could escape without issue. Cain felt apprehensive about the prospect of facing a Gyarados because in the Lake of Rage, these imposing creatures were plentiful and often traveled in groups. One encounter could quickly escalate into a dangerous situation. Fortunately, when their teleportation was interrupted, they were already near the eastern mountain range of Lake of Rage. All they had to do was pass through the foggy forest by the lake, and they'd reach the mountains, where they could be as free as a bird or a fish in the vast ocean, far from Cain's pursuers. Slowpoke, not being the fastest swimmer, took nearly 20 minutes to reach the shore with Cain. Luckily, they didn't encounter any Gyarados, or their escape would not have been so easy. After this incident, Cain felt the need to prepare a flying-type Pokémon as a means of transportation. Even if it wasn't a main battle Pokémon, having it solely for flying would be great. If he had a Pokémon capable of carrying people through the air, he wouldn't be so passive. He could simply fly over Lake of Rage, the foggy forest, and reach the safety of the Misty Mountains. Chapter 140. Chapter 140. The foggy forest was located to the east of Lake of Rage. It was named for the thick fog that permeated the woods year-round. Ordinary people entering the forest could easily lose their way, making it difficult to leave. The forest was home to some ghost-type Pokémon, so the faint-hearted might be terrified if they ventured inside. Some had even entered and left the forest in a state of shock. The Pokémon Association warned those with insufficient strength not to enter the foggy forest recklessly. The same applied to the adjoining Misty Mountains. After climbing ashore, Cain wasted no time, leading Slowpoke straight into the foggy forest. Although Slowpoke couldn't use teleport, it could still utilize other psychic-type moves, so Cain wasn't worried about the ghost-type Pokémon. However, for safety, he also summoned Murkrow. After walking for a full hour into the depths of the forest, Cain finally stopped. Searching for some dry wood, Cain started a fire on the ground to dry off. Once completely dry, Cain changed into a fresh set of clothes. He stowed his soaked garments into his ring, since they were still on the run and needed to avoid leaving any traces behind. In the foggy forest, the sun was not visible, but it was already close to setting when Cain entered with Slowpoke. An hour had passed since then, and it must have been dark outside by now. Cain summoned his Pokémon, preparing to make dinner. Suddenly, two figures emerged from the woods. Both of them were dressed in mid-tier Pokémon Association uniforms, and slowly made their way towards Cain. In truth, they were disoriented and couldn't find their bearings in the foggy forest, wandering aimlessly like headless flies as they searched for their assigned target. But they had unexpectedly spotted a flicker of firelight and hurried over. Although their superiors had assigned them to find someone, they were given no information. Not even the person's appearance or clothing. How were they supposed to find their target? With a blind cat catching a dead rat mentality, they thought they might as well see if they could stumble upon their target by chance. Little did they know that just as they were approaching the firelight, their target, Cain, was there. Cain couldn't help but feel frustrated. Had his luck been too good before, leading to today's bad fortune? They had randomly chosen a spot to camp in the foggy forest, only to be found by two Pokémon Association trainers looking for them. One of them stepped forward and asked, "Hey there, have you seen anyone else pass by here?" Quickly thinking, Cain pretended to consider before answering, "I think I saw someone earlier, all wet and looking quite fierce, so I didn't approach him." "Are you two looking for someone?" Upon hearing Cain's response, the two trainers exchanged glances. The one who had spoken earlier waved his hand with a smile, saying, No, we were just curious. People are rare in the foggy forest, so it's not often we come across others." "Yeah, I usually don't see anyone for weeks, but today I've met 3 people. Quite unusual," Cain said as he continued setting up his tent, maintaining his composure. Observing Cain's nonchalant demeanor, the two men's initial suspicions wavered once more. At the very least, the young person before them, who spoke with an endearing simplicity, didn't seem like a bad individual. "You guys are association members, right?" Cain pretended not to notice their exchange of glances. As they remained silent, Cain spoke to break their defenses and find an opportunity to escape. "Ah, yes, we are," they replied hastily, their exchange interrupted by Cain's question. "Where are you from, young man?" Cain finished setting up his tent and sat down on a rock next to the fire, warming his hands above the flames, driving away the chill. "Oh, I'm from Saffron City in the Kanto region. I started my journey recently and heard that training in the Misty Mountains could be really effective, so I came straight here. But I've been stuck here for almost a month and still haven't found my way out." The two men joined Cain by the fire, warming themselves like he did. "Saffron City? That's a big city, right?" "Well, it's not much different from Goldenrod City. But my family is pretty ordinary, and I'm the only one who became a trainer," Cain casually replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, would you mind showing us your association ID? No offense, but we just want to confirm you're one of us. As you can see, we're all association trainers." The two men gestured to their own clothes, clearly proud of their affiliation. Cain pretended to be hesitant, mulling it over for a moment. The two men, thinking Cain didn't trust them, showed their own IDs, assuring him they meant no harm. At the same time, they subtly reached for their Pokeballs, ready to take action if Cain showed any signs of trouble. Upon seeing their IDs, Cain nodded and pulled out his own, tossing it to them. They examined it carefully, comparing the information and Cain's appearance, finding no discrepancies. It appeared to be his genuine ID. While not every person with association ID was necessarily good, they was far more trustworthy than Team Rocket members they'd fought earlier that day. Handing Cain his ID back, one of them apologized with a sheepish grin. "Sorry, kid. Don't take it personally. It's just that making more friends out here is always a good thing." Given their limited exposure to fake IDs, they were inclined to trust Cain's ID. Chapter 141. Chapter 141. Cain smiled and nodded in understanding. "Would you two like something to eat?" "I was just about to start a barbecue," he said, pulling out a pile of supplies and tools. His appearance as a typical wilderness survival trainer, along with his previous association ID card, dispelled 90% of the duo's doubts. After all, Cain didn't look that old, and they reasoned that if they were his age, they wouldn't be so calm in such situations either. "Haha, now that you mention it, I am pretty hungry," one of them said, patting his stomach with a hearty laugh. They had been battling Team Rocket all day and hadn't eaten much. The other man nodded as well, but compared to his companion, he remained more cautious. They were in the wilderness after all, and it never hurt to be careful. Cain didn't mind their attitudes and started grilling the meat. His Pokémon, too, looked eager and impatient. Everything seemed normal. The two men didn't summon their Pokémon, but they kept their Pokeballs within easy reach, ready to call upon their partners at a moment's notice in case of any trouble. They chose their seating strategically, ensuring that they would have enough time to react and summon their Pokémon for defense if any of Cain's Pokémon made suspicious moves. Moreover, they weren't too worried about Cain's Pokémon. Although they appeared strong, they seemed no match for their own. The reason they didn't summon their Pokémon right away was that they weren't used to eating with them. Another factor was that their Pokémon had been battling all day and had already been fed when they were recalled to their Pokeballs. It was better to let them rest inside. Not everyone was like Cain, who enjoyed dining with his Pokémon. Many people treated their Pokémon like pets, and keeping them fed was considered a high level of care. Some even saw Pokémon as disposable tools, to be discarded after use. It didn't take long for the meat to cook. Cain's expert grilling skills and the variety of seasonings he used surprised the duo, and the rich aroma soon filled the air. "It should be ready to eat now," Cain said, cutting a small piece of meat from a larger chunk with a dagger and popping it into his mouth. Watching Cain stuff the golden brown grilled meat into his mouth, the man who had first claimed to be hungry couldn't help but swallow his saliva. However, since it was someone else's food, they didn't feel comfortable helping themselves without permission. The other man had initially been wary, fearing that Cain might tamper with the meat. However, as Cain had grilled the meat under their watchful eyes, using ordinary ingredients and seasonings, he gradually let go of his concerns. The aroma of the grilled meat was just too enticing. Under their eager gazes, Cain tasted every piece of grilled meat to check if any were undercooked. This only made the two men even hungrier. It seemed as though Cain just realized his rudeness, and he gave an apologetic smile to the two trainers. "I'm sorry. I got too absorbed in grilling. I don't have many hobbies, but I love cooking. Why don't you try my barbecue? The taste should be pretty good." Both trainers waved their hands to indicate it was no big deal. But looking at the huge chunks of meat on the grill, they couldn't help but wonder why Cain had chosen such large pieces, which made it difficult for them to dig in. They hadn't prepared any utensils in their haste. Sensing their awkwardness, Cain slapped his forehead and pulled 2 sets of tools from his ring, handing them over. Then, he sliced the juiciest and most golden part of the meat from the fattest piece with a dagger, skewered it, and handed it to the famished trainer who had been complaining about his hunger earlier. Thank you. Amidst his profuse gratitude, Cain placed the meat into the trainer's bowl. Unable to wait any longer, the trainer began eating with a fork. Cain then found another succulent piece of meat, cut a large chunk, and offered it to the other trainer, whose eyes eagerly followed the dagger. For some reason, the meat seemed to stick to the dagger, refusing to let go. Growing impatient, the trainer picked up his fork and bowl to help Cain peel the meat off the blade. Little did he know, a sinister smile gradually spread across Cain's face, revealing a hint of ruthlessness. As the corner of his mouth curled up, a chilling murderous intent emerged in his previously calm black eyes. Finally, the meat was torn from the dagger, but Cain's hand showed no sign of pausing. A flash of white light reflected in his eyes as the sharp blade sliced through an artery, sending a clear sensation through the dagger. The trainer's eyes widened in shock, realizing that his guard had been down at the worst possible moment. "One down," Cain thought to himself. The other trainer, who was mid-bite, was also taken aback. He never expected the seemingly naive young man before them to suddenly attack his companion. It was now obvious to even the dullest observer that this youth was the target of their search. But his surprise lasted only a moment, and without even bothering to spit out the meat, he violently pulled the fork from his mouth and lunged at Cain. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The trainer hadn't even summoned his Pokémon, so his best choice was to deal with the youth using his fork and then confront the Pokémon afterward. As a mid-level association trainer, he had plenty of wilderness survival experience and had killed before, so there was no hesitation. The cold, gleaming fork was aimed straight at Cain's neck. Their cramped surroundings meant it would reach its target in no time. But it was as if Cain had anticipated the other trainer's move. He showed no intention of backing away, knowing that doing so would only result in impaling himself on the approaching fork. Using the momentum of the swing, he shifted his body just a few centimeters forward, narrowly avoiding the fork's aim at his throat. Instead, it found purchase in his shoulder. Before Cain's brain could even process the pain, the dagger gripped tightly in his hand continued its swing. Seeing that his fork had missed its mark, the trainer's face changed color as he tried to pull it out. But by that time, the dagger had already reached the man's back. Squelp! The 15-centimeter blade plunged hilt deep into his spine, severing it in an instant. Thud! Thud! Both of the trainer's lifeless bodies collapsed one after the other. The altercation took place within a mere second or two, too fast for Murkrow and the others to react. Although they knew the two men were trouble and were prepared to take them out within 5 seconds upon receiving the order, the intruders were cautious and seated far from the Pokémon, whilst also being ready to summon their own Pokémon and defend themselves if necessary. So it fell upon Cain to handle the situation. And fortunately, he succeeded. Chapter 142. Chapter 142. It wasn't until the two bodies fell that Murkrow and the others reacted, rushing over and adopting aggressive stances against the lifeless figures on the ground. Cain waved them off, signaling the threat was over. Only then did the pain from the fork lodged in his shoulder hit him like a tidal wave. Gritting his teeth against the agony, he removed the Pokeballs from the attackers' belts, locking them before finally allowing himself to relax. The events unfolded so quickly that he barely had time to strategize, but his actions proved to be the most effective in that moment. The two intruders were both strong and vigilant. Although he initially deceived them, there were many holes in his story. If they had investigated the alleged sighting of a drenched person in the area, they would have discovered the truth. So he had to eliminate them before they could. Using Pokemon would have been too conspicuous, and the two were experienced enough to keep a close watch on Murkrow and the others. Thankfully, he appeared harmless and young, with a less intimidating physique, which lowered their guard. If he had been an average adult, it might not have been so easy. Wincing, he pulled the blood-soaked fork from his shoulder. The assailant had been ruthless, driving the fork with all his might into his flesh. He tossed the bloody utensil into the fire to mask the scent of blood. Then he took a bottle of antiseptic from his ring and picked up a twig to bite on, preparing to pour the liquid onto his wound. But before he could, Miltank stepped forward, stopping his motion, and gestured that she would take care of it herself. Cain felt reassured, allowing Miltank to help tend to his wound, as it would be cumbersome for him to do it by himself. Once the wound was disinfected, ointment applied, and bandaged, it was more or less taken care of. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he looked down at the two trainers lying on the ground with their eyes still open. Cain silently thought, "If I hadn't dealt with you too, you'd be dealing with me. So, I had to send you to the afterlife." Without further ado, Cain took all of their valuable possessions and spatial equipment. With the help of Slowpoke and the others, he buried them in the foggy forest. He figured that it wouldn't be long before two new ghost-type Pokemon would appear here. After clearing all traces and stowing their belongings in his ring, Cain left the area with his Pokemon. He had paused briefly, only to encounter two association trainers, and more might be on their way. This time, Cain didn't waste a moment, even eating on the move. However, after injuring his shoulder, he found it difficult to do much else, and the abundance of wild Pokemon in the area kept Murkrow and the others busy. After another 3 hours of travel and seeping bloodstains on his shoulder, Cain finally chose to rest. He found a large tree and settled in with his Pokemon for a hasty night's sleep. Exhausted after a day of constant alertness, Cain quickly fell asleep, leaving Ghastly to keep watch. His Pokemon, however, didn't fall asleep as easily. They were well aware of what had transpired throughout the day, especially Slowpoke, who had been with Cain the whole time. Feeling guilty, they thought they hadn't contributed enough, particularly during the confrontation with the two association trainers. They were always ready, waiting for Cain's command to attack. However, in the end, Cain had to take action himself, even getting injured in the process. This made his Pokemon feel deeply responsible. Under Slowpoke's telepathic communication, the Pokemon reassured and held each other accountable. They vowed to train harder, so such a situation would never happen again. Even Sneasel, who had recently joined the team, didn't object to Murkrow's proposal, though it hadn't shared any thoughts on the matter. All this happened unbeknownst to Cain. The next morning, Cain woke up with a headache, struggling to regain consciousness. When he finally awoke, he found that his Pokemon were nowhere to be found. As he stared blankly, he saw Murkrow swiftly flying past him, practicing aerial maneuvers around the tree. Climbing down, he found Slowpoke using Calm Mind, its psychic energy radiating powerfully. Ghastly, who had been on guard duty all night, showed no signs of wanting to rest. Instead, it practiced its moves in the distance. Miltank, too, was engaged in a boxing-like workout, sending a flurry of leaves cascading down from a medium-sized tree with each powerful punch. Meanwhile, Sneasel, having only recently joined the team and without any assigned training tasks from Cain, was uncertain of its direction. So it continued the tree-climbing exercises it had practiced alone, honing its agility. Somehow, Sneasel had learned to tie two massive logs to its feet, making the tree climbing even more challenging. Cain, watching his Pokemon train so diligently, felt inspired. Suddenly, as if understanding something, Cain laughed and touched the wound on his shoulder. Maybe getting hurt isn't all bad, he thought. Miltank noticed Cain was awake and stopped her training to help him prepare breakfast. Cain occasionally pointed out the shortcomings in his Pokemon's training, particularly Sneasel's, offering targeted guidance. 2 days later, riding atop his Onix, Cain led his Pokemon back into a Critique city. This time, he had learned his lesson and didn't enter the city looking disheveled. Dressed in a Pokemon Association trainer's outfit, Cain recalled Murkrow and Sneasel into their Pokeballs, leaving only Slowpoke at his side as they strolled leisurely into the city. His shoulder injury was still healing, but it wasn't noticeable beneath the clothing. After another 2 days of wilderness survival and even more rigorous training, the Pokémon had all experienced various levels of improvement. Murkrow, Ghastly, and Miltank each gained a level, reaching 23, 20, and 22, respectively. Chapter 143. Chapter 143. Originally, Cain had planned to linger a while longer in a Chronicles city, hoping to connect with a few local families and learn some ghost-type Pokémon training methods. Although Cain had his own insights on training Ghastly in its evolution into Haunter, he was still interested in the unique methods of certain families. However, due to the incidents at the Lake of Rage base and the battle in the Foggy Forest, too much time had been wasted. Abandoning the idea of staying any longer, Cain headed straight for a Chronicles city's bus station. There were only a couple of buses to Mahogany Town each day, but buses to Goldenrod City were more frequent, departing every 3 hours. With his association ID card, Cain encountered no obstacles, purchasing a bus ticket and boarding a bus bound for Goldenrod City after a short wait. To reach Saffron City as quickly as possible, the magnet train from Goldenrod City was the fastest option. The journey that had taken Cain 4 days on foot was now completed in just 4 hours by bus. Emerging from the luxurious Goldenrod City station, Cain headed straight for the city's black market. Before heading to the Ice Mountain, Cain had dealt with 2 Team Rocket Grunts, obtaining a Golbat and an Arbok from them. Both Pokémon had promising aptitude, but he didn't sell them in Mahogany Town, fearing they would be traced. Instead, he decided to exchange them for money in Goldenrod City. As for the 2 Pokémon he got from the association trainers at the Foggy Forest, Cain didn't dare to sell them recklessly at this time. He'd rather wait until he reached Saffron City. Donning his familiar outfit, Cain and Murkrow entered the black market. He casually sold the Golbat and Arbok to a small Pokémon store, as the Hunters Guild wouldn't accept tamed Pokémon. The 2 Pokémon fetched him a total of 200,000 Poke Dollars, quite a substantial sum. Next, he submitted the Onyx quest at the Hunters Guild, earning 100,000 Poke Dollars and 100,000 points. Despite its mediocre aptitude and level, Onyx was a rare Pokémon, which justified the quest's high reward. With this, Cain had accumulated 3,550,000 Poke Dollars and 1,850,000 Hunter points. He could now exchange these points for a decent Pokémon, but he didn't have enough resources to train another one at the moment. Besides, his Skorupi would soon enter its growth phase and consume even more resources. Cain also hadn't provided systematic combat training for his Pokémon, except for Murkrow and Slowpoke, who had learned some TMs. Therefore, after completing Umbra's mission, he anticipated some downtime to carefully consider his Pokémon's move combinations. What Cain needed most right now was a flying-type Pokémon for transportation. The Pokémon available for exchange at the Hunters Guild were untamed, and he didn't have the time to tame one. So, he decided to buy a tamed flying Pokémon instead. He didn't need the flying Pokémon for battles, just as a means of transportation, like the Onix he had before. However, he had visited many Pokémon stores and found few flying types suitable as mounts. Those he encountered were either low-leveled, physically inferior, or too expensive. The black market dealers were no fools, marking up the prices of flying Pokémon capable of carrying people. The cheaper options were underdeveloped Pokémon that could only fly for about 10 minutes with a rider. Just as Cain was about to give up, he caught a glimpse of a sign at a black market stall, advertising a tamed flying Pokémon for sale, capable of carrying people. He approached the stall, and the enthusiastic seller began introducing the items on display. It seemed as if Cain would be doing himself a disservice by not buying them. He ignored the salesman's smooth talk and pointed at the sign hanging nearby. A hoarse voice emerged from the depths of his black robe. "What kind of Pokémon is it? Can I take a look? Hey, you've got quite the eye." Not to brag, but Pokémon capable of carrying people through the air are quite rare, and they're always in high demand. "You're lucky, I just put out the sign, and you saw it right away. Otherwise, it'd probably be gone in a bit." With that, the salesman mysteriously unhooked a Pokeball from his belt and handed it to Cain. Cain activated the AI system scanning to examine the data, remaining unswayed by the salesman's increasingly parched and breathless spiel. Pokémon. Fiero. Light yellow. Gender. Male. Level. 28. Type. Normal plus flying. Ability. Keen eye. Held items. None. Egg moves. Quick attack. Astonish. Basic moves, drill run, pluck, peck, growl, leer, pursuit, fury attack, aerial ace, mirror move, assurance, agility. Taught moves. Tailwind. Technical machines. TMs none. As an evolved form of Spearow, a well-developed Fiero can reach a height of 1.2 meters, 3.9 feet, and a wingspan of about 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet. It can easily carry a 15-year-old boy like Cain. As long as it's strong and healthy, it can fly for an entire day, even when carrying a heavy load. Among flying-type Pokémon, Fiero is like a mule, specializing in transportation. However, Fiero has a drawback. Its temperament is not the best, especially when encountering its arch-rival, the Pidgey species. It's prone to losing control of its anger. Of course, with proper training, it can indeed serve as a reliable means of transportation. To Cain, this particular Fiero seemed well-developed, with a light yellow aptitude. As a dedicated flying carrier, it was already quite impressive. However, the salesman's asking price was outrageously high. 300,000 Poke Dollars. For that amount, one could purchase a less rare green aptitude Pokémon. This man truly thought Cain to be an easy mark. 100,000 Poke Dollars, and I'll take this Fiero, Cain said calmly, gripping the Pokeball. Cain's words left the salesman speechless, as if his throat had been squeezed shut. Chapter 144. Chapter 144. Is this price really justified? Cain's offer left the seller's previously grandiose claims falling apart like a house of cards. This is a mid-level Pokémon, and it's the final evolved form. Cain clearly wasn't just throwing out a random number. He had hit the nail on the head. He glanced at the seller and said dismissively, "Mid-level? It's barely reached that point. If this were a Pidgeot, I'd be willing to pay you 400,000, but unfortunately, it's just a Fiero. This price is fair." Though both Pidgeot and Fiero were final evolved forms, their prices differed significantly. Pidgeot's base stats were higher than Fiero's, and its appearance was far more impressive. While a Pokémon's looks didn't really impact its battle capabilities, appearances still mattered. Consider this, both were flying Pokémon, but who would attract more attention? Someone riding a majestic Pidgeot or someone perched on the peculiar-looking Fiero? Plus, Pidgeot evolved from Pidgeotto at level 36, while Fiero evolved from Spearow at level 20. It was natural that a 3-stage evolution would be more valuable than a 2-stage one. Cain's mention of Fiero's barely mid-level qualifications left the seller with little room to negotiate. In the end, wincing in pain, the seller accepted Cain's payment of 100,000 Poke Dollars, and Cain added the Fiero to his collection. The seller had tried to persuade Cain to pay more, even if it was just a few thousand extra, but Cain remained firm at 100,000. Take it or leave it. This Fiero had been on sale for quite some time, and though many people had inquired about it, they'd all backed out after learning it was a Fiero. Its appearance simply wasn't appealing, and the asking price was too high. Cain fastened the Pokeball containing Fiero to his belt with a smile and left the black market satisfied. Others might care about a Pokemon's looks, but Cain wasn't so superficial. As long as it was useful, he didn't care if it was attractive or not. Although his current Pokemon were all rather good-looking, this Fiero was just a temporary addition. If he found a better Pokemon later, he could easily swap it out without feeling a pang of guilt. Moreover, this Fiero was already tamed, so with a bit of training, it would be ready for use. No more exhausting runs for Cain when traveling. After leaving the black market, Cain didn't linger in Goldenrod City. He headed straight for the city's magnet train station. He had met Whitney while traveling on the magnet train, and although the experience might not have been the best for Cain, the outcome was still positive. He had gained his first long-term client, who would periodically transfer money into his account, and he didn't have to worry about any secrets being leaked. Cain arrived at the station just in time to catch the last magnet train of the day, departing in 10 minutes. He sprinted to buy a luxury class ticket and boarded the train just as the doors were closing. The luxurious train compartment, just like the one from Cain's previous experience, had 2 seats specially set apart in a private cabin, offering excellent service and privacy. As Cain entered the cabin, he noticed there was already someone seated inside. Upon seeing Cain, the occupant offered a gentle smile as a greeting. Cain looked at the young man sitting gracefully in his seat, a puzzled expression on his face. The young man wore an elegant smile, dressed in an aristocratic attire complete with a small tuxedo. A red silk cravat adorned his neckline, a favorite among the nobility. Combined with his short silver hair, he greatly resembled someone from Cain's memory. Stephen Stone? The future champion of the Hoenn region? A steel-type Pokémon expert, the son of the president of Devon Corporation, and Devon's young master, Stephen? Cain could hardly believe his eyes. But no matter how much he doubted, he couldn't deny that the young man sitting across from him was indeed Stephen, though not yet a champion. Cain, however stunned, managed to keep his composure. He returned a slight smile as a polite gesture and took his seat. After Cain sat down, the train jolted slightly before settling into a smooth ride. "Is that a Skorupi?" Stephen was the first to break the silence between them. With a confident grin, he looked at the blue and purple creature perched on Cain's shoulder. Although his tone was questioning, The certainty in his voice was unmistakable. Yes, it is. Cain chuckled, gently stroking Skorupi on his shoulder and nodding in agreement. Unexpectedly, the usually sleepy Skorupi woke up after Cain's touch. It let out a soft cry and nuzzled Cain's cheek before crawling down his arm, aiming to reach the armrest. Still groggy from sleep, it missed the edge and nearly fell, but fortunately, its tail hooked onto Cain's clothes, saving it from plummeting. With the help of its tail, Skorupi slowly climbed up from its dangling position and successfully leaped onto the armrest. It gazed curiously at Stephen across the cabin. Haha, what a cute little fellow. Stephen laughed, entertained by Skorupi's antics as he patted the seat. Cain smiled, caressing Skorupi's back. Thanks to the nourishing Miltank milk, Skorupi's shell had become incredibly smooth, feeling like polished jade under Cain's touch. I've traveled to the Sinnoh region before, and Skorupi are quite common there. But it's a rare sight in the Johto region. Are you from Sinnoh? Stephen became more familiar after their brief interaction. As the heir to the Devon Corporation, Stephen was well versed in social niceties. Of course, given his current status, his conversation was free of ulterior motives. Besides, Cain had nothing that could pique his interest. What could the Devon Corporation's young master possibly lack? Skorupi, although not a weak Pokémon, only piqued Stephen's interest because it was his first time encountering one in its infancy. No, I'm from the Kanto region. I found this little guy by chance, Cain said with a smile, shaking his head. Wow, it's lucky to have met a trainer like you. Skorupi doesn't look this good when it's just hatched. You must have put a lot of effort into raising it, Stephen said, rubbing his chin. He had never seen a baby Skorupi before, but he had never lagged in his knowledge of Pokémon, even those from the Sinnoh region. In his understanding, young Skorupi had a very ugly and dull shell. Clearly, Cain had carefully nurtured this one. Chapter 145. Chapter 145. Yeah, it took quite some effort, Cain replied, smiling. Indeed, he had to purchase a Miltank to provide food for the young Skorupi. Although Miltank had successfully integrated into the team, there was no denying that it was initially purchased for Skorupi's sake. Cain took a bottle of Miltank milk from his ring, inserted a straw, and placed it next to Skorupi. The Pokémon's eyes narrowed into crescent shapes, and it happily hugged the glass bottle with its two pincers, drinking eagerly while resting on the armrest of the seat. Clearly, the milk was more important than the peculiar stranger across from it. Seeing the Miltank milk, Stephen's eyes lit up. Miltank milk? Did you buy it in Goldenrod City? I ordered a lot a few days ago. I couldn't carry it all, so they'll deliver it to my house. He also understood why Skorupi had developed so well. Miltank milk was the key. It's not from Goldenrod City. My Miltank produced it. Here, you can try it, Cain said, taking another bottle of milk from his ring and handing it to Stephen. Without any hesitation, Stephen took the bottle, opened the cap, and started drinking. He chugged half the bottle in one go, licked the milk off his lips and asked, "Why does this taste even better than the milk from the Miltank farm?" Cain looked at Stephen, who had completely abandoned his earlier elegance, and found him much more approachable. He couldn't help but smile wryly, thinking that this was not how a scion from a prestigious family should behave. It's indeed a bit different. I made the poke blocks for my Miltank myself. The milk is more nutritious, so they've ordered a lot from me. But since I can't produce that much on my own, their Miltank haven't caught up yet. That's probably why this milk tastes better, Cain explained. A scion like Stephen, from a prominent family, wouldn't care about his poke blocks. However, unintentionally, Cain had piqued his interest. Stephen hurriedly asked, "You made them yourself? Are you a Pokémon breeder?" Cain hesitated for a moment but ultimately nodded. Stephen pulled out a Pokeball and released a Metong. "Can you make special poke blocks for my Metong? We can discuss the price," Stephen said, patting the metallic creature. "Wait, I haven't even mentioned the quality of the poke blocks yet. Would you accept basic ones?" It wasn't really Stephen's fault. He was born into a prominent family and had only ever used high-quality poke blocks for his Metong. Lately though, he felt that the regular high-quality poke blocks were no longer sufficient, which was why he wanted Cain to customize some for him. It wasn't that Devon Corp couldn't hire elite breeders. Stephen simply didn't want the standard poke blocks. He wanted custom ones tailored to his preferences and training goals to ensure his Metang's optimal development. However, finding a top-tier breeder with such capabilities wasn't easy, and their fees were exorbitant. Initially, he planned to ask his father for help once he got home but unexpectedly met Cain on the magnet train and asked on impulse. Seeing Cain's expression, Stephen realized he might have been hasty. Cain looked too young to craft high-quality poke blocks, so Stephen scratched his head, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Ahaha, I was talking about high-quality poke blocks. I can do it. No worries, with your talent, You'll definitely be able to make high-quality poke. What? Steven paused, as if he hadn't heard clearly. I said I can do it. Tell me your requirements, and I'll give you a price, Cain said calmly. High-quality poke blocks? Steven asked again for confirmation. Cain nodded reluctantly. It's my teacher who can make them. It was indeed shocking for someone his age to craft high-quality poke blocks, but Cain didn't want to miss the chance to work with Steven. Steven's family was vastly different from Whitney's. Although both were heirs to influential families, Steven's family was at least 100 times more powerful. Moreover, while Whitney's family was still under her grandfather's control, Steven held the most power in his family besides his father. As the eldest son and heir, the Stone family raised Steven in a very open environment, unconcerned with his friends or his Pokémon's training progress. As long as Steven grew up normally, a weak Pokémon wasn't an issue. They could simply buy the best Pokémon and invest enough money to create several champion-level Pokémon to represent the company. The Stone family was grooming Steven to be the next CEO, not a trainer. After all, a powerful trainer wasn't something the Devon Corporation valued. Steven's rise to becoming a champion was undoubtedly due to his extraordinary talent as a trainer. He possessed unique insights into Pokémon training and battle strategies. With just a little help from his family's resources, he quickly became the champion of the Hoenn region. As a result, Steven later passed on his title as Hoenn region champion to Wallace, because for him, becoming a champion was little more than a game. Indeed, many people would struggle and risk their lives for a chance at an Elite Four seat, but for Steven, being a champion was merely a side gig. Some might want to punch him for saying it out loud, but that's just how powerful the Devon Corporation was. Haven't you seen them ordering customized high-grade poke blocks? Those things are worth a fortune. Oh, so your teacher? You scared me. But at your age, being able to craft your own basic poke blocks is quite impressive, Steven said with a look of sudden realization. Who said he could only make basic poke blocks? But the misunderstanding was fine. At least it didn't draw any particular attention. At his age, not many people could make basic poke blocks, but it wasn't impossible. Many disciples of renowned breeders could do it. Steven must have thought that Cain was a disciple of a famous breeder. Cain's gaze fell on the metallic creature beside Steven, an unevolved form of the Hoenn region's pseudo-legendary Metagross. This was his first time seeing one in this life. Chapter 146. Chapter 146. Pokémon. Shiny Metong. Dark blue. Gender. Genderless. Level. 30. Type. Steel plus Psychic. Ability. Clear body. Held items. Sweetheart. Egg moves. None. Basic moves, Confusion, Metal Claw, Magnet Rise, Takedown, Pursuit, Bullet Punch, Miracle Eye. Taunt moves, Gravity, Thunder Punch, Ice Punch, Zen Headbutt. Technical machines, Protect, Psyshock, Hidden Power, Flying, Hyper Beam, Earthquake, Calm Mind, Shadow Ball, Brick Break, Rock Slide, Substitute. Seeing the data of the Metong collected via the AI system, Cain was speechless for a long time. What was this? Was this the real main Pokémon of a great family heir? The evolution of a Metong was quite special. An Beldum would only evolve into a Metong after encountering another Beldum and both Pokémon met the level requirements. Similarly, a Metong would only evolve into a Metagross with the help of another Metong. Hence, among all pseudo-legendaries, evolving a Beldum into its final form, Metagross, was the most challenging. You would need at least 4 Beldums to achieve the goal, and each Beldum's aptitude couldn't be too low, or else the evolved Metang's aptitude would be dragged down. But what did Cain see in Steven's Metong? Shiny? The requirements for a shiny Metong were even more stringent, necessitating 2 shiny Beldum for evolution. This particular shiny Metong had a dark blue aptitude, indicating that both of its shiny Beldum predecessors had aptitudes no lower than dark blue. Big shot. Even Cain, who had seen a lot, couldn't help but want to curse out loud. Moreover, when Steven became the champion, he had a colossal shiny Metagross standing beside him. What did that imply? It meant that Steven had owned a total of 4 shiny Beldum from the beginning to the end, and given his personality, there was no way their aptitudes would be low. This meant all 4 shiny Beldum had aptitudes of at least dark blue. Meanwhile, among the Pokémon Cain currently possessed, the ones with the highest aptitude were merely a light blue Sneasel and Skorupi. The others, such as Murkrow and Slowpoke, were only green aptitude Pokémon, lacking by more than 1 level. Then there were the numerous moves it had learned. Each move was valuable, and the whole set was worth tens of millions. Of course, for the 4 shiny Beldum, these tens of millions were just a drop in the bucket. Taking a deep breath, Cain reminded himself that this had nothing to do with him, and as long as he did his best, everything would be fine. Steven looked curiously at Cain, who was staring blankly at his Metong. He waved his hand in front of Cain's eyes and said, I don't know your name yet. I'm Steven Stone. Snapping out of his daze, Cain looked at Steven with an odd expression before saying, Cain, no surname. Having no surname meant no family, and no family meant Cain was just an ordinary person. Steven, however, didn't seem to care. To him, was there really any difference between ordinary people and members of minor families? Nice to meet you, Cain, Steven said, extending his right hand to signal a formal introduction. Cain shook Steven's hand gently, then sat back down, having stood up in excitement earlier. Steven sat down beside Cain, stroking his metong as if it were a precious treasure. The Hoenn region was the only known area in the Pokémon world with 2 pseudo-legendary Pokémon. Metagross, the final evolution of the metong Steven now had, and the Dragon-type Salamence. It was no surprise that a Dragon-type Pokémon could become a pseudo-legendary, but the fact that Metagross could achieve this status was due to its rarity and unique evolution method. It nearly flawlessly combined 4 Pokémon, resulting in an exceptionally powerful species value and earning it the title of a pseudo-legendary. What are your requests? Cain asked after calming himself down. In truth, Metong was a Pokémon that could grow normally even without consuming Pokeblocks, as long as it was provided with enough metal. But growing up like this, though their strength was not weak, it was also not among the best of the pseudo-legendaries. Upon hearing Cain's question, Steven pondered for a moment before replying, I'm not a breeder, so I don't exactly know what it requires, but my training goal is to increase the strength of Metong without significantly adding to its weight. The most crucial aspect would be the hardness of Metong. Merely stating this condition was enough to give Cain a headache. What is the weakness of Metong? Weight is a significant factor because Beldums have been consuming metal since their appearance. Even after evolving into their final form, Metagross, they never stopped consuming metal. As metal is like their food, they would starve without it. Steven's requirement was for Metong to grow normally, or even excellently, without gaining weight. To achieve this goal, one must first understand the essential trace elements needed for the Metang's growth, which elements can help them grow better, and which elements would increase their weight. However, there is actually a rare ability among Metong, light metal. The light metal ability can have the weight of the Pokémon. This ability can only be found in Beldums, Metangs, Metagross, and Scizors. Of course, one of the legendary Pokémon, Regis Teal, a member of the Regi trio, may also possess this ability. This hidden ability is more common in Beldums but becomes extremely rare when they evolve into Metangs. By the time they become Metagross, it almost entirely disappears. Since Metangs require the fusion of 2 Pokémon to evolve, both Beldums must have the light metal ability for the resulting Metong to have it as well. If only one Beldum has the light metal ability, the evolved Metang's ability will be random, with a 50% chance. Similarly, for a Metagross to possess the light metal ability, one of the Metangs involved must have the ability. Steven's Metong was a shiny Metong, making it even more unlikely to possess the light metal ability. However, Cain did have an idea in mind to temporarily change the Metang's ability to light metal. Imagine it, a slow and lumbering Metagross suddenly becomes incredibly fast, catching its opponent off guard. With its already powerful strength combined with increased speed, it would undoubtedly be among the top pseudo-legendary Pokémon. Chapter 147. Chapter 147. In truth, the temporary method Cain thought of for altering a Steel-type Pokémon's abilities involved having one Pokémon that mastered both the roleplay and skill swap moves. With another Pokémon possessing the light metal ability, the transformation could be achieved. Roleplay allowed a Pokémon to copy another's ability, while skill swap enabled it to exchange its own ability with another's. By using a Pokémon with the light metal ability and having another Pokémon roleplay it, followed by performing in skill swap with the Metong could temporarily acquire the light metal ability. However, obtaining a Pokémon that mastered both roleplay and skill swap was challenging, as neither move had a corresponding TM. The only options were learning through teaching or via egg moves. Cain wasn't sure how many people in this world knew about this combination, as he had never seen anyone use it from his past life to the present. Let's exchange contact information first. I need to consult my teacher about this. Cain fabricated a non-existent mentor. This cover story allowed him to hide his ability to create advanced Pokeblocks while also earning a handsome profit. Naturally, Steven eagerly agreed and exchanged contact information with Cain. Crafting Pokeblocks, particularly custom, advanced ones, required a lengthy process of fine-tuning and testing before they could be put to use. I can provide all the materials and cover all the research expenses. As for the Pokeblocks, once they meet my requirements, you can charge the standard rate, Steven said with a grin. This was the basic expectation for hiring a breeder capable of crafting custom advanced Pokeblocks. The client would cover all material and research costs and purchase the Pokeblocks at a price significantly higher than the market rate. Of course, anyone capable of commissioning custom advanced Pokeblocks was unlikely to be short on cash. Alright, but due to time constraints, I won't be able to produce large quantities each time. Rest assured though, I can fulfill the needs of a single metong, Cain assured, nodding. Given his crafting speed, he could meet a single metang's consumption without affecting his usual schedule. His concern was that wealthy clients like Stephen might place colossal orders for tens or hundreds of thousands of pokeblocks, akin to Whitney's family, which would be overwhelming. Crafting advanced pokeblocks was different from creating intermediate ones. If the demand were too high, he'd have to focus solely on producing pokeblocks, leaving no time for his primary goal, Pokemon training. Selling pokeblocks was only meant to provide additional resources for his Pokemon training endeavors. Upon hearing Cain's words, Stephen hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, no problem. He knew that his main battle Pokemon weren't just limited to Metong, but also included others like Lyron. However, his primary focus was still on training Metong, and Lyron and the others could continue to feast on the Pokeblocks provided at home. When we figure it out, I'll get in touch with you. Sounds good. And so, Cain officially acquainted himself with Stephen's thick thighs. As long as the two maintained contact, even if they didn't become close friends, Stephen would likely be open to helping with relatively unimportant requests, considering Cain's provision of high-grade Pokeblocks. For example, enlisting Stephen's assistance in locating a high-quality dusk stone that would help Murkrow evolve. Of course, Cain would have to pay the full amount for the stone. But wouldn't that be better than aimlessly searching for it by himself? Cain and Stephen had just met, and their agreement was only verbal. So, Cain wasn't foolish enough to ask for Stephen's help right away. Besides, he couldn't afford a high-quality dusk stone just yet. With a wry smile, Cain considered the evolution requirements of his Pokemon. Murkrow needed a high-quality dusk stone, which wasn't cheap. Sneasel required a razor claw, not easily obtained either. And then there was Slowpoke. If it evolved into Slowbro, that would be manageable, but to become Slow King, the rare King's Rock was a headache-inducing prospect. All these evolutions would take a significant amount of money to facilitate. In comparison, perhaps evolving Ghastly and Skorupi would be slightly easier. Following this, the two engaged in a harmonious conversation, primarily focusing on Pokemon training. Although Stephen wasn't a Pokemon breeder, his excellent upbringing had provided him with a solid understanding of Pokemon, particularly Steel types, making him an expert in the field. Cain's 2 lifetimes of experience, combined with the wealth of information in his AI system, allowed him to converse with Stephen effortlessly, presenting unique insights on any topic. Stephen, a scion of a prestigious family, gained a newfound appreciation for Cain, a commoner. Time flew by as they chatted, and before they knew it, the magnet train had arrived at Saffron City Station. Once again, Cain had forgotten to admire the scenery of empty silver, but compared to his previous conversations with Whitney, this time had been much more enjoyable, with Cain no longer playing the role of a mere listener. Stephen had other matters to attend to, so after bidding Cain farewell at the station, he hurriedly left for Saffron City's airport. He was catching the next flight back to the Hoenn region. Cain hailed a cab and headed straight to the Pokemon Center. He still had no idea how to find Umbra to complete his mission. However, Cain figured that since he was using the ID card Umbra had given him, Umbra would undoubtedly know the moment he arrived in Saffron City. Therefore, he didn't need to actively search for him. If Umbra hadn't told him how to get in touch, he would surely send someone to find him. Cain decided that all he needed to do was appear in public places as a Pokemon Association member and patiently wait. The Pokemon Center was the perfect place for that. He wasn't worried about other Team Rocket members being unable to enter the Pokemon Center where he was staying. As a mere reserve member of the Shadow Unit, he was only on par with a low-ranking grunt in Team Rocket. If someone like him could have an official Pokemon Association identity, then surely others could too, right? Forget about it. The extent of Team Rocket's infiltration into the association was likely known only to Giovanni and a few higher-ups. The association itself probably couldn't even imagine how deeply it had been compromised. Chapter 148. Chapter 148. Upon entering the Pokemon Center, Cain immediately booked a room, where he secluded himself with his Pokemon. He had obtained quite a few items from the research facility at Lake of Rage near Mahogany Town, but because he had been busy traveling, he hadn't had time to examine them. Now, he could finally sit down and sort everything out. Most importantly, the AI system had downloaded 15% of the massive data pool from the research facility. System, organize the data you've collected, separating out all the important information and discarding the rest into the data dump, Cain mentally commanded. Beep. Task established. Due to the massive volume of data, the estimated analysis time is 2 days. Time remaining, 1 day, 23 hours, and 59 minutes. He had indeed collected a substantial amount of data. He hoped that the AI system had prioritized copying the more critical information first. He couldn't help but wonder about the outcome of the battle between Ariana and Price. Ariana was definitely at a disadvantage, but as a Team Rocket executive, she would surely have an escape plan. Moreover, Cain didn't believe that Price was the type to risk everything for the association. Perhaps the old association would have inspired such loyalty, but not the current one. As a veteran association member, Price had been relegated to a small place like Mahogany Town by scheming politicians. They claimed it was to curb Team Rocket's activities, but everyone knew it was actually to remove him from their power struggle. So, the idea that Price would fight to the death for them was absurd. Ah, right. Cain suddenly remembered something. He took out a small glass bottle from his ring, containing a transparent, silvery green liquid. It was the very same substance Cain had found in the 5th floor lab of the Lake of Rage base, just before leaving. He hadn't thought about it since escaping, only remembering when he asked the AI system to analyze the data. System, can you analyze what this substance is? Beep. The AI system seemed to stutter for a few seconds, likely because it was already working at high efficiency to analyze the data, causing some lag in its other functions. Item: Elixir of Evolution. Suspected. Function: accelerate Pokémon growth. Usage: unknown. Caution: this information is inferred from fragmented data. As there is a large amount of unanalyzed data, please rescan after data analysis is completed. Cain contemplated the information sent back from the AI system. This half-filled bottle of green liquid was most likely the primary research outcome from Team Rocket's Lake of Rage research base, capable of catalyzing and accelerating Pokémon growth. Cain did have some recollection of this mysterious substance. In his previous life, after leaving Trial Island and entering the Team Rocket base in Mahogany Town, he encountered an exchange item like this on Team Rocket's exchange list. Its price was incredibly high, but the effects were equally unique, able to catalyze the evolution of difficult-to-evolve Pokémon and accelerate the growth of slower-growing creatures. However, this substance was not without side effects. The sudden attack by the Pokémon Association may have forced the research to stop, leading to the loss of crucial data and halting the experiment, ultimately resulting in this semi-finished product. Pokémon exposed to this liquid experienced accelerated growth and could even evolve if they were on the verge of evolution. But in exchange, the lifespans of Pokémon using this item decreased significantly. For example, a Pokémon that could live for 100 years might only survive 50, 40, or even 30 years after exposure. The extent of lifespan reduction depended on the effects of the catalyst, with most Pokémon experiencing a halving of their lifespans. Team Rocket initially researched this catalyst to facilitate rapid growth for their lower-ranking members' Pokémon, quickly transforming them into effective combatants and narrowing the gap between them and the low-rank Pokémon Association trainers. At the same time, some Pokémon, such as Dragon-type and pseudo-legendary creatures, took an incredibly long time to grow to their full potential. By using this catalyst, their growth could be accelerated. The Pokémon Association, however, discovered this research. Knowing the consequences of the substance's widespread use, the association launched a decisive raid. Even if they couldn't obtain the catalyst, they were determined to destroy it. If this elixir were to be released in its complete form, it could potentially disrupt the existing balance in the Pokémon world. Fortunately, the Pokémon Association's discovery was not too late. The elixir developed by Team Rocket was still in a semi-finished state. Not only were the side effects not eliminated, the production cost of the elixir was extremely high as well. In the end, the association decided not to pursue the matter further, as the exorbitant production costs meant the substance posed no threat to the world's balance. After Team Rocket decided the elixir wasn't worth further research, they abandoned the project. However, this didn't mean the chief researcher, Professor Sebastian, had given up. The dedicated scientist continued working on reducing the side effects and costs of the catalyst elixir at the Lake of Rage research base. This eventually led to the infamous Lake of Rage Gyarados chaos, but that's a story for another time. So, is this green liquid in the vial the original prototype of the catalyst? Cain wondered, gently shaking the glass bottle in his hand. The elixir had significant drawbacks, and Cain had no intention of using it on his own Pokémon. However, its potential value was undeniable. At this point, it could fetch a considerable amount from either Team Rocket or the Pokémon Association. But for now, Cain felt it was too risky to reveal the elixir. If word got out, he would surely be hunted down as a traitor, not only by the association but also by Team Rocket. Cain stashed the elixir back into his ring. If he wasn't going to use it, it was best to keep it hidden. His most significant gains, aside from the elixir and the information retrieved by the AI system, were the assets of the two Pokémon Association trainers who tried to capture him. From their storage spaces, Cain obtained items worth nearly 1 million in total. The real prize, however, were the trainers' Pokémon, 10 in total. Though their overall aptitude hovered around yellow, a few had reached the green tier. Their levels were also quite high, with the highest at 37 and the lowest at 29. Cain knew that he owed his victory over the two trainers to both luck and the element of surprise. Chapter 149. Chapter 149. Cain had been reluctant to sell these Pokémon earlier, fearing that it would attract unwanted attention. Now that he was in Saffron City, however, he knew that the black market operated under Team Rocket's control. There was no better place to offload the captured Pokémon. But he decided to wait until Umbra appeared before making his move. In the meantime, Cain began pondering the future training direction of his own Pokémon. Murkrow and Slowpoke had been with him from the beginning, and their development had always been tailored to their strengths. All they needed now were a few more moves to expand their range of attacks. As for Ghastly, it had joined Cain's team early on but was relatively underpowered compared to the rest of his main lineup. Although it had progressed rapidly in recent times, it still ranked near the bottom among his Pokémon. One reason was that Ghastly hadn't evolved yet, leaving its battle capabilities somewhat limited. Another reason was that Ghastly's poison-type attribute hadn't been developed fully, and its combat rhythm wasn't well established. Cain didn't pressure Ghastly to reach a specific level, as the timing wasn't quite right. In the following period, Ghastly would likely become a primary focus for Cain's training efforts. Ghastly would evolve into Haunter at level 25, and it was now level 20, almost there. Cain had previously acquired the potent toxic move at the gaming arcade but hadn't taught it to Ghastly yet. The plan was to develop Ghastly's poison-type attribute further before teaching it the move, which would enhance the effectiveness of its poison-type moves. Since leaving the trial island, Ghastly had been consuming Pokeblocks that subtly enhanced its ghost and poison-type attributes. Its poison-type energy was now quite substantial, but it still hadn't met Cain's expectations. Once Ghastly mastered moves like Rest, Toxic, and Sleep Talk, and paired them with Destiny Bond, Substitute, and Perish Song, it, or rather, Haunter, would become one of the most formidable members of Cain's team. Even higher-level opponents would likely be worn down, as long as the level gap wasn't too wide. So during their trip to the black market, Cain's primary goal was to find items that would boost Ghastly's poison-type energy. Next up was Miltank, the Pokémon Cain originally bought for Skorupi. Despite its light green aptitude, Miltank had integrated well with the team. Miltank hadn't been developed as a main battle Pokémon, so it had only been consuming intermediate Pokeblocks. In the black market, Cain planned to purchase materials suited for Miltank to create specialized, high-grade Pokeblocks. Even if Miltank primarily served a supporting role, Cain would treat all his Pokémon fairly. Moreover, Miltank's role within the team wasn't limited to just that. Apart from battling, Miltank was the most responsible member, always helping Cain with various tasks and maintaining the relationships among the Pokémon. As the only female on the team, her status was high, and she was respected by all, from the earliest edition of Murkrow to the most recent Sneasel. Of course, the battle Miltank had with Arbok played a crucial role in her importance to the team. Moreover, Miltank's milk had now become an indispensable part of the team's routine. Then there was Sneasel, the proud and tsundere Pokémon Cain had recently caught. Although it verbally resisted, its actions proved it to be more honest than it let on. Deep down, Sneasel resisted Cain's presence, but after a few days together, that resistance was slowly fading. However, it would still take some time for it to fully let its guard down. When Sneasel joined the team, it was already the highest-leveled member. Perhaps due to Murkrow and Slowpoke's relentless attacks during their battle, it still harbored some resentment. Though he never went too far out of line, Sneasel sometimes appeared indifferent towards Murkrow and Slowpoke. In fact, Cain suspected that Miltank held a higher place in Sneasel's heart than he himself did, which was a bit frustrating for him. However, Cain believed that with more time spent together, these issues would be resolved. Sneasel's weakness stemmed from living alone in the wild for too long, gradually developing its own battle habits. It had yet to build a combat rapport with Cain, and it didn't respond to his commands as promptly as Murkrow and Slowpoke, who were ready to act even before he gave an order. During battles, Sneasel was always half a beat slow. Against weaker opponents, this wasn't a problem, but against equally or more powerful adversaries, this became a significant weakness. As such, Sneasel and Ghastly were the two Pokémon Cain planned to focus on training next. One for honing physical attributes, the other for developing combat awareness and synergy. Moreover, Sneasel was currently consuming only ordinary mid-level Pokeblocks. On his next trip to the black market, Cain intended to gather materials to create custom high-level Pokeblocks for Sneasel. Murkrow, Slowpoke, Ghastly, Miltank, and Sneasel were the Pokémon in Cain's current lineup with combat capabilities. Of course, with Miltank serving in a support role, Cain effectively had only 4 combat-ready Pokémon. Murkrow and Slowpoke made a good team, while Ghastly and Sneasel had strong individual combat skills. Another Pokémon, Skorupi, was still in its infancy. However, it had recently been spending less time asleep. According to data obtained through the AI system scan, Skorupi's various physical parameters were gradually reaching perfect balance, and it seemed it would soon enter its growth phase. When that time came, Cain would have another Pokémon to train. Fortunately, Cain had already prepared the custom high-level Pokeblock Skorupi would need for its growth. In the early stages, Skorupi wouldn't need to participate in battles, so Cain could delay deciding on its move set, focusing first on his primary combat Pokemon's moves before considering Skorupis. Lastly, there was Fiero, which Cain used for transportation and did not consider a true part of his Pokemon team, nor did he need it for combat. Once Cain captured another Pokemon capable of carrying passengers while flying, Fiero would become redundant. He would be willing to release it back into the wild or sell it. System, set up 2 tasks. Analyze the ingredients needed for custom high-level Pokeblock recipes suitable for Miltank and Sneasel. Beep. Beep. Task. Task established. The AI system was becoming more and more laggy, causing Cain to worry that the excessive data might destroy it entirely. That would truly be a devastating loss for him. Chapter 150. Chapter 150. Fortunately, his concerns were unwarranted. Apart from a slight lag, the system didn't encounter any unexpected issues. After all, although the AI system had copied a lot of data at once, it was only a small fraction, perhaps about 10%, compared to the massive amount of information it already held. The customized high Pokeblocks that Steven needed would have to wait a bit longer. Cain planned to study the Metang's Pokeblock formula after the AI system had sorted through the data. Cain's thoughts were interrupted by a series of crisp knocks on the door. Thud, 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 thud. The distinct rhythm rang out. Cain's expression changed as he heard the knocks, stopping the Pokemon from opening the door and waiting for the knocking to cease. Moments later, the knocking stopped, and a small card was slipped through the door's gap. Cain carefully picked up the card, which read, Saffron Gym. This was likely the meeting place set by Umbra. Although he had been prepared to meet anywhere, the words Saffron Gym made Cain feel a headache and a twinge of pain in his chest. Sabrina! The moody psychic queen who had helped Cain awaken his psychic powers was someone he didn't know how to face. But with the presence of Umbra, Sabrina would probably not do anything outrageous. Only then did Cain let out a small sigh of relief. As for how Umbra found Cain and knew which room he was staying in at the Pokemon Center, that was to be expected. Where were they? Saffron City, a place jointly governed by Team Rocket and the Association. The Association represented light, and Team Rocket represented darkness. Never underestimate the power of Team Rocket, especially in the Kanto region, where they originated. Cain didn't leave immediately after receiving the message. Instead, he waited in his room until mealtime, when the streets were less crowded, before stepping out of the Pokemon Center. Wearing his Association trainer uniform without any disguise, Cain hailed a cab and headed directly to the Saffron Gym. As the driver pitted Cain, he waved some change and sped away from the Saffron Gym's entrance even faster than when Cain had arrived. Cain couldn't help but rub his forehead. It seemed Sabrina was quite a terrifying presence in the hearts of Saffron City's residents. At the huge Saffron City Gym, there was no one at the entrance. Cain walked right in, pushing open the door. Inside, he saw many people, and it seemed that each person in the gym possessed varying levels of psychic powers. To some extent they could all perform telekinesis. Cain noticed that each person had an object of different size floating in front of them. Seeing several young boys and girls, obviously only a few years old, manipulating objects half their size in front of them, Cain couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Such young children could already levitate objects of this size, while he, having lived through 3 lifetimes, could barely control a marble the size of a fingernail. Comparisons are odious. Embracing an out-of-sight out-of-mind mentality, Cain wove through the crowd, heading straight for the door that led deeper into the gym. Just as he was about to cross the hall and push open the inner door, a person suddenly appeared, blocking his path. Standing in front of Cain was a young man in a blue jacket with light blue hair, looking about 10 years old, accompanied by an Kadabra. The sudden appearance was likely due to teleport, but it was unclear if it was the young man or his Kadabra who used it. He stood impassively before Cain without speaking, merely pointing to a sign next to the door that read, "No unauthorized persons allowed inside unless they defeat the gatekeeper." Cain glanced at the sign, then at the young man, asking calmly, "Gatekeeper?" The young man nodded, still not speaking, but his meaning was clear. If Cain wanted to enter, he had to defeat him first. Cain and the young man's actions caught the attention of the people in the hall. They stopped their training and slowly gathered around the entrance. Look, look, another challenger for Miss Sabrina. Do they think our Saffron Gym is open to just anyone? Tisk, just another overconfident muggle. Watch how Azure deals with him. Hey, this guy seems to have a faint psychic aura. Maybe he's not a muggle? Ha! Yeah, but he's really weak. The crowd, which had initially looked down on Cain, changed their minds upon detecting the faint psychic aura emanating from him. Although Cain's psychic power was incredibly weak and anyone present could crush him, his awakened psychic ability meant he was no longer an ordinary person. They begrudgingly regarded him with less disdain. Even as a psychic with such weak powers, He won't stand a chance against Azure. Actually, I think if you want to challenge a gym, maybe don't pick ours. After all, Miss Sabrina. Suddenly, the speaker was silenced by a hand over his mouth. The person covering his mouth cautiously looked around, and only after confirming that no one else had appeared did he let out a sigh of relief. Hey! If you don't want to live, don't drag us down with you, alright? There are some things you just can't say. The boy's anger flared up. The speaker also realized he'd said something wrong, frantically wiping the sweat from his forehead and gratefully glancing at the person who had covered his mouth. Sabrina's temper was truly something else. Hearing the chatter around him, Cain couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that everyone assumed he was a challenger here to take on the gym. Of course, it was also possible that Umbra or Sabrina intended to test him somehow. Cain didn't believe that someone with Sabrina's abilities wouldn't have noticed him entering the gym. Perhaps at this very moment, Sabrina and Umbra were observing him from some hidden corner. As it turned out, Cain's guess was not far from the truth. However, instead of secretly watching from a corner, Sabrina and Umbra were standing right beside him in plain sight. Yet, somehow, nobody noticed their presence. It was as if they were mere air. Chapter 151. Chapter 151. The young boy who had been bad-mouthing Sabrina earlier, while relieved he hadn't been punished, would surely faint if he knew Sabrina had been right beside him at the time. Sabrina had indeed wanted to teach the boy a lesson for his loose tongue, but Umbra had stopped her. Otherwise, she would have shown him what it felt like to be turned into a doll. Regardless, she had committed the boy's face to memory. Girls tend to have a keen eye for such things. Cain gathered that Azure, everyone had mentioned, must have been the young man in blue standing before him. It was no small feat for trainers to earn the Saffron Gym's Marsh badge in the annual association competition. Even the few who did manage to obtain the badge must have done so only when Sabrina was absent, by sheer luck. In fact, most trainers preparing for the Pokémon League competition tended to overlook the Saffron Gym. If you want to enter, you must defeat me first, said the young man named Azure, looking at Cain impassively. Azure only spoke with Cain because he sensed the faint psychic energy emanating from him. Otherwise, he might not have bothered. Let's go, Cain said, glancing at his Kadabra. Pokémon, Kadabra, green, gender, male, level, 27, type, psychic, ability, synchronize, held items, none, egg moves, barrier, thunder punch, basic moves, kinesis, teleport, confusion, disable, psybeam, miracle eye, reflect, taught moves, gravity, snatch, ally switch, TM moves, protect, shadow ball, light screen. Though the AI system lagged a bit, it had no delay in scanning the Pokémon's data. Azure's Kadabra's information was fully displayed before Cain's eyes. Kadabra, the evolved form of Umbra and the pre-evolved form of Alakazam, was a pure psychic-type Pokémon. Among psychic types, the Umbra, Kadabra, and Alakazam family possessed incredible talent. If a trainer with psychic abilities teamed up with such a pure psychic type, the results would be far greater than the simple sum of their individual strengths. Though Cain's team included dark-type Pokémon like Murkrow and Sneasel, which were immune to psychic-type moves, they were not completely safe from the threat posed by Kadabra. Kadabra was one of those rare Pokémon that could naturally learn Miracle Eye, making dark-type Pokémon less of a counter. Miracle Eye enabled psychic-type moves to hit dark-type Pokémon, diminishing Sneasel and Murkrow's advantage. The crowd began to disperse, leaving ample space for the two trainers to battle. A single Pokémon battle to decide the victor. I choose Kadabra, Azure declared as Cain moved to create enough space for their battle. Cain nodded in understanding. Cain threw a great ball, and Sneasel appeared on the battlefield after a flash of red light. As soon as the dark and ice-type Sneasel emerged, laughter erupted among a few onlookers. Sure, dark-type Pokémon are strong against psychic types, but is Azure's Kadabra just an ordinary psychic type? Someone jeered. Another one trying to bully psychic types with their dark types. They'll soon learn the true strength of psychic types, another taunted. Azure frowned as he stared at Sneasel. His keen perception far superior to the spectators. As a powerful psychic type himself, Sneasel's aura made him slightly uneasy. Umbra and Sabrina, who were watching from the sidelines, also noticed Cain's Sneasel. Umbra's eyes lit up, and a smile graced his lips. This kid has had some luck recently. This Sneasel is quite the talent. TCH, he's just a lucky brat. His psychic potential is so weak it's pitiful. He hasn't improved at all in so long. No different from a muggle, Sabrina scoffed, her disdain evident at the sight of the dark-type Pokémon. Ahem. Sabrina had clearly forgotten that the so-called muggle she was referring to was standing right next to her. However, instead of feeling embarrassed, she beamed victoriously at Umbra's cough. Regardless of the spectators' taunts, Cain remained composed, waiting for Azure to prepare. He wasn't some hot-headed kid who would change his choice of Pokémon just because others criticized him. Why wouldn't he use his advantage? Was he an idiot? Gradually, the crowd quieted down, observing Cain's calm demeanor. It was evident he had no intention of switching Pokémon, so they had no choice but to silently watch the battle unfold. However, some people were right. Azure's Kadabra had mastered Miracle Eye, so it could deal damage to Sneasel. Moreover, Kadabra wasn't limited to psychic-type moves. Cain had been torn between Murkrow and Sneasel but ultimately chose Sneasel. First, Sneasel's level was slightly higher than Murkrow's. Kadabra was at level 27, and although Sneasel was at a slight disadvantage, Murkrow's level difference was even more significant. Another thing to note was that both Murkrow and Kadabra had green aptitudes, which meant that Murkrow wouldn't have an advantage in terms of talent either. Cain had also planned to strengthen Sneasel's battle training for some time, especially since they had only recently partnered up, and their synchronization wasn't quite there yet. With both trainers ready, the battle commenced. Sneasel, use agility. Cain commanded first. Kadabra, Miracle Eye. When facing Dark-type Pokémon, it was crucial to use Miracle Eye first, or else the rest of the battle would be a waste of time. Kadabra placed its spoon-wielding hand on its chest, and a sphere emitting colorful light emerged. A beam of light shot from the sphere, illuminating Sneasel. Although it didn't seem to affect Sneasel, Kadabra sensed the hateful aura that emanated from the Dark-type Pokémon dissipate, and knew its psychic attacks could now be effective. Sneasel, Hone Claws. Since Kadabra had given Sneasel time to stack moves, Cain wouldn't waste the opportunity. Miracle Eye would inevitably be used by Kadabra, as its beam was hard to dodge. So, Cain decided to make the most of the situation, boosting Sneasel's attack and speed as much as possible. Chapter 152. Chapter 152. Kadabra, use Kinesis. Kinesis was an exclusive move for Kadabra and Alakazam, allowing them to bend their spoons, distracting opponents and lowering their accuracy. The strategy was sound. If the opponent wanted to increase their speed and attack power, lowering their accuracy would render their attacks useless, negating the benefits of their moves. This tactic would work well against most Pokémon, but as Cain heard the command, a mocking smile spread across his face, and a playful glint appeared in his dark eyes. Through the exchange of moves, Cain realized that his opponent didn't fully understand Sneasel's abilities. Sneasel had 3 possible abilities, one of which was Keen Eye. Pokémon with this ability couldn't have their accuracy lowered by any means, and evasion-boosting moves were ineffective against them. However, since his opponent didn't seem to know this, Cain was more than happy to take advantage. With a smile, Cain continued, Sneasel, use agility again, then Hone Claws. Upon hearing Cain's command, the Kadabra's trainer hesitated, thinking Cain was trying to outperform him in boosting their Pokémon's stats. After all, the combined effects of agility and Hone Claws were stronger than those of Kinesis. However, he didn't think that his Kadabra's Kinesis would be less effective than Sneasel's moves. He had won many battles against Dark-type Pokémon using this technique. Learning from his experience, he didn't verbally issue a command this time, but instead communicated through telepathy. His eyes emitted a faint blue glow as he directly issued commands into Kadabra's mind. Kadabra was no stranger to battling in this manner with its trainer, and upon receiving the instructions, it used Kinesis once more. Sabrina, who had been watching the battle, suddenly widened her eyes. She glanced at Azure's confident demeanor and then at her seemingly indifferent partner, Umbra, muttering, "Are we watching an idiot fight?" Umbra couldn't hold back a laugh, his face trembling as he tried to suppress his amusement. Finally, he burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha, you psychic trainers are always overconfident in your abilities." Having been mocked as a muggle by Sabrina just moments ago, Umbra felt he had regained some pride. Sabrina, annoyed by his teasing, rolled her eyes. The battle continued, with the onlookers growing bored. What was so interesting about a fight like this? But there were limits to how much a stat could be raised or lowered. Sneasel, who had been continuously using agility and Hone Claws, hadn't reached its cap yet, but Kadabra had already hit the limit for lowering its opponent's stats using Kinesis. By this time, Azure had noticed something was off. Cain's expression remained calm, as if not worried about the reduced accuracy. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face. Deciding not to play Cain's game any longer, Azure's eyes flashed blue once more, commanding Kadabra to attack. Kadabra held the spoon to its chest, but instead of bending it, a psychic wave tinged with pink light radiated from the utensil. As a psychic type himself, Cain could sense the powerful energy surging through Kadabra's spoon and knew Azure wasn't going to continue the stalemate any longer. Dodge, Sneasel! With its amplified speed from agility, Sneasel effortlessly evaded the psybeam fired from Kadabra's spoon, which had a chance of confusing its target. Then Sneasel charged towards the Kadabra, swiftly closing the distance between them. Nevertheless, Kadabra remained composed and under Azure's telepathic command, it continuously waved its spoon shooting out psybeams, while simultaneously using its potent psychic power to track Sneasel's movements. Sneasel, use Ice Shard while moving. If Kadabra wanted to attack, they would too. It was now up to the psychic type to decide between dodging or continuing its assault. Sneasel created chunks of ice in its paws, hurling them at Kadabra while running. As Cain had anticipated, Kadabra chose not to face Sneasel's attack. After all, Kadabra was known for its high special attack and low physical defense. It wouldn't withstand many hits. Teleport. Unlike Slowpoke's long-range teleport, Kadabra's short-range version was nearly instantaneous. When Kadabra was still in Umbra, it only knew one move: teleport. So, when it came to the move teleport, it was safe to say that it had been mastered to the point of being used in actual battles. Sneasel, quick attack. But as fast as Kadabra's teleport was, after receiving several speed boosts, Sneasel's quick attack was even faster. The battlefield wasn't vast, and the distance was negligible for Sneasel's quick attack. As soon as Kadabra used teleport to dodge a barrage of icy shards, a flash of black light signaled Sneasel's arrival right in front of it. However, Kadabra and its trainer, Azure, weren't worried about Sneasel's attack. They had used kinesis several times, which should have significantly reduced Sneasel's accuracy. Smirking confidently, Azure was met with a similar smile from Cain, who commanded, "Sneasel, bite!" Switching moves mid-battle was always Sneasel's weak point due to its lack of synergy with Cain, causing a delay in using new moves. This time was no exception. Only after hearing Cain's command did Sneasel prepare to use bite. But this time, it didn't matter. The opponents, already confident in their victory, didn't bother dodging, giving Sneasel the opportunity it needed. Its fangs, glowing with dark, sinister energy, clamped down on Kadabra, causing significant damage. Yow! Kadabra yelped in pain, instinctively using teleport to put some distance between it and Sneasel. Fighting Sneasel up close would be a death wish for Kadabra. Azure stared in disbelief at Cain and Sneasel, then at his own Kadabra. Meanwhile, Sabrina, who had been secretly watching the match, slapped her forehead in frustration and muttered, "Let's go. This is pointless." Ugh. With a smile that wasn't quite a smile, she teleported away from the scene. For them, the outcome of this match was already apparent. Cain would win. This was the crushing power of knowledge. Chapter 153. Chapter 153. Kadabra used teleport again to escape. Being hit a single time didn't prove anything. It could have just been luck. Sneasel, quick attack again, then follow up with bite. The previous scene once again repeated itself between Sneasel and Kadabra. Even though Kadabra responded promptly this time, launching an attack as Sneasel closed in, it was no use. Sneasel's dark-type moves dealt twice the damage to Kadabra, while Kadabra's attacks could only deal basic damage to Sneasel. The outcome of the battle was clear for all to see. Despite being a psychic trainer with a psychic-type Pokémon, their amplified effects, synergy, and tactical understanding far exceeding than that of Sneasel and Cain, it was all in vain. They should never have allowed Sneasel to stack so many stat enhancements. If they hadn't, predicting the outcome of the battle might have been considered difficult because a psychic trainer combined with a psychic Pokémon was far from a simple sum of 1 plus 1. Even after the battle ended, Azure remained somewhat dazed, but the defeated Kadabra lying before him assured him that this was no dream. Cain didn't recall Sneasel to its Pokeball. Instead, he walked straight towards the door with Sneasel, ignoring the astonished, surprised, curious, and scrutinizing gazes of those around him. Azure was still in a daze when Cain reached his side. "Excuse me," Cain said indifferently. Upon hearing Cain's words, Azure finally snapped out of his trance and moved aside, dejectedly giving way. But judging from his hesitant expression, it was evident he wasn't entirely willing to accept defeat. Cain noticed his expression and raised an eyebrow, but he had no intention of explaining why the battle had played out the way it did. You see, Cain always said that the most precious thing in the Pokémon world wasn't rare Pokémon or items. Not even legendary or mythical Pokémon. The most valuable thing was knowledge. Knowledge transformed into power. And that wasn't just a saying. This battle was the perfect example. Cain gently pushed open the door and walked in under everyone's watchful eyes. The Saffron Gym was vast, with the main hall occupying less than a tenth of its total area. Cain walked down a long corridor before finally stepping inside an enormous room filled with various dolls. Some resembling Pokémon, some human-like, and others shaped like furniture. On the wall opposite the corridor was a massive platform with a huge chair made of cloth dolls, but it was currently empty. In the center of the room sat a man and a woman, their eyes fixed on Cain as if they had been waiting for a long time. The man and woman were none other than Sabrina and Umbra, who had been observing Cain and Azure's battle in the main hall. They were now leisurely sipping tea and chatting at a relaxed pace. Upon seeing Cain enter, Sabrina casually waved her hand, gesturing for him to come over. Cain forced a smile, unable to ignore Sabrina's command. He hurried to their table and respectfully said, Mr. Umbra, Miss Sabrina. To his surprise, Sabrina's expression changed as soon as he uttered these words, while Umbra revealed a smile. Hey! Who told you to call him first? Sabrina glared at Cain. Cain was puzzled by Sabrina's reaction. Hee, you lost again. Remember to pay up later. Umbra chuckled and took another sip of his tea. Were the two of them really so idle, betting on whom Cain would address first? Umbra's words enlightened Cain about the situation. Sabrina and Umbra had been betting on who he would call first upon entering the room. So when Cain first entered the room, Sabrina waved at him, beckoning him over. Her actual intention was to make Cain call her name first. What left Cain speechless, though, was that these two renowned and powerful elite trainers were playing such a petty game, and seemed to be enjoying it thoroughly. Cain had no words to contribute to Sabrina and Umbra's bet. After all, he had no place in the conversation when it came to these high-level individuals. You're Cain, right? You just cost me 200,000. You'll pay him that amount later, Sabrina grumbled, puffing her cheeks and pointing at Cain. Cain responded with a bitter smile and a nod, accepting the responsibility for the loss of 200,000 poke dollars, an undeserved misfortune. Cain didn't know why Sabrina targeted him, but Umbra did. It wasn't just because Cain had caused Sabrina to lose the bet. More importantly, he had easily defeated Azure earlier. Sabrina had lost face in front of Umbra. Although Azure wasn't Sabrina's disciple or relative, he was part of her Saffron Gym, and his defeat was embarrassing, especially since nobody understood why he had lost. That was why Sabrina wanted Cain to pay back the 200,000. If Cain knew the whole story, he might feel even more wronged. Umbra waved his hand, indicating it was no big deal. Then, his expression turned serious. Did you bring the thing I asked for? Seeing Umbra's serious demeanor, Sabrina stopped joking around. While she loved to play, it didn't mean she couldn't be serious. When it was time to get down to business, she was all business. Otherwise, she wouldn't be one of Team Rocket's top 3 senior executives. Hearing Umbra finally addressing the matter, Cain breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't particularly want to face Sabrina, who could be so unpredictable, fearing he might offend her at any moment. I have it, Cain said, taking a black box out of his ring. The middle-aged man with the mustache from the Lake of Rage research facility had given it to him. Cain had scanned the box, but only received information about the materials used to make it. He still had no idea what was inside. He carefully placed the black box on the table. Upon seeing it, Sabrina shot up and stared at the box for a moment. Cain then sensed a powerful psychic surge emanating from her. She was likely using her psychic abilities to inspect the box for any issues. After she confirmed its safety, Umbra with his two-fingered hand slowly dragged the box towards himself. After inputting a string of numbers on the box's keypad, it automatically opened with a click. The sturdy black outer shell instantly crumbled to dust, revealing the contents inside. Seeing the box's transformation, Cain felt somewhat relieved. Initially, when he saw the keypad, he thought about having his AI system try to hack the code and see what was inside. However, fearing a potential trap, he refrained from doing so. It was fortunate that he hadn't let his curiosity get the better of him back then and opened it. Otherwise, he might no longer have had a place in Team Rocket. Chapter 154. Chapter 154. After the black box vanished, it revealed a transparent container made of an unknown material. Inside it, 6 test tubes were neatly arranged. When Cain saw these test tubes, his pupils constricted slightly. He recognized the substance inside, elixir of evolution, the very thing he had scanned briefly in the morning. Was the object he had been asked to retrieve the primary research result from the Lake of Rage research base? Cain was somewhat bewildered. Do these things actually work? It was Sabrina who broke the silence. Her expression was serious as she stared at the 6 test tubes in front of Umbra. With her status, she knew the purpose and side effects of the liquid within the tubes. Umbra nodded gently, touching the transparent container, which opened on its own to reveal the 6 test tubes. He took one out and sniffed it lightly. Are you sure you want to use this? I've heard the side effects are quite severe, Sabrina asked again, hesitating. The effectiveness of the elixir of evolution was undeniable, but its side effects were also well known among the higher-ups in Team Rocket. There was simply no solution found yet. I've used nearly half of my savings to acquire these 6 samples, all for the purpose of using them. Umbra's voice was filled with emotion, and a hint of unwavering determination. What Cain didn't know was that Umbra had already suffered severe damage to his strength before his visit to the trial island. Even his body had sustained significant injuries. If he wanted to recover quickly and regain his senior elite-level strength, the pace of his Pokémon's growth would severely limit him. So when he heard about the results from the Lake of Rage research base, he left Trial Island in a hurry and asked Cain to retrieve these samples. Part of the reason was to train Cain, but mainly because he desperately needed them. Each of these samples contained enormous energy and was extremely expensive to produce, making transportation by conventional means impossible. The only options were to fetch them personally or send someone. However, Umbra's strength had been compromised, and he might not be a match for even a newly promoted elite trainer. The association was also closely monitoring his whereabouts. If he dared to venture into the wilderness alone, they would not hesitate to send a group of powerful senior elite trainers to hunt him down. It wasn't just the association. There were quite a few people within Team Rocket who disliked Umbra, and some might be willing to take risks. Therefore, it was impossible for him to go personally. So, he had to send his subordinates to get the samples. However, due to a leak from someone within Team Rocket, he had been ambushed by 2 senior elite trainers, which had led to his mistrust of his teammates. That's why he had taken Cain with him when he left Trial Island. Cain's background was clear, and Umbra had no pressure in relying on him. Moreover, Cain's identity and strength were both relatively weak, which wouldn't arouse suspicion. That's why Umbra had assigned him such an important mission. Cain was oblivious to all this. Umbra didn't tell him either, but Sabrina and Umbra had a good relationship and belonged to the same faction within Team Rocket, so she knew everything. When Sabrina first met Cain, she had planned to snatch his slowpoke immediately. But when she saw the reserve member badge Umbra had given him, she refrained from attacking. Did a Shadow Unit reserve member really hold that much clout? To an executive like Sabrina, there was little difference between him and a common grunt. She held back only because she knew of Umbra's plans and Cain's role in them. In the end, she inadvertently helped Cain awaken his psychic powers. An unexpected turn of events. But if you use these elixirs, I fear you'll struggle to make any progress in the future, Sabrina warned. Although the elixir of evolution could accelerate a Pokémon's growth and help Umbra recover his strength quickly, a Pokémon's life would be halved after using it. The immense resources spent on training them to senior elite level would be in vain, as they would begin to decline within a few short years due to their shortened lifespan. Advancing further would be nearly impossible. Umbra shook his head in resignation. If I don't use them now, I might not even live long enough to reach that point. He paused, then continued, I'll only use 3 of them and train a few with promising aptitude to bridge the gap. If I have enough resources, it should be possible. It sounded like he was trying to reassure Sabrina, but perhaps he was also consoling himself. After all, they had both reached this level and were still relatively young. They both yearned to advance further. Sabrina nodded and consoled him. There's still a chance. It's just that your already limited resources will be depleted even faster. So, I plan to start taking on missions again. I've accepted the one on the Trial Island, Umbra said nonchalantly, sipping his milk tea. Cain stood nearby, not daring to speak. The 2 big shots discussed their affairs openly in front of him. One could say they trusted him, treating Cain as a confidant and ally. But wasn't it also like forcibly dragging him into their battleship? In the future, joining another faction within Team Rocket or even trying to leave Sabrina and Umbra's faction without joining any other would result in relentless suppression and possibly even elimination. Cain's only option would be to grow strong enough under Sabrina and Umbra's wings and establish his own faction. Of course, even if he created his own faction, it would have to maintain a relationship with Sabrina and Umbra's faction. Otherwise, why would they bother helping him? Cain's thoughts drifted. For now, he was just a low-ranking member of Team Rocket. Barely even a grunt. However, through the conversation between Sabrina and Umbra, Cain was able to glean some information. For instance, Umbra's current strength had been compromised, so the continued use of the elixir of evolution would help him regain his power more quickly. Cain speculated that the injury on Umbra's hand when they first met might have something to do with his weakened state. Another relevant point for Cain was that Umbra had taken on this Trial Island mission. What did this imply? It meant that this trial wasn't as simple as it seemed. Even a senior elite trainer like Umbra, who lacked resources, could replenish his supply by accepting this mission. Either the rewards were incredibly generous, or there were significant advantages to be gained while completing the task. In any case, this was not good news for Cain and his fellow trial participants. No wonder Umbra had repeatedly emphasized to Cain that this trial wasn't going to be easy when they were on Trial Island. This Trial Island mission? It's not very enjoyable, so I won't join you. Be careful on your own, Sabrina said, pursing her lips, showing no interest in the task. Chapter 155. Chapter 155. In reality, Sabrina was not much older than Cain, only a few years his senior. However, due to her immense talent and rapid growth in strength, many people chose to overlook her age. Moreover, Sabrina had possessed strong psychic ability since childhood, and few could defy her wishes. Over time, this nurtured her eccentric and unpredictable personality. As she grew older, she gradually became familiar with the ways of the world. Otherwise, her powerful abilities alone wouldn't have been enough to secure her a place as one of Team Rocket's top 3 senior executives. Her close relationship with Umbra was due to his refusal to flatter her because of her strength. Instead, he would stop her from making seemingly immature decisions, which, to some extent, changed her personality. So to Sabrina, Umbra was a combination of a mentor, friend, and older brother figure. As a result, Sabrina cared deeply about Umbra's affairs. However, this Trial Island mission indeed held little interest for her and seemed rather complicated. So, she decided not to get involved. Umbra waved his hand, indicating it was fine. This Trial Island affair was a murky situation, and Sabrina's decision not to participate was for the best. If he had a choice, he wouldn't have wanted to join either. Then, Umbra turned to Cain and said gravely, "As I told you before on Trial Island, this trial isn't simple." Cain listened attentively without interrupting, waiting for Umbra to continue. This trial involves the most significant investment of resources Team Rocket has ever made, and they're taking the selection of participants very seriously. This is because the outcome of this Trial Island mission will impact Team Rocket's expansion into other regions. Expansion into other regions? Cain couldn't help but wonder. Umbra continued, "As you may know, Team Rocket is currently the largest underground organization in the Kanto and Johto regions. However, there are already 7 known regions the Pokémon Association has discovered. So, our ambitious boss won't be content with just ruling the underworld of these 2 regions. Expansion is inevitable. But in other regions, even the association struggles to maintain control, let alone our Team Rocket," Umbra said. "Underground organizations in each region are fiercely territorial. It's impossible to infiltrate them openly. Attempting to do so would likely result in being driven out. So some high-ranking members within the organization suggested sending rookies who just finished their trials to infiltrate other regions. Once they've established themselves, they'll coordinate with Team Rocket for a combined assault, securing our position in that region. Even if we don't become the dominant force in the underground organizations, we should at least have a voice." Umbra took a sip of his milk tea before continuing. It was the first time he'd spoken at such length to Cain. Many of the trialists were planted here by powerful officers within Team Rocket. You must have noticed some of them. They're skilled and hold significant authority. They want to establish their own factions in other regions, so they're already preparing for potential promotions. Cain finally understood why some people on Trial Island seemed odd. Xander was just one who didn't hide his identity, but many others likely concealed both their identities and abilities. Considering you're a dark horse in these trials, if you don't join a faction, you might not even make it off Trial Island. But, why aren't the executives sending anyone to compete as well? Cain asked, questioning Umbra's explanation for the first time. Indeed, this mission was fraught with both danger and opportunity. For the powerful executives, it could be a chance to advance further. Umbra scoffed at the question. They'd all love to send their subordinates to expand their influence. But the boss has his own plans. He decided that the top 3 from Trial Island and 5 executives' right-hand men would compete for one spot. The chosen one would be sent to another region, backed by the organization's resources, to complete the assigned mission. The top 3 from Trial Island and 5 executives' right-hand men? There's quite a power gap, isn't there? Cain couldn't help but ask. Definitely. But do you think those officers won't invest resources? The boss turned a blind eye to them precisely because he wants them to compete with the executives. Some people have been getting too reckless lately. The specific rules and format for the final battle haven't been released, but it's certain that each participant will have more than one Pokémon. Although Trial Island still emphasizes training just one Pokémon, those with backing are surely training other Pokémon in secret. You're not too shabby either. Your Pokémon have decent talent, but their strength needs work. Train hard and you might just have a shot at winning it all. Umbra's words left Cain deep in thought. Turns out the stakes at the Trial Island were much higher than expected. At least 5 high-ranking executives were involved, and it concerned Team Rocket's plans for the next few years. There was also a chance that Giovanni would pay attention to this matter, and those who performed exceptionally might receive his favor. Giovanni was the type of person who would provide opportunities to those with talent, regardless of any hidden agendas they might have. He had the confidence to control them. This was his charm, his charisma. However, Cain felt that Team Rocket's plan couldn't be as simple as sending someone to secure a foothold in a region with an abundance of resources. What if that person had their own ambitions? The resources in question could support an entire force, even if it were a small one. Loyalty to Giovanni might not be enough to suppress any thoughts of betrayal. Cain felt that there was more to it, even if it came directly from Umbra's mouth. Still, this could present an opportunity to establish his own faction. Cain didn't know what Umbra was thinking, but Umbra might have seen through Cain's thoughts. Alright, that's all I'll tell you about the trial mission. Now let's discuss your reward for having helped me with my task, Umbra said, stopping Cain before he could refuse. Don't be so quick to decline. This reward might not necessarily be a good thing for you. With that, Umbra stood up slowly and solemnly, taking a black badge from his clothes. It closely resembled Cain's previous cloud badge, but there were some noticeable differences. This one had an additional stripe. Chapter 156. Chapter 156. This is the official Shadow Unit badge. The stripe represents a junior member of the unit, equivalent to a Team Rocket captain. However, since you haven't completed the trial, you won't have any subordinates assigned to you. So you can choose to recruit them yourself or remain a lone wolf for now. Umbra handed Cain the badge, symbolizing his official membership in the Shadow Unit, and took back the old provisional badge. From that moment on, Cain was a bona fide member of Team Rocket, skipping the rank of lowly grunt and holding the authority of a captain even before officially leaving Trial Island. In Team Rocket's records, Cain's rank had changed from grunt to captain. While still a low-ranking member, it was a step up from the absolute bottom. In principle, captains were assigned 5 subordinates according to Team Rocket's rules. However, Cain only had the authority of a captain, without the associated benefits. If he wanted subordinates, he'd have to recruit them himself. For most people, it might be a hassle, but Cain would rather recruit his own members than accept those assigned by the organization. After all, he had a considerable faction on Trial Island under his command. Can I recruit from the Trial Island's participants? Cain asked, since Team Rocket had invested heavily in this batch of trainees. Umbra glanced at Cain with a meaningful look and replied, "You can." Umbra was well aware of Cain's activities on Trial Island, as the chief instructor of Team Rocket, Viper, was one of his good friends. The relationships and rivalries among the young participants on Trial Island somewhat resembled the current internal situation of Team Rocket. As long as a powerful and authoritative figure was in charge, they would only fight behind the scenes, not daring to confront each other openly. Cain likely had his own group of minions on Trial Island, but it was unclear how many would still follow his orders after his long absence. Nevertheless, this batch of trainees had been carefully selected by Team Rocket. Even the ordinary citizens among them had higher overall qualities than their predecessors, like Cain himself. Moreover, the starting Pokémon given to the trainees this time had significantly higher potential. Previous batches started with orange aptitude Pokémon, but this time, they began with yellow. Some lucky ones even received green aptitude Pokémon, and Cain was among them. In short, the trainees on Trial Island had great potential. If Cain could recruit them, they'd be ready to take on significant responsibilities in a few years. And if he could become the ultimate winner and recruit several top performers from Trial Island, he'd have a perfect opportunity to establish his influence in a new region. The key was to have enough strength. Your rank within Team Rocket has changed, and you now have access to the Shadow Unit's mission system, Umbra told Cain. You can check it out if you're interested, but know your limits. Focus on improving your strength and winning the final competition. Cain nodded in understanding. Umbra was right. Even if he completed many missions and earned resources now, it would pale in comparison to gaining Team Rocket support to establish a force in other regions. Moreover, Cain didn't plan on taking on difficult tasks. If they were along the way, that was fine, but if they required him to spend days or even weeks on troublesome missions, it wouldn't be worth it. After all, there was only a month and a half left until the final trial on Trial Island. Time was money. What's the prize for coming in first on Trial Island? Cain hesitated for a moment before asking his final question. He was particularly interested in the starter Pokémon awarded to the top trial participant. Umbra gave Cain a half-smile and replied, "Do you even have the resources to train another Pokémon from scratch?" Cain's Sneasel had potential, but it was clear that it was a recently caught Pokémon, lacking the desired harmony with its trainer. "If you want one now, I can give it to you, but if you wait until the end of the final trial, the starter Pokémon might have an even higher aptitude. It's up to you." Umbra presented Cain with a choice. Take a decent starter Pokémon now or wait a month and a half for the chance to get a top-tier one. In truth, Cain didn't need to make a choice. He already had plenty of Pokémon to train, and in a few days, his Skorupi would enter its growth stage. If he were to add another Pokémon now, the outcome might be that neither Skorupi nor the starter Pokémon would be useful by the time of the final trial. Instead, it would be better to focus on training Skorupi, who might catch up in the remaining month and a half. By then, along with his Miltank, Cain would have 6 main Pokémon able to battle, barely enough to handle various situations. So Cain slowly shook his head, signaling there was no need to choose. The answer was crystal clear and didn't require deliberation. Seeing Cain's refusal, Umbra nodded in satisfaction. Not everyone could resist the allure of a starter Pokémon. At least Cain's performance on an overall scale was satisfactory to him. Ever since Umbra was injured in an ambush by the Pokémon Association and barely escaped, most of his trusted subordinates were either dead or incapacitated. Those who survived either lost their strength or were no longer completely trustworthy. Although Cain's strength was weaker than Umbra preferred, he had a certain level of trust in him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have shared so much information today. Recruiting Cain as a subordinate was one of the purposes of their meeting. Umbra had not concealed his conversation with Sabrina from Cain, and he figured that someone as clever as Cain would know how to make the right choice. All right, I've told you so much today to let you know that you should focus on training and preparing for the final trial. The rewards will exceed your imagination. Umbra concluded his conversation with Cain. Having waited impatiently, Sabrina waved her hand and used her psychic powers to teleport Cain out of the Saffron Gym after Umbra had finished speaking. Only after Cain had left did Sabrina look at Umbra seriously and say, "So, you've settled on him? While he's cunning and calculating, his strength is lacking. It doesn't seem like your style." Umbra gave a mysterious smile, avoiding Sabrina's question directly. "He's not bad. But aren't you going to send someone to stir things up?" Sabrina waved her hand dismissively. "I won't interfere with them. If they want to go, they'll go on their own. I won't offer any support." Chapter 157. Chapter 157. In the blink of an eye, Cain found himself teleported out by Sabrina. When he opened his eyes again, he was in an unfamiliar alley. Stepping out of the alley, he looked around and sighed in relief upon discovering that he's still in Saffron City. After asking a passerby for directions, Cain found out his current location. Sabrina's Saffron Gym was in the northeast corner of Saffron City, but Cain only learned after asking around that he was now in the southwest corner. This was Saffron City, not a small place like Mahogany Town. Sabrina had casually teleported him all the way here. If she had wanted to, she could have sent Cain to a forest outside Saffron City just as easily. If it were an ordinary forest, it wouldn't be a problem, but the thought of appearing in a densely populated forest sent shivers down his spine. Even if he managed to escape, it would surely leave him worse for wear. He couldn't help but shudder. These powerful psychic trainers were truly terrifying. To resist their psychic powers, either one's dark-type Pokémon had to be strong enough to withstand them, or they had to enhance their own psychic abilities. Thinking of his own psychic talent, Cain shook his head helplessly. It seemed more reliable to train his Pokémon instead. Cain hailed a cab and headed straight for the nearest entrance to the black market. Finding a secluded corner with no one around, he changed into a new set of clothes, put on his unique skin mask, and donned a large black robe before re-entering Saffron City's black market. Like raindrops falling into a lake, Cain's arrival went unnoticed in the bustling black market. He first went to the Pokémon trading area, visited several different shops, and sold the 10 Pokémon he'd taken from the association trainers at a low price. He'd been worried about being attacked if he released them, so he hadn't fed them, which had further lowered their selling price. 10 Pokémon with decent aptitude and levels were ultimately sold for only 1.5 million, a very low price. But this was Cain's highest profit since his first visit to the black market, when he'd sold the Earth Essence milk. It just went to show, murder and arson brought in the most money. Cain was lucky, having successfully ambushed and defeated 2 intermediate association trainers. Even now, his shoulder still throbbed with pain from the wound he'd received. Such an opportunity was rare and precious. If given the choice, Cain would rather not make the money and avoid facing 2 intermediate-level trainers from the association. He knew that if he had slipped up even slightly, death would have been certain. Thankfully, the outcome turned out to be favorable. With his previous savings of 3.45 million Poke dollars, plus the 1.5 million he just earned, and after selling some miscellaneous items and stocking up on essential medicine for wilderness survival and battles, Cain now had exactly 5 million Poke dollars. 5 million Poke dollars might be a fortune that an ordinary family could never accumulate in their lifetime, but for a Pokémon trainer, especially those with lofty ambitions, it was merely a drop in the bucket along their journey to greatness. A drop in the bucket. The money could barely cover Cain's current needs. After hearing Umbra's explanation of the trial mission, he felt a sense of urgency. No wonder he had no inkling of it in his previous life, when he was ranked only in the 30s in the trials, merely struggling to survive. However, in this life, he was almost guaranteed to rank in the top 3 of the trial island. His opponents could be the trusted disciples of the powerful Team Rocket officers or the direct subordinates nurtured by high-ranking executives. Although the officers' positions were much lower than those of the executives, they had their loyal and well-trained confidants, while the executives' direct subordinates were numerous. Regardless of which category they belonged to, they all had more advantages than Cain. What did he have? Apart from being a junior member of the Shadow Unit and having the title of a Team Rocket captain, he had no tangible benefits. Even though Umbra had hinted at taking him under his wing, he hadn't provided any resources or assistance. Cain had to rely on himself, except for occasionally invoking Umbra's name. Therefore, if possible, Cain wanted to stretch every penny as far as it could go. With his plans for the money in mind, he entered the Pokémon food store he had visited once before. Just like last time, he didn't spare a glance at the sought-after mid- to high-grade Pokeblocks that others coveted. Instead, he focused on the essential materials required to craft high-grade Pokeblocks. The custom high-grade Pokeblock formulas for Miltank and Sneasel had already been analyzed and configured by the AI system. Cain only needed to purchase the materials according to the formulas. Although Miltank was a normal-type Pokémon, the materials most suitable for her high-grade Pokeblocks were not the same as those for other normal-type Pokémon. According to the system's explanation, it was the branches and roots rich in grass-type energy that were ideal for Miltank. Once ground and infused into the Pokeblocks, they would be perfect for her. So, Cain purchased an assortment of plant roots and branches rich in grass-type energy. For Sneasel, he bought several decades-old semi-finished never-melt ice. Though wearing them wouldn't provide much benefit to Pokémon, incorporating them into the Pokeblocks would replenish a significant amount of ice-type energy. In addition to these, there were remnants of dark-type Pokémon Exuvii, similar to the materials used for making Murkrow's Pokeblocks. Upon Cain's observation and the AI system scan, it was determined that Sneasel's ice-type talent surpassed its dark-type talent. Adhering to Cain's principle of maximizing strengths, he would adjust the proportions of ice-type materials to be greater than dark-type materials when crafting advanced, high-grade Pokeblocks for Sneasel. Sometimes, balanced development might make a Pokémon more powerful, but more often than not, it leads to mediocrity across the board. Cain always encouraged bringing out a Pokémon's greatest strengths. By emphasizing their strengths, their weaknesses could be minimized. Then, a slight compensation would suffice to prevent them from becoming fatal flaws. Purchasing these materials cost Cain 600,000 Pokedollars, just for 1 month's worth of Pokeblock consumption. Training Pokémon was challenging, and raising them well was even more difficult. And this was with Cain being able to craft advanced Pokeblocks himself. For ordinary people who had to buy them, the expense would be even greater. Chapter 158. Chapter 158. Of course, most civilians couldn't afford advanced Pokeblocks. Their limit was usually mid-level Pokeblocks. So as time passed, the gap between civilian trainers and nobles or direct lineage trainers from the association would only widen. Unperturbed by his expenses, Cain headed straight for the Pokémon attribute, type, item store. It was Cain's first time in such a store in this life. The items sold here could enhance a Pokémon's attributes. Naturally, the prices were also exorbitant. Cain's goal was to buy one or several items that could enhance Ghastly and Skorupi's poison capabilities. After perusing the entire store, he chose a poison gas residue from a deceased elite-level Weezing and a complete venom sac from a deceased elite-level Arbok. Both items were highly toxic. Even a slight touch would be lethal to ordinary people, even if they possessed an antidote, unless they could use it within 5 seconds. As both items were in pristine condition and significant parts of elite Pokémon remains, their value was rather high. The 2 items cost a total of 1 million Pokedollars. These items required long-term use and couldn't be consumed by Ghastly or Skorupi all at once. Such potent toxins would be unbearable even for a Pokémon, and so they would have to endure a month-long companionship with these hazardous substances. In the end, Cain had spent 1.6 million Pokedollars, with 3.4 million remaining from his initial 5 million. After leaving the Pokémon Attribute item store, he headed to the Pokémon TM store. Previously in the Goldenrod Game Corner, Cain had used his AI system to win a Toxic TM and 2 Protect TMs, but he hadn't yet had a chance to use them on his Pokémon. This saved him quite a bit of money. Among Cain's Pokémon, besides the Fiero mainly used for transport, Miltank, Sneasel, and Skorupi still needed to learn Protect, a vital move. So Cain only needed to buy 1 more Protect TM. Fortunately, Protect was a common move outside of Trial Island, and its price wasn't too high. 1 Protect TM cost 150,000 Pokedollars. Protect was an essential move for every Pokémon. As long as their levels were similar, this move provided a brief immunity. Besides Protect, Hidden Power was also indispensable. Cain's current Pokémon had specialized attributes and didn't have targeted moves for every type. So, a lottery-like Hidden Power became a move that could potentially change the game. Cain had used it multiple times in previous battles with satisfactory results. Even if they couldn't obtain the appropriate attribute, Cain would still have his Pokémon learn the move. 3 of his Pokémon, excluding Murkrow, Slowpoke, and Ghastly, needed a Hidden Power TM. Each Hidden Power TM cost 200,000 Pokedollars, totaling 600,000 for 3. So, 1 Protect TM and 3 Hidden Power TMs amounted to 750,000 Pokedollars. Afterward, Cain began selectively pairing moves for each Pokémon, starting with Murkrow. Since it was the first Pokémon to accompany Cain, it had learned the most moves from TMs. Therefore, for the time being, it would be sufficient for it to learn only Taunt. A Taunt TM was priced at 250,000 Pokedollars. Next were Slowpoke's moves. Slowpoke was a dual-type Pokémon, Water and Psychic, but it could also learn moves from other types. For instance, Fire, Ice and Ground. Cain already had Sneasel for Ice-type moves, so that could wait. He didn't have a Fire-type Pokémon, so he initially planned to teach Slowpoke a fire-type move to compensate for this shortcoming. However, the only fire-type attack moves Slowpoke could learn from TMs were Flamethrower and Fire Blast. One an advanced fire-type move, the other a powerful fire-type ultimate attack. Neither of the TMs was cheap. Considering the money Cain had left, he had no choice but to reluctantly let it go. Cain spent 300,000 Poke Dollars on the ground-type move Bulldoze, which somewhat balanced out the attributes in the team. Next up was Ghastly. Cain had already purchased an elite-level poison gas item for Ghastly, ensuring that its poison-type attribute would be fully utilized. Fortunately, the more expensive Toxic TM was already in Cain's possession, so he opted to pair Ghastly up with Taunt, which would enable it to adapt more flexibly when facing various Pokémon in future battles. Acquiring another Taunt TM set them back 250,000 Poke Dollars. Then there was Miltank, who had never used any TMs before. Apart from the previously purchased moves Protect and Hidden Power, Cain chose the moves Substitute and Brick Break for Miltank, considering its battle style. As a normal-type Pokémon, Miltank could learn various types of moves, but with limited funds, Cain opted for the 200,000 Poke Dollar priced Substitute and the 350,000 Poke Dollar priced Brick Break. Substitute could be alternated with Miltank's Milk Drink, virtually eliminating the side effects of Substitute. Brick Break was chosen based on Miltank's combat style. It loved close-quarters combat, and none of Cain's current Pokémon knew any fighting-type moves. Learning Brick Break would fill that gap in the team. In summary, Cain's move selection aimed to suit each Pokémon's combat style while temporarily compensating for the team's weaknesses through learning different types of moves. With only a month and a half left, Cain couldn't afford to search for more Pokémon to fill the gaps. Thus, they had to rely on the Pokémon's move types, attributes, as a temporary solution. After Miltank's move set was completed, Cain was left with 1,300,000 Poke Dollars. Truly, money flowed like water. In just under 2 hours, Cain had spent 3,700,000 Poke Dollars. Moreover, he still had 2 Pokémon whose moves needed to be set up, but it seemed the remaining money wouldn't be enough for both. Cain had to prioritize buying only the most crucial TMs. Chapter 159. Chapter 159. After Miltank came Sneasel. It could currently use 4 Ice-type moves, but being able to use them didn't necessarily mean mastering them. So Cain decided to hold off on adding more Ice-type moves until Sneasel had fully mastered the current 4. That meant Ice-type moves were off the table for Sneasel's TMs. Cain had initially planned to buy a Taunt TM for Sneasel as well, but suddenly remembered that Sneasel was a Pokémon that naturally learned Taunt, saving Cain some money. In the end, Cain bought the 300,000 Poke Dollar priced fighting-type move Low Sweep for Sneasel, considering its close combat advantage when battling certain Pokémon. Low Sweep directly targeted the opponent's Pokémon's legs, and if executed with enough power, it could reduce their speed. With Sneasel's strength in speed, lowering its opponent's speed would give it an even greater advantage. In addition to Low Sweep, Cain purchased the Dark-type move, Dark Pulse, worth 350,000 Poke Dollars for Sneasel. Sneasel, after all, had dual attributes of Dark and Ice. Although its Ice-type talent was stronger, it still needed to master some Dark-type moves. Sneasel's previous Dark-type moves were only effective at close range, but Dark Pulse compensated for its long-range weaknesses. Cain spent a total of 650,000 Poke Dollars on 2 TMs for Sneasel. This left only 650,000 Poke Dollars for Skorupi. Skorupi was a dual-type poison and bug Pokémon, but once it evolved into Drapion, its attributes would change to poison and dark. Moreover, Skorupi's sensitivity to other attributes was incredibly strong, as evidenced by its automatic learning of the elemental fangs, Thunderfang, Firefang, and Icefang, after evolution. Skorupi had the highest aptitude among Cain's current Pokémon, even slightly surpassing Sneasel, which had joined Cain mid-journey, unlike Skorupi, who had hatched from an egg and enjoyed the best resources from the start. With its sniper ability, Cain had high expectations for Skorupi. To fully develop Skorupi's poison-type attribute, Cain spared no expense, purchasing a poison sac from a deceased elite-level Arbok. This influenced Cain's choice of TMs to buy. He spent 350,000 Poke Dollars on the physical poison-type move, Poison Jab, a close-range move that would allow Skorupi to utilize its strengths in close combat. Then after purchasing another Taunt TM for 250,000 Poke Dollars for Skorupi, the Pokemon TM shopping spree concluded successfully. With that, Cain returned to a nearly penniless state, having only 50,000 Poke Dollars left. This was only a rough supplement for his Pokemon's movesets, and apart from the mandatory Protect and Hidden Power, each Pokemon had only learned about 2 new moves. It was far from Cain's ideal target. Thus, under the envious gaze of the Pokemon TM store staff, Cain paid with his card, put the numerous TMs in his ring, pulled on his wide hood, and vanished into the crowd. Naturally, Cain's spending spree at the Pokemon store caught the attention of many onlookers. So as Cain left, some individuals began to tail him. Cain had no patience for those who wanted to take advantage of him. After leading them on a chase through the winding streets of the black market, he shook off most of his pursuers. As for the few who were persistent, Cain lured them into secluded corners and dealt with them accordingly. These people weren't particularly skilled, but they were persistent trackers. They thought no one could discover them. If it were the old Cain, he probably wouldn't have dealt with them. But after spending a considerable sum, Cain found himself rather broke. The unsuspecting pursuers practically handed over their money. After dispatching 3 relentless pursuers, Cain gained 100,000 poke dollars in cash and various other miscellaneous items, which he later sold for another 100,000 poke dollars. His wallet was replenished, bringing his total balance back to 250,000 poke dollars. No wonder they say crime pays. To avoid further trouble, Cain had dealt with these people in the shadows, quickly and decisively. Then with all the pursuers dealt with, Cain confidently left the black market. He changed back into his association attire and took a cab to the Pokémon Center. By now it was already evening and time to prepare for dinner. Fortunately, he stayed at the Pokémon Center, which had a dedicated dining hall. Cain splurged and reserved a private room at the dining hall. He ordered a lavish spread for his Pokémon, satisfying their cravings. During dinner, Skorupi woke up again. Seeing Cain's other Pokémon feasting, Skorupi couldn't help but join in, trying food other than Miltank's milk for the first time and finding the taste unexpectedly delightful. Though Skorupi didn't eat much before drinking a bottle of milk and contentedly returning to Cain's shoulder. It was evident that Skorupi was on the verge of a growth spurt as Cain could feel the increasing weight on his shoulder. According to the data gathered by the AI system, Skorupi's stats were stabilizing. By tomorrow, or the day after at the latest, Skorupi would officially enter its growth period. And that would mark the end of Skorupi's leisurely life. Chapter 160. Chapter 160. Sure enough, when Cain woke up the next morning, Skorupi, previously the size of a palm, had grown to the size of a basketball. Under the AI system scan, Scorpier's data showed changes as well. Pokémon. Skorupi. Light blue. Gender. Male. Level 5. Type. Poison plus bug. Ability. Sniper. Held item. None. Egg moves. Screech. Agility. Poison tail. Pursuit. Basic moves. Bite. Poison sting. Leer. Knock off. Taunt moves. None. TM moves. None. Having grown from level 1 to level 5, Skorupi had become a battle-ready Pokémon. When Skorupi woke up, he felt somewhat uneasy in his larger body. He glanced at Cain's shoulder and then at his own body, realizing that their sizes seemed somewhat disproportionate. Cain crouched down and gently stroked Skorupi's shell, smiling as he asked, "Skorupi, are you ready to start battling? Are you prepared?" Skorupi found Cain's touch comforting, and he gradually forgot about his size difference. When Cain took out a great ball, Skorupi voluntarily stepped forward and touched the center of the Pokeball, which absorbed him in a flash of red light. There was no struggle. With a dong, Skorupi was officially captured by Cain. When Skorupi was released again, he officially became one of Cain's main battle Pokémon, no longer just a growing infant. It was undeniable that bug-type Pokémon had relatively short growth cycles. Skorupi had rapidly matured in just a short time. For other Pokémon, their juvenile stage would last at least a month. However, compared to Beedrill and Butterfree, Skorupi's growth was considerably slower. Cain recalled the Weedle egg he had sold to Umbra on Trial Island. In just a week, the egg had hatched and grown into a Beedrill. Even though Umbra had accelerated its growth, it was still a testament to the incredible speed at which bug-type Pokémon matured. But once Beedrill reached level 10, it would complete its final evolution. Wild Beedrill would probably evolve at even lower levels. Skorupi would only evolve into Drapion at level 40, which was considered very slow among bug types. In Cain's memory, the only bug-type Pokémon that evolved after level 40 besides Drapion were Armaldo and Volcarona. These two Pokémon had immense power after evolving. Especially Volcarona, which was worshipped as a deity in some regions of the Unova region. Many regarded it as the embodiment of the sun, which spoke volumes about its strength. However, it wasn't necessarily true that the higher the evolution level, the better. Yet, it was undeniable that the higher the evolution level, the more significant the power transformation upon evolution. The most typical examples were the pseudo-legendary Pokémon from various regions. Almost none of them completed their final evolution before level 40. Their immense power after evolving went without saying. So, although Skorupi was a bug-type Pokémon, his potential was still promising. With Skorupi now officially caught, Cain resolved his last concern and left the Pokémon Center in Saffron City with Slowpoke in tow. Since Umbra had given him the opportunity to strengthen his Pokémon and hadn't assigned any specific tasks, Cain decided to make the most of the month and a half to power level his Pokémon as much as possible. Without knowing the rules for the trial battles, Cain knew he couldn't focus solely on training one or a few Pokémon. Instead, he had to train all of them as much as possible to prepare for the final trial. Cain came up with a suitable plan, dividing the month and a half into 3 half-month phases. For the first half-month, Cain aimed to bring all his Pokémon up to a similar power level, with Skorupi and Ghastly as the primary focus. Of course, being the primary focus didn't mean the other Pokémon would be neglected. It was just a slight prioritization. During the second half-month, Cain would take his Pokémon deep into the forest for a wilderness survival experience. By facing various unexpected situations, the Pokémon would develop their ability to adapt and respond. In the real world, opportunities for lethal attacks were rare. Only by acclimating the Pokémon to battles on the edge of death could they face Team Rocket's trials. The third half-month would involve battling numerous trainers to get a feel for fighting against them. This would give the Pokémon a sense of what the final trial's rotation-style battles might be like. However, these were just Cain's preliminary plans, and he would adapt as needed when facing unexpected situations. For now, he would stick to this plan and set his sights on Mauville City in the Hoenn region. It was said that Mauville City had a large number of battle-ready trainers and a variety of Pokémon from all regions, making it a gathering place for Pokémon battles. This aligned with the third step of Cain's plan, so he chose Mauville City as his destination. There were 2 ways to reach Mauville City. One option was to take a direct flight from Saffron City, which would be quick and relatively safe. Alternatively, he could first travel to Vermilion City, then take a ferry to Slateport City in the Hoenn region, and finally head to Mauville City. Slateport City was the 9th largest city in the Pokémon world, highly developed and only slightly less prosperous than Saffron City. After reaching Slateport City, Cain would travel north through a stretch of wilderness before arriving at Mauville City. For Cain, the direct flight option held no appeal, as it offered no training opportunities. So, he decided to walk to Vermilion City and take the ferry to Slateport City from there. This solo journey would not only conceal his identity but also allow targeted training for his Pokémon. A win-win situation. Traveling light, Cain stored all his belongings in his storage space, ready to embark on his adventure. This time, Cain had stocked a particularly large amount of supplies in his storage ring, nearly filling its entire 5 cubic meter capacity. After all, he didn't know when he would next have the chance to enter a bustling city's black market. It was better to be fully prepared for the journey. Leaving the Pokémon Center, Cain hailed a cab and headed straight to the southernmost intersection of Saffron City and Route 6. Passing by the famous Pokémon breeding house once again, he decided not to enter, choosing instead to walk around it. Perhaps the old couple had already discovered his deception towards their granddaughter. To avoid an awkward encounter, he skirted the breeding house and officially set foot on Route 6.